Here we go. Yep, good to go. Awesome, awesome, awesome. Nice little 4-hour video here. I'm sure it won't take too long, right? I put it on 1.25x just for the sake of my sanity, but one sec. Let me just do this real quick. Do that. Beep bop boop. And there you go. Let's grab this guy, put his ass down here. Grab this guy and put his ass down here. Do that. Kill that guy. Boom. Go over here. Bada ba boom pow, even, dare I say. And boom. There we go. Ay, ay, ay. Not the stream title I was expecting, you know? This video is a great title. I'm not gonna lie. I have been clickbaited. Also, Fox, Phantom, hello. It's almost CEO, Grand Blue Grand Finals. You're gonna have to bear with me here. No, that's fair, that's fair. I did see that Monarch made it top 8 through loser's side, despite getting shot in the head by Gabba early on. You know, still, we'll take the Diva community will take the spiritual W over the Materas regardless. What's up, Harihara? Apollo, hello, hello. But yeah, so this video is 4 hours and 13 minutes long. In the interest of my own sanity, because I'm used to watching, like, I watch this video, I put it on double speed. I might put it on 2.5. That's just the kind of man I am. In the end, you know what? I could do this. Let's do 1.2x. He opened the notebook, Brick. I'm sorry. I don't know if he beat Gabba on the way back. Did he like run it back? Did he get a chance to get revenge on Gabba and kill him? Regardless, Monarch is Monarch. It is unsurprising to see him doing well. Oh, I've forgotten my phone somewhere. That is mildly concerning. I also just found out that Niger officially banned asexuality. What the fuck? How would you know? Right, like, besides the fact that obviously that is just like not okay and insane and like a violation of human rights, it's also like, you know, if someone is being like if someone is gay and and there's like a woman kissing a woman or a man kissing a man or something like that, like, I guess you can sort of tell, like, in the sense that there are actions that can like determine that they are you can criminalize. How do you criminalize asexuality? You know what I mean? Like, just in practice, like, what, besides the fact that this is a ridiculous policy, what is the praxis on this? Do you just imprison anyone who like doesn't have sex in long enough? I guess. Maybe. I don't know, because I mean, my ass would be going to jail by that logic. Hey, are we waiting for Grand Finals? Good evening. No, we are not going to be watching Grand Finals, but I did see BSG. Wasn't Grand Finals in progress? I thought I saw the bracket and it said BSG was in winner's side grants. Oh, waiting for Grand Finals. Right, not top 8. So true. What do they have in common? Well, I don't like them. That, you know, not liking either. That is actually fair. Hold on one sec. Let me go find my phone, and then we will get started on this here video. Just in case I get any, like, emergency calls or anything during stream. You know how it is. Shit burns down wall. All right, hello. Phone gets. Hi there. How's it going? That's what I'm saying, man. The math is a math thing. Yeah, I don't. How do you ban? Like, what actions? What do you criminalize? You're a nation that's banned asexuality. Okay, awesome. Well, not awesome. You know, sure. What? How do you? What does that mean? I mean, obviously, I guess if anyone like openly identifies as asexual, I guess you could throw them in prison or something. But what if they're lying? Like, what if they joke about it? I don't. Seems very silly. Seems. I mean, it's silly for multiple reasons, but it seems particularly silly. It's like banning not liking Pringles. You know what I mean? It's like, oh, I just found out that Niger officially banned not you have to like Pringles. Not liking Pringles is a criminal offense. It's like, oh, cool. Yeah, sure. Why not? I guess. How do you know if someone doesn't like Pringles? Just because they aren't eating Pringles often enough? I don't know. I don't know. Anyway, this video is 4 hours long. Mild blasphemy. Mild blasphemy. I will be putting it on 1.25x. I hope it's not. If you're used to watching your videos fully on 1x, then I apologize. I'm more of a, like, me personally, I'm like, dude, I've not, this is the first video I've seen from the Spice Rack individual, but like, if someone doesn't talk particularly fast, like if it's not like my ass or something like that, I'm usually like, I'm like a 2.5x girly. Sometimes I could be a 2.75x girly. On some people who like speak real slow, I could even be a 3x girly. We're not gonna do that because none of you will be able to fucking understand the video, I don't think. But we will do it on 1.25x, which, you know, what does that mean? If it's a 4 hour, 15-minute video, it'll take about 3 hours, something like that. This is a video that got linked in the required reading section of the Discord, which I thought was very interesting. The title's amazing, right? Oh, you can't see it. The title is Revolution, Fascism, and Magic the Gathering. I don't know. Honestly, I feel like 2.75x speed is lunacy. I don't know what to tell you, man. I got used to 2x for so long. I have YouTube Premium, you may notice. It's literally just because I needed to go faster than 2x. And it was the only way to do it. I'm not, you know, and I mean, I do spend a lot of time on YouTube, so it's kind of worth, but anyway, I mean, out of the three of these, I genuinely might know the least about Magic the Gathering at this point, which is interesting, but I don't know if this is a Magic video. I don't know if this is a video that is like using Magic as an analog to explain these concepts. I honestly don't really know what this video is about at all. But I've just, the title has grabbed me. Someone said it was a good video to watch. Let's get going.
During lockdown in 2020,
let me know if audio's too low or too high or whatever.
TV show. Hate watching.
Let me start up. I didn't hear.
Myself and my housemate Rowan watched the Snowpiercer TV show. Hate watching was one of the things I really got into during that year.
Is it too quiet? Too loud?
Celiac disease. We made a great game of watching The Crown, for example, and shouting, "Get her! Get her! She's right there!" at the screen whenever a normal person got within distance of the Queen. But we didn't go into watching Snowpiercer with that.
I'm gonna try not to pause this too often, by the way. In
Ho's original film, the world building,
this is the one where they eat people at the front of the train, right? Yeah, the rich people like eat the poor people or something in some apocalypse.
Too on the nose or too up your ass obtuse.
Yeah.
However, when we started watching the TV,
what I was gonna say is I'm gonna try not to pause too much in you know, opposition to what I normally do, just because this video is so incredibly long. And it would actually take us 9 hours to get through if I pause this much. So I'm going to talk over it at some point. So I'm going to also try, you know, it's like having a conversation. You find the moment where the other person isn't talking to insert your thoughts. I'm going to do a little dance.
Discovered it's centered around an ex-cop working within the system to solve a murder whilst tempering the desires of the revolutionary underclass. We rapidly switched to hate watch mode.
Ah, I see. Okay.
This moment in episode 1 specifically,
they completely like
the seal.
They tamed it a lot, right?
Is a fortress to class. Maybe it
this is a little quiet. I need to turn this up.
I know writers who use subtext in a
Hold on.
Maybe it is a fortress.
that broke the seal.
Wilford's train is a fortress to class. Maybe it is perpetual.
I know writers who use subtext, and they're all cowards.
That was 5 years ago, and also began my interest in making a video about depictions of revolution in Western media.
The show is a pale imitation of the movie? That's fair. I've seen the movie. I thought it was pretty good.
Previously, and so I began delving deeper into my books.
Aether Revolt.
The project had been shelved for some time in the interim as my life changed, but then two things happened which made me pick it up again.
What's
Firstly,
going on this green
Wizards of the
screen, by
Coast
the way?
released Aether Drift, a set that potentially unbeknownst to most Magic players had world building and
Really quick, Wizards of the Coast, a company that I can trust to have my revolutionary ideals in mind. I'm sure I listen. I've not seen this video. I know nothing about Magic the Gathering or Aether Revolt. I don't really trust Wizards of the Coast. I can't imagine that this is going to be a very positive review of their portrayal of these ideas. Maybe, but I don't think so.
Previous exploration of revolution, a theme masterfully intertwined with its flagship aesthetic of a fantastical Grand Prix. And the second thing that happened was...
I'm sorry? What? Hold on.
Freedom. He's a dictator. He's a dictator. A lot of people are saying maybe we like a dictator.
So, yeah.
Sure.
Let's talk about Revolt.
Okay. Again, let me know if it's too loud. Or too quiet.
A German worker enjoys more political freedom than he did under the Kaiser. The November Revolt gave to German workers in general, no matter to what political party they
Maybe I can turn on some auto-generated
belonged,
subtitles too.
more freedom, and therefore it can be defined as a revolution in the proper sense of the word.
Rating favorably on the formation of the Weimar Republic in comparison to the Russian October Revolution, the Swiss Democratic Party had crushed the German Communist Party uprising and executed its leadership 3 years previously. The following federal election will be the first to feature the National Socialist German Workers' Party, also known as
Hello,
the Nazis.
people of the internet. I'm Spice8Rack, aka Socially Liberal, Fiscally Terrifying, and welcome back to the channel. This video is going to be split into 4 chapters. Firstly, an examination of Aether Drift and media depicting revolution. Secondly, an exploration of actual historical revolutions and revolutionary theory. Thirdly, the cool zone. And finally, on where we are now and what you might be able to do yourself.
What the fuck is the cool zone? I guess it's what you have to do when your video is 4 hours long, huh?
I need to lay that out here and now because the script for this video is over 100 pages long, and I would prefer people skip to the parts they're more interested in.
Oh my god!
If they don't have 4 hours to spare. I'm recording.
I have 4 hours to spare.
The video together, of course, so I don't know if 4 hours is going to be an exaggeration or wishful thinking on my editor's behalf.
He kind of just got it in one, honestly.
Something tells me it's the latter. Before we talk about Aether Drift, as you might expect, it's important we establish what happened in Magic leading up to it. From late 2016 to early 2017, Kaladesh and Aether Revolt respectively were released. Kaladesh, as it was known then, was
but this person did a video on Aether Drift, one of the weirdest Magic expansions ever.
World. First shown in Magic Origins, the plane was defined by 2 clear world-building pillars.
Would be surprised if Elon is a Nazi?
On the former, the plane was
he's a techno-fascist, at least. If he's not a Nazi, he's a fascist by another name.
On the other hand, that
at best,
was tightly controlled.
he's a different kind of fascist.
Products and the natural aether which allowed for these creations kept under the thumb of a despotic government, the consulate. Magic, too, was outlawed. No, not the game, the metaphysical concept. I need to not ad-lib. The script's fine.
Excuse me?
Fine. Kaladesh native Chandra Nalar's innate pyromancy becomes the inciting incident of her family's flight from the law. Hunted both as renegades who skirted the proper channels to create
Magic is banned in this region,
technology, and now also for harboring a magic user. Chandra's father is assassinated, her mother disappears, and she is captured and slated for execution. However, on the day, her spark ignites, melting the face of Baral, the consulate's chief executioner, as she planeswalks. Does anyone smell bacon? When we returned to the plane in 2016, the consulate was still in power, and access to Aether was restricted and controlled by corrupt government officials. The simmering resistance to this rule finally bubbled over when Tezzeret, Magic the Gathering's Grimmer Wormtongue, I guess that gag doesn't work now that Magic the Gathering has Grimmer Wormtongue in it. Tezzeret enacts a public spectacle of dueling Chandra's mum, Pia, revealed to be alive and leading revolutionary undercurrents on the plane. He uses that event as cover to initiate the mass expropriation.
I'm like trying to pay attention. A lot of this Magic shit is completely unfamiliar to me, so I'm just like, okay, I'm trying to bounce between, like, follow all the lore. I'm only very, in the faintest terms, familiar with planeswalkers and planeswalking in the first place. But she turned into a nuke, I guess. Blue Bounce Teferi players love Hitler?
Creation
Possible.
of artisanal property from
Possibly.
the artificer contributors to Kaladesh's Inventors Fair.
Uh-huh.
This, in of itself, is a ruse designed to sow mass confusion and uproar so that Tezzeret can steal the one truly important invention, the planar bridge, an artifact that can allow inorganic matter to travel between two planes. His successful heist of the device being the first concrete step towards Nicol Bolas's reascension plan in War of the Spark.
What are we?
However,
What
the
I?
revolution that Tezzeret's actions ignited grew far out of his estimations and confounded his consulate benefactors. Renegades rose up in resistance to this sort of thing, including Pianalar, upstart elves, fleeting Aetherborn, sky pirates, and furries, all with the aim of deposing the system which had stolen their stuff and which was restricting free expression. Both
Bro doesn't know nickel balls. I no. My balls are made of flesh and blood.
hampering creative invention by denying the people access to Aether, but also in the mass detention of renegades in a secretive prison complex. The renegades eventually storm the consulate, overthrowing the government, freeing their comrades, and jailing the jailers, all whilst the kindly Padim takes a leadership position, appointing Pia to the cabinet and announcing a freer and fairer future for the plane. And everybody clapped, and Obama was there. We also see glimpses of this post-revolution world at the end of Ixalan's story, with Watley planeswalking there and meeting Sahili Rai, marvelling at a golden box representing palliative care technology for Aetherborn being hawked on a street corner by an individual inventor.
It seems rosy and simple, doesn't it? Bad, oppressive control gives way into a new order centered on individual freedom through lots of bloodless, mostly retaliatory violence, mostly against inorganic, anonymous forces.
I see. I honestly did not get all of that from the summary just because there were so many names I didn't recognize. But I understand the idea. Yeah, it's just very, for lack of a better term, I guess, whitewashed. Very whitewashed revolution, right? Very liberal revolution, perhaps. It's like, no, violence is bad. Don't do violence. It's like, well, the violence is kind of already here. Is Nicol Balls the Bahamut of Magic the Gathering? Maybe? Maybe? It's actually quite easy once you ignore all concept of conventional storytelling. Oh, okay, gotcha.
It's about as simple as a revolutionary story could be, which, if you've watched this channel before, should be a line which foreshadows a very detailed explanation of all that. I say detailed and not unnecessary because I've been choosing to love myself more lately.
Nice.
Let's delve into the why of this revolution.
Completely unrelated, by the way, but something that I've been working really, like, you know, something you mentioned that about loving yourself more. I have a tendency to yap, as you may or may not know. I know, crazy, right? May come as a huge surprise to some of you. But you know, a lot of my friends, like all of my close friends, it's only even possible for them to be my close friends in the first place, exactly because they enjoy listening to me yap about things that I'm passionate about, right? But I have a lot of like insecurity and like general anxiety about that from when I was a kid, and this idea that every time that if I talk too long, then everyone who's sitting there listening to me is just waiting for me to finish while being very polite and pretending to be engaged, and it's a whole thing, right? But anyway, a lot of the times, you know, what I'll do when I'm talking to my friends is I'll be like, you know, when I'm wrapping up, I'll be like, you know, sorry I went on for so long, but you know, I'm really passionate about this or whatever. And they always go like, no, don't apologize, whatever. And the thing I've been trying to teach myself, and it sounds like nothing, but I think it is a really big difference, right? Is instead of saying, oh, sorry I went on for so long, say, thank you for listening. I really appreciate it. Very big difference. It not only in how it makes me feel about it, but also what I'm implying about my friend. You know? I think it's important to realize that, like, if I am assuming, like, when I say, oh, sorry I went on for so long, I'm sort of implying that my friend didn't really like this and didn't actually say anything about it, right? So I'm sort of, in a way, this would never be my actual thought, but what it leads to is I'm kind of implying that my friend is a liar who's not being honest with me and is just kind of like, you know, stringing me along. It's sort of an insult to their own character as well. Like, if I'm like, oh, sorry, like, I know that bothered you, but you sat here for 3 hours for some reason. It's like, no. It implies something negative about my friend. It makes me feel bad about myself. It's just bad all over, right? So we just, instead of saying, oh, sorry, I was talking for so long, I say, thank you for listening. How does it feel to be loved unconditionally, little man? Very good. And you can do this for anything. Like, if there's anything that you feel, you know, like if you feel like you are burdening your friend with something like that, you know, where you're asking them for help with something or something like that, don't say like, oh, sorry I asked you to do this, or oh, sorry about making you work, or oh, sorry about inconveniencing you, or whatever. Say, thank you for helping me. It really means a lot. Huge. It allows you to satisfy that part of you that feels like you've like made them do something, and therefore you need to give them something in return. But you can do it with like love and affection and appreciation instead of like self-love. self-loathing and like put downs, right? Trying to teach that specific thing to my girlfriend. Yeah. You're the master rank yapper after all. It's your whole thing. It's true. But I can't stop it. But I do still have some insecurity about it. But yeah, anyway, completely unrelated to the video, and I broke my rule immediately about not pausing for very long. But he's like, I'm trying to love myself more lately. I was like, I think this is really. It sounds like a little thing, but I think that changing the way you talk about yourself to your friends and the way you talk about your friends to your friends makes a bigger difference than you think.
You can obviously see a cause for hostility between the renegades and the consulate. People's personal property is being seized by the state, and unemployment is on the rise as Aether is being consolidated into an increasingly small number of people's hands.
Right.
For the Aetherborn, such policies very much are a life and death affair. However, the consulate's reasoning for doing all of this is almost entirely unexplained, save for a classic narrative catch-all.
There is a difference between a motive and a justification. The latter is spelled out in the story of Aether Revolt, with Tezzeret convincing a Vishkar native and not dead Vidalcan Dovin Barn that the inventor's property needs to be seized for their own safety. Such reasoning is given by many governments on everything from the ownership of firearms to the ability to access social media DMs, as many a VPN-lacking Brit woke up one day to
Please look up the
discover.
card Goblin Crusades. All right. Goblin Crusade MTG. Is it Drawl News Crusades? Is it this? Why do they look like that? All goblins are black and are zombies in addition to their other creature types. First pick? Oh. Oh! Oh, they're just... All goblins are destroyed. Let's go for what arc? It's literally racism attack. Oh, that's cool. That's fun. That's fun. Sure.
It's dangerous for you to have this in an unfiltered form. We ought to be watching over it. Of course, this isn't an inherently bad thing. Having no governmental oversight on the production of fossil fuels, for example, be it in regulating companies or making it illegal for you to brew gasoline at home, is good and necessary, both for the safety of the planet and also the people who live within a 1 kilometer radius of your garage. The motive behind different kinds of oversight, however, is the key thing that many
goblins are ontologically evil and must be purged. Do not question why they're sentient and intelligent.
The Emperor deploys all sorts of horrifying repression in Star Wars, for example, which is justification enough to rise against him. However, the conflict often falls flat because what motivates his tyrannical rule, similar to that of Bolus, is simply the desire for further power.
There's a class of cards banned and never printed again for prejudice? Excuse me? Including Invoke Prejudice. There's just prejudice card. Oh, okay, cool. I cast racism. No, literally though. I cast bigotry, universal bigotry.
Favorite boogeyman for folks of all strokes. Why do the bad guys desire power? To have power. Power is corrupting. Power is
it's a little circular for sure.
Reward, and power ought to be denied to bad people.
Goblins and magic are straight up the savages of the magic universe and are basically the target of every racist trope. Yeah. This last stream, but I'm back. Fairy woe. Hello, Demi. Yeah, you can't. It's okay. I visualized the fairy woe in my head. Discrimination cards, literally.
There could be any number of reasons: self-enrichment, ideological zealotry, legacy crafting, etc. And not.
Is that fucking Hosni Mubarak? Is that what the hell? He's a little younger than I've ever seen him. Hosni Mubarak jump scare?
All of them have to be bad. Following 1974's Carnation Revolution in Portugal, a day-long, almost entirely bloodless event which ended some 40 years of fascist-adjacent dictatorship, power in the nation was briefly held by a military junta for a further year. This was
target demographic are treated poorly and bigoted against, but it's okay because they're evil, of course.
Republican democracy.
Of course.
It was a clear, comparative positive goal carried out and achieved through a dictatorship that liquidated itself after its prescribed task was complete, with Portugal's 7th ever free election occurring in 1975.
7th ever?
Was the largest party. Okay. Tezzeret does tell Barn that the consulate seeks to use this technology for the betterment of society, a perspective that could be argued against by the renegades, allowing them to describe how their order would benefit society instead. However, we're never given the opportunity for that debate to form in the story, and regardless, this is just manipulation. Tezzeret's only here for Rashmi's portal research, which Bolus wants for his own plans which seek to restore lost power to the dragon for the sake of having it. And so we're back to the beginning. Kaladesh's consulate, unfortunately...
Spice is a great tweet. Friends, Marxists, don't let friends, baby leftists start with Das Kapital Volume 1. That's so.
Wasn't fleshed out enough for a coherent ideology to form, and thus the Renegade's counter-ideology was defined only by assertions of rightful ownership
recommended
and
starting
vague
point,
gesturing at themes of repression. This produced some particularly jarring moments in the narrative. In our introduction to the Aetherborn crime boss Gonti, for example,
Hello,
Yeheni,
Gonti.
another Aetherborn, attempts to strong-arm them into supporting the renegades.
Cool ass art, I will say. I do love. I've always loved the
Gonti's
art on
artificial
Magic
heart,
cards.
a contraband artifact which prolongs their life, to the consulate for confiscation. We later see, as I've already
Recommend
mentioned,
starting with
a similar
Warhammer
Aether
40k.
regulated
I've done a little
device
bit of that.
sold openly on the street after the collapse of the old regime, implying that such technology is no longer considered illegal. However, we're never given an explanation as to why the consulate would want to confiscate Gonti's heart. Is it so that they alone can produce and sell it only to wealthy people?
Sure.
Is it because they have an antagonistic relationship with the Aetherborn or Gonti specifically and desire for them to die early? Or
Okay.
is there a more complex reason? Gonti's technology could be a boon to Aetherborn kind should the consulate have their heart and set about mass producing it, but doing so would leave Gonti without their life support. Thus, they're choosing their own life over the lives of their people. Without clearer motivations, the moral, if you could call it that, of Aether Revolt is that big government shouldn't make entrepreneurship illegal. Or something. Honestly, if Campbell had just approved some subsidies for tech startups or something before the Gatewatch
Morning,
arrived,
afternoon,
I
Brick
don't
and Friends,
think
hello,
the
Cupid.
plots would have happened. Tezzeret's corruption of the government.
Where's he getting the magic story from? Curious. I mean, all the cards have some amount of lore on them, and I'm sure there's like some like, you know, releases where they actually have like lore dumps and shit. But I assume you don't just get it all from the item descriptions, as it were. You don't just read all the cards and get your story from there.
As Grand Console certainly worse.
Like, I know, like, you know, Pathfinder has like Lost Omens books that are just mostly world building. I don't know if, obviously it's a tabletop RPG versus a card game, but I don't know if Magic has anything like that. I would assume.
And their authoritarianism, but seeing as the consulate was perfectly capable of political persecution before him, the question still remains as to what their goals are. In the Aether Revolt trailer, Chandra's voice.
So the whole point of, like, so he's been talking about like a motivation versus a justification for a long time now. I think he's still on that topic as far as I can tell. Is it this the point that it is important to understand why dictators or why these like oppressive governments do what it is that they do? Maybe.
Duels with a consulate announcer, accusing them of classic 1984 doublethink.
The consulate sends peacemakers to arrest you and calls that safety? They steal your inventions and deny you ether access and call that freedom?
To be clear, demands for consciousness in the face of the state beating you and calling it peacekeeping is of pressing importance today. But without an internal justification for the antagonistic
It's always
force,
been,
the Renegade's
but,
counter-hegemony is similarly shallow. There isn't a substantive critique of power here, made all the more frustrating given the time.
Certainly,
this set
it's
was
more
released.
explicit
Aether Revolt debuted
recently.
on January 20th, 2017. The day of Donald Trump's inauguration.
That's
His
wild.
presidency arrived on the back of a second Obama term, defined by massive increases in already Patriot Act exacerbated state surveillance technology, utilized both
I
abroad
love a fucking
and at
police
home,
state.
which Trump, of course, immediately
For the
took a
children,
stand.
people. For the
Scandals
children.
like Cambridge Analytica also rocked the world around this time.
Yup.
The company had acquired private information from sites like Facebook about their users and had gone on to work with a number of different political parties and movements throughout the globe, using that data to inform and sway electoral campaigns from the digital realm.
That's fun.
Including the 2016 US presidential election.
That's really
the
fun.
Reasons for why states and companies would use social technologies in order to tighten their grip on public life vary, but none of it comes from a desire of power for power's sake.
Sure.
The notion that such a trend could be undone by simply getting the baddies out of power is laughable, as the
Yes.
record of modern history showcases. It
is a systemic issue. It is not a matter of a few bad eggs. Right? It's not like, oh, well, if all of the good presidents were gone and we got back to, or all the bad presidents left and we got the good presidents, then everything will be fine. It's like, oh, well, you know, big government is evil unless I do it. So true.
In part, this limited exploration of revolutionary imagination that inspired much of
Oh no, I'm
Aether
being
Drift's
forced to
world
learn about
building,
magic.
as my guest for today's
Me too.
episode explains.
I guess.
Hi, my name is Miguel. I'm a narrative designer. I used to work at Wizards of the Coast. While I was there, I was the set lead and world builder
Hello,
for
Miguel.
Aether Drift.
And they solve fascism by doing Speed Racer as the punchline of Aether Drift. No lie. Wait, what?
On, the Brothers War. I was set lead on Edge of Eternities as well.
You have to understand most of Magic's lore extrapolates from its characters first, and most of them are defined entirely by their aesthetics.
Critique of the representation of revolution in Kaladesh and Aether Revolt.
In the context of American corporate media, like revolutions are typically presented as like vague triumphalist movements against like equally vague oppressors or like a status quo, like revolutionaries there. And I think that this is to a degree like the case.
What is that word? Triumphalist. What does that mean? That's a word I've never heard before. Let's learn. So let's get this shit off my screen, and let's learn a new word. Triumphalist. Shows boastful pride, smug satisfaction, or an arrogant sense of superiority after a win. I see. It's like they're just concerned with winning, and then the winning is the whole, like, you know. Sure. This entire thing has been like a horse kick to my head. Ain't that a kick in the head?
In the previous college block, like they're often passionate people who tend to be depicted as villains, right? Like they mean well, but they take it too far, you know? They're corrupted by power or just like motivated. Like the mask comes off and it's like, oh, the president killed your dad, and that's the only reason why you want to have a revolution, or you're trying to rob a bank or something like that, right? And then generally, like, those revolutions fall apart, and they serve, whether intentionally or just because the person writing it is so captured, they serve as like a cautionary tale about like, don't rock the boat.
Good presidents have never existed.
They might be handsome and passionate, but they're cuckoo crazy bananas.
It's certainly very rare.
And whatever. So with that in mind, I wanted to try and write like the particulars of the Indigo Revolution.
At least in like, you know, imperialist, capitalist, white supremacists, like fucking patriarchal societies, which is most of them.
I wanted there to be some depth in it, and I wanted it to respond to a degree to the prior revolution that was depicted, but also like have its own shit that it cares about, right? Like not necessarily just say, hey, Magic's old depiction of revolution is bad. I have disagreements with it, and it was my hope that I addressed it in Avshkar by presenting not just a successful revolution, but one that in the Planeswalker's Guide mentions like
Mandela,
groups.
I don't know enough about him, but what I know is
like,
positive.
It was a mass popular movement that not only succeeded in doing a largely bloodless revolution, but also like the government is sustainable because it's built on a foundation that makes sense. It's not just like revolution is not just vengeance. Revolution is a response to material conditions and the history that gives rise to them. Like I could go on, but basically I'll end with that summary there. So like the short answer is yes, it was a response. The long answer is yes and.
As Miguel lays out, Aetherdrift sought to amend some of the simplistic elements of revolutionary feeling found in Aether Revolt, doing so in a deliciously meta way for a second canon revolution, which we will get onto shortly. There is another element that Miguel brings up that I'd like to delve deeper into first, which is that Aether Revolt was hardly a new depiction of revolution in pop media. On the whole, three main trends present themselves in popular fiction featuring revolution. The successful revolution against such a vague or objective evil that it'd be impossible not to root for the good guys. The successful revolution where leading elements reveal themselves to be evil in some way after winning power. Or doomed idealism, where rocking the boat, no matter how noble, will result in ruin. The latter two are cautionary tales for would-be revolutionaries, whereas the former allows anyone to project what they perceive to be the evil of their reality onto the villainous force without the annoying process.
Rick, what on earth is this title? I stole it.
Of substantive critique getting in the way. J.K. Rowling inventing Death Eaters as one-dimensional baddies in the Harry Potter books, and then going around saying any person or group of people she doesn't like are akin to them, is pretty much as good an example as one could get for this process and application. Truly, what a hollow human being in both talent and soul. We will discuss the follies of all three of these representations in a more nuanced examination of revolutionary processes and gains, but before that, we must move on to the release of Aetherdrift.
All right, what the fuck is this? So Speed Racer defeats fascism?
We don't need to read any of Marx's books. We don't have to be Leninists. We don't have to be Mao. We don't have to be Fidel. Read the Brazilian Constitution.
Sure. It's 2024?
The events of Aetherdrift most relevant to us in this video are, unfortunately...
You know, Magic the Gathering isn't as bad as Warhammer 40k? I will say, just very briefly, having skimmed what the Warhammer 40k community looks like, I'm not saying, you know, hashtag not all Warhammer 40k fans. But oh boy, is it, I could just imagine that, you know, seems interesting. Seems maybe like it is, part of maybe it's very it's very chud forward. That's right. I would say it's very chud forward, right? Is probably a good way to describe that. Like if you're tasting the brief sip of the Warhammer 40k community that I tasted, it was very chud forward. It had notes of like all kinds of bigotry, you know.
Established motivations for side characters. According to the Planeswalker's Guide for the set, the new revolutionary government established in the immediate aftermath of Aether Revolt was impotent.
The Aether Revolt saw a popular but ideologically messy group, the Renegades.
Just coming off rewatching Legend of Korra Season 1, and yeah, I watched a little bit of Legend of Korra Season 1 in Vancouver with a couple of my friends, but only like 3 or 4 episodes. I've never watched it before. It was fun. I want to keep watching it at some point.
Replacing him and
that's right, Apollo,
with a reform-minded system with the same name. This reformed consulate
40k runs off racism and war, and so does the fan base, as far as I can tell.
Wishka's population initially welcomed this change, but grew frustrated with the new government over time, as the reformed consulate proved only capable or willing to enact minor alterations to the status quo. Life for most on Avishkar.
I did not listen to this. Let me I was thinking about Warhammer 40k.
The revolutionary government established in the immediate aftermath of Aether Revolt
Yes.
was impotent.
The government was
The
bad.
Aether Revolt saw a popular but ideologically messy group, the Renegades, topple the tyrannical Grand Consul, replacing him and his consulate with a reform-minded system with the same name.
Okay.
This reformed consulate sought to revise much of the old consulate's policies, laws, and practices with an eye towards equity.
Sounds good.
Avishka's population initially welcomed this change, but grew frustrated with the new government over time, as the reformed consulate proved only capable or willing to enact minor alterations to the status quo.
I see.
Life for most on Avishkar did not change in the ways the Renegades had promised. Various elements within Avishkar rumbled their discontent as both reactionary and progressive columns began fresh agitations.
Gotcha.
That's a spicy world of building. My producer is grimacing behind the camera, which means that's the take we're going with.
Then Phyrexia invaded, a truly monumental event that, perplexingly, Wizard seems adamant to forget.
How do they have
That was
magic
one thing
gifts?
that leadership was very eager to move on from, was depicting the aftermath of the Phyrexian invasion.
Really?
Yes, that was something I pushed for constantly across Lost Caverns of Ixalan. What little the small amount of work I did on OTJ, Thunder Junction, and Aetherdrift as well. There was a sense of Phyrexian fatigue, and that
Phyrexian
I
fatigue.
disagreed. I also don't run the company. Magic continues to make billions of dollars, so maybe that was the correct decision.
Yeah, what do we know, eh?
That can't be right.
The crisis created by this event and the popular support behind underground movements like the New Culture Collective brought a second period of revolutionary zeal, toppling the broken renegade consulate and actually remaking the social order.
Okay,
This is
sure.
where the name change between Kaladesh and Avishkar comes into play.
We knew by the time we hit my desk that we were going to change the name from its previous name, Kaladesh, to Avishkar. Initially, there wasn't going to be an in-world justification. It was
They
something
changed
that
the
we
name of the
discussed back
entire,
and forth, and
like, city, region?
the folks, myself on the world building team and the story
Country?
team, lobbied hard for there to be an in-world justification. Once we had that all kind of set, I realized that something big would have had to have happened on the plane, basically, in order for there to be a name
The
change.
plane?
The previous Kaladesh sets had already sort of covered
Let me just blow my nose real quick.
the inciting moments and the action of a revolution. I wished I could do that in the set that I had, but it was also described as a top-down. This is a travelogue. It's not a return to for Avishkar or Amonkhet. World building is always a bit of a push-pull with design, with leadership, and with art. We are all on the same side.
Hello, I'm
because
back.
we are all like trying to get a set made. There's obviously competing interests that go into it. I figured that in the sort of the narrow. It feels funny to say world building being a narrow column, but the narrow column that I had to work in, the thing that I would be interested in writing for Avishkar, for when the camera was on it during the Aetherdrift set, was a justification for why we're doing an in-world name change. In my mind, that was a second, more complete revolution than the first, one that had.
World building is when you change the name of your settings, and the more you change the name, the world buildinger it is.
Sort of a stronger, like a broader base of support, more of a
fundamentally
planar
sound
action to
revolution.
justify such a dramatic change, and that we would probably not have the space to show the entirety of the revolution if the space that Avishkar had to in the set was a third of the set. That is a set not concerned about revolution, but instead focused on the sporting event.
In narrative terms, Kaladesh was the name of the plane established in a pre-consulate monarchical
Oh, it's a whole
era of
plane,
the
I see.
world,
Yeah,
with Avishkar coming to
Guys, I don't
represent a
think the
new way
world,
of
the
looking
Grand
at
Blue
and
was the bad guy.
navigating that reality. Similar to how post-colonial states like Burkina Faso rejected
How
the
far
names that
the
had been
ideal
imposed
world?
upon their lands by Europeans, or how the Kingdom of
Upper
England became the
Volta?
Commonwealth of England under the brief republican rule of Oliver Cromwell, a man who existed to remind the world that
Change
even
the name,
people who
change the
overthrow
flag.
monarchies will still be cunts
Real.
if they're English. In a more meta understanding, Avishkar was a rebranding of Kaladesh, mainly due
The
to
most
an
revolutionary
unfortunate
thing about
racist
magic is that the
connotation with
cat
original
people
name,
aren't
and
fuckable.
also potentially as an acknowledgement
I
of
don't know if I
some
can
of the
fuck
more
with this
Indian
anymore.
parts of Kaladesh's Indian inspiration, signaling a fresh start to do better. Shyam Bardwaj's short piece on the tacky racism in the product, like a 7-Eleven joke the original designers happily talked about sneaking into Aether Revolt, says it better and more accurately than my cracker ass ever could. Along with this name change, retroactive depth was also added. There was a lot more importance placed on grounding these revolutionary
The
events,
interesting title? I
specifying
stole
groups
it.
and tendencies in it, pointing to what they actually achieved, and most importantly, unpicking the root of why people revolted. Like, listen to this shit. Under the old consulate's administration,
checked in on you in
the
ages. How you
classes
doing?
of
I'm
Avishkar
chilling.
worked under a system of ratcheting
Say goodbye,
quotas,
cracker?
pay
Yeah,
bans,
yeah, yeah.
and strict distribution regulations. In theory, this system should have produced a horizontal society of post-scarcity abundance enabled by Aether's limitless free energy.
Sounds
In
really good.
practice, the refinement and distribution of Aether was artificially essentially bottlenecked by the consulate, whose hands-on regulation of the aether industry served to pad the accounts of the politically powerful.
That sounds familiar to me.
Free and
I don't know.
abundant distribution of energy, Avishkar labored under conditions of artificial scarcity.
That also
People
sounds kind of
who were
familiar.
poor were engineered to be poor by the economic system that dominated pre-invasion Avishkar.
Don't draw any fucking parallels, or you will be shot.
They're spitting about the fetters of capital, the crisis of distribution, the undemocratic ownership of the means of production, and the profit motive creates. They're pointing out how means like automation, which could produce abundance,
futures,
are
life
instead
after
used to
capitalism.
capture further
Interesting.
gains for a political class entrenched in profiteering. At last, the slop tubers are
Ugly
right. They
dead
are
rat
putting
alarm
Marxism
clock
into our
guy?
card games. On first blush, this may seem like
That is really fun.
human-made
Ugly
propaganda.
dead rat alarm guy.
Theoretical abundance clashes with intrinsic greed and results in scarcity. Thus, the market, cruel as it may be, is the best we can hope for. Doomed beasts that we are.
That's real
Alongside
life.
this, the
Yeah,
deployment of
yeah,
terms
yeah.
like apparatchik, later in the document, a Russian denotation of a professional functionary of the Communist Party.
Huh?
Of terms like apparatchik.
The system persisted after the Eighth of the Revolt and the Reformation of the Consulate, as many of the same functionaries, apparatchiks, and consuls remained in place following mere repudiations of disgraced Grand Consul and the Old Consulate. This fueled the protestations and frustrations of reform-minded and progressive consuls, chief among them the former popular leader of the Renegades. Apparatchiks.
Later in the document, a Russian denotation of a professional functionary of the Communist Party,
I see.
again may suggest a tacit rejection of left political movements and trends which advocate for the mutability of so-called human nature. It has a certain anti-socialist flavour, but only if you understand socialism to mean
when the government does stuff. And it's more socialism, the more stuff it does. And
That
if
is
it does
true.
a real lot of stuff, it's communism.
Additionally,
I
hearing
mean,
Miguel speak on this
isn't he
world
spitting?
building seems to suggest an
Isn't he spitting? Isn't that what it is?
Slightly different angle of endorsement in comparison.
We had done a ton of work with consultants both for Avishkar and Amonkhet to try and have more just overall better depiction of the peoples that we are depicting in these fantasy settings. And we kind of knew that Avishkar was going to be like the main character plane of this set. So I figured like part of it is a bit of a dare with the other world builders.
I recycled my
to
bottles
say,
and got
like,
jumped by
I'm gonna make
McCarthy.
Avishkar a successful
This fucking
post-revolutionary
ghost.
labor, like a Soviet basically that is also aware and I think this is like I would argue it makes a lot of sense because they are like it's the plane of invention. They are aware of the multiverse now. They are not only aware of omen paths, but they're figuring out how to use them.
The
They
multiverse?
understand that like holy shit, if we figure out how to use these,
The fuck is going on in Magic the Gathering, man?
opens up an incredible amount of opportunity.
The fact that this narrative has developed with the understanding that revolutionary shortcomings can be amended with further radical thinking, not less, is deeply refreshing to me. Additionally, the specification that people were engineered to be poor under the previous system, but then not presenting the Indigo Revolution, that which overthrew the reformed consulate, as enacting a singular solution to this issue, is an equally refreshing sprig of nuance. The rich and poor exist throughout both capitalist states and previously existing socialist nations and countries currently run by communist governments. But there is a clear distinction between these two paradigms in regards to the level
Things are
of
technically
poverty,
alternate
distance
universes, in
between
practice
wealth
the size of the
brackets,
city.
and whether
I
such an
see.
issue was
I
regarded
see.
as a problem that
Thank
the
you.
government sought to
I'm
rectify,
unfamiliar with
or whether
MTG.
it was ignored or even celebrated as some kind of natural economic hierarchy, something that only individual grit can overcome. Income inequality throughout Europe, for example, was lesser in states with socialist structures in comparison to those in similar levels of economic development without them. Inequality which then greatly increased after the cataclysmic collapse of those structures.
One of the things that I wish we could have spent more time on in the sets following Marching
Except
Machine
Gix is just a livable
is the
90s
effect that
Slayer.
invasion would have on the planes that we visit, right? It is a colossal, in some
Maybe.
cases, apocalyptic moment.
Maybe not
right?
fun to live in.
And yet the world, the multiverse continues, right? It persists and people build, they survive. And with the Indigo Revolution, I was kind of thinking of like, I don't know, the works of Bellatar, right?
Bellatar.
And the approach to like Eastern
I don't know
Europe
shit,
after
man.
the fall of the Soviet Union, which is essentially an apocalyptic event, right? That and yet the world continues after, right? So the color revolution is mostly just like I was in that headspace thinking about all those various color revolutions. I was thinking also of the Carnation Revolution in Portugal, right? Like I know that we have sort of a PG at Magic, sort of PG-13. At least modern Magic is like a PG-13 rating, and I felt like a depiction of a revolution that was like bloody and libidinal as a lot of fans at first blush seemed like they wanted it to be. That's a full set. That's a block. Like you need to dive into it didn't feel right, like tacking that history onto like a fun race, right?
Sure.
The full conversation will be uploaded to my second channel, by the way, Spice Second Rack.
I still don't understand at what point Aether Drift is about Speed Racer defeating fascism, but we'll get there.
Pushes the promised envelope and succeeds.
I'd rather hand my child the crack pipe than a commander deck. Is it that bad?
The concept of money hasn't been abolished, with employment and trade both being factors of the world building and story. Enough has been changed to incense the still.
Wait, I've seen this card. Is this card, was this card really good? Look at the top 5 cards of your library, put 2 of them into your hand, and the rest of them on the bottom of your library in any order. That sounds really good. I don't, like, you know, like, just, I mean, what's that? That means it's 2 mana and 1 blue energy, right? It's a very good uncommon. This card is really busted. Okay, gotcha. Yeah. I know, it's gotta be good because I've heard about it. As a guy who knows literally nothing about Magic, I saw this card and I recognized this art. Draw 2 and then organize, like, fucking send 3 you don't want to the bottom of your deck. Sounds really, really nice, right? It's very good deck manipulation.
Living reactionary elements of the world, as is shown in the set's first official story. During a conversation between our protagonist Sita and her conservative father, whose hoarded wealth is slowly draining away, she observes that, at least these days, the servants are getting paid for working for him, not that her father's a fan of that development. Wait, the servants weren't paid?
If it's blue and it's in a cool fish monster, it makes my pulse rise.
Is instructive. The
servants that aren't paid are just slaves.
Plainly displays a limit to this revolution, but obviously Miguel and potentially much of the rest of the story team weren't trying to present revolution as an impotent swipe against natural exploitation. Indeed, quite the opposite is true, with that same opening story written by Arsenault Rivera presenting the conservative father as a stubborn, unbending fool, grumbling about natural order, the way things used to be, and decrying the new regime as a slight against one's forebearers. My daddy's daddy didn't fight in no Aether War for you to mouth off about labor rights, kind of shit. As a result, the persistence of reformed but still exploitative relations is a narrative fact which can be examined through different lenses.
I'm gonna sneeze.
Firstly,
I'm gonna sneeze. Hold.
Metamaterially, the fact that this is a story for a card game product. A phrase I do not deploy to belittle the potential games as a medium have as narrative or even educational tools,
absorbed it.
but rather as an explanation as to why
well, I sneezed, but also the shockwave that goes through my body after I tanked it.
To production. Were there any conflicts between what you and the world building team wanted to explore and what the company itself was willing to let you explore in the game?
Of course, I imagine.
And if not, did you find yourself self-limiting on political themes, symbology, or language?
I think the answer to that is like a very frustrating like yes to all of the above, right? Magic is, like, as you said, it's an American corporate product, right? The role of Magic IP is to, speaking as leadership, the role of Magic IP is to acquire new players and grow the fan base. And the way that we need to do that is by keeping our sets accessible and fun. We don't want to have
reading books teach you a lot of words. For example,
depicted on the cards, right?
Quisling and Jackanade.
I see. Was simply couched in sort of a couched as if leadership was steering me back, attacking back to the golden path here.
Triumphalist
Quiznape, right? Like, do we need to depict this revolutionary council at the card level, or is that going to be too far outside the wheelhouse of what this set cares about, right? So it's kind of just the nature of the beast was my experience of it. Like there were things that I'd written across, Aether Drift to be sure, certainly Lost Caverns at Ixalan.
It was a very interesting thing to be trying to basically sneak in revolutionary ideas and like communist propaganda into your American capitalist card game and hope nobody notices enough to actually get you in trouble.
You write
or at least disagree with you until you can't do that.
Multiple rounds of leadership meetings where they sit and review and see how happy they are with it. You have to find ways of smuggling in the things that you're concerned about. There's like no one really doing any sneering mustache twirling, like suppress the workers in this one. It's just it's the experience of working there is just seeing what the ruling ideology looks like in day-to-day practice, right? It's no more devious or frustrating than
both words are really funny old insults. Interesting. I'll look them up in a second.
Or something, right? There's a knowledge that if you the people who get pissed off at you about that are ultimately the people who can fire you, or like not promote you, or
the people with power.
So like there was never a salacious moment of being told no. It's just the implication that one is being told no every single day you work for a massive American conglomerate owned by Hasbro.
They would never sneak in communist propaganda into our card game set because, I mean, I would never fire them, but it's the implication.
Yeah, so it's a fucking bummer. Sorry.
Envisioning a revolution which questions the sanctity of basic elements of our world, what democracy is supposed to look like, the existence of wage labor, what is to be done about those beastly aristocrats and their delicious egg monopolies, etc., is a difficult enough thing to pull off, but especially when you're doing
just because getting story on the cards is very interesting, though through art card names flavor text. Yeah. It's like Dark Souls item description.
Narrative example of what Emmanuel Wallerstein describes as a chief disagreement within modern revolutionary thought. The question as to what socialism as
the
a
4 hour Spice video today? Yes, indeed.
As a basic primer for the unaware, Marx wrote about capitalism and communism, with the lower stage of communism being a transitionary period between the two forms. Where communism was a stateless, classless, moneyless society, this lower form, later popularized as socialism, represents the period after capitalism where the working class has seized power from the bourgeoisie and has begun creating communism. As Wallerstein describes, a controversy exists between communists as to whether socialism is a fixed stage, like capitalism, for each nation to reach
the meta jokes that
communism,
WotC's just the worst possible company.
Also, like capitalism, is a world system that would only subsume what came before through.
I am tangentially familiar with WotC through just being a Pathfinder fan and hearing about the shit they do with D&D.
Constant struggle. He laid
Pinkertons and such. Without Pinkerton, sending the Pinkertons after a guy, was that for Magic cards, actually?
Out this ideological divide as it existed between the communist parties of the USSR and China in the 1950s. Basically, the CPSU argued that different socialist states would proceed separately in effectuating such a transition.
Well, PFTUE would never DM that. It's actually easier to DM than it looks like.
As we can see, this last form of the debate about implicitly raised the issue of the unit of analysis. For, in effect, the CCP was arguing that communism was a characteristic not of nation states, but of the world economy as a whole. Wallerstein goes on to quote Mao Zedong's On the Correct Handling of Contradictions Among the People, which stipulates that the law of development for Marxism is one of constant battle, that victories are not solidified by winning alone and have to be constantly fought for, citing a conflict between Mao and then Vice Chairman of the Communist Party of China, Liu Shaoqi, where the latter argued that China was already a socialist state and where the former argued that socialism was a process.
So the problem is people don't know, like, literally people don't know what socialism. I mean, I don't either. I'm just saying, like, so people can't agree on a definition of socialism. I guess it makes sense because, like, weirdly, I guess it would be easier to agree on a definition of communism because it is a more, like, extreme final state. If socialism is meant to be this, like, transitionary period, then it's like, it's a spectrum, I guess, right? Socialism is a spectrum, and then, you know, you could say if you're, you know, this far away, like, you know, if on the left is capitalism, and on the right is, like, on the extreme left is capitalism, on the extreme right is communism, and then, you know, socialism is that entire spectrum in the middle. Well, you could say, oh, well, if you're this far left, then it's not really socialism. And then you could also say socialism is when the government does things, and the more stuff it does, then the socialister it is.
See this too in anarchist writers like Lorenzo Comber Irvin, who, whilst
you also can't agree on a definition of fascism, really. That's why any argument ever is invalid. We have to vote on for the center until things get better. I just want a grill, boss. Surely if I ignore the problems, they will go away. It's so base.
Announcing the crimes and injustices seen in both capitalist and socialist states rejects the idea that a total and immediate liquidation of all modern apparatus would produce liberation. The creation of such a state of affairs with an abrupt destruction of all industrial production, even that controlled by the people after capitalism, would result in mass starvation, complete collapse and disorganization. We need to preserve those things which need to be preserved in mass society during a transitional stage to anarchist socialism.
I don't know if
this appears to be the thought process behind not only the second...
I think part of this conversation is over my head. I'm not going to lie to you. I think, like, the theory, like, the statecraft theory of how properly to organize a socialist state post-revolution is something that is, or socialist or communist or, you know, aiming towards communism or whatever, is something that is just over my head. I think I'm not embarrassed to admit that. I think being exposed to some of these ideas might make them sound more familiar when I go and do some reading on them later, you know. It's hard to see Capcom as tyrants after the treatment of the Mega Man franchise. Yeah. This vote is the most important one of your life, bro. For real, man. You don't understand. Just this one last vote. Yes, the crying white guy. Please, bro. Bro, please just vote for the center party one more time. It's the lesser evil, bro. Please, bro.
For lack of a better term. Avishkar has established special economic zones, a phrase almost synonymous with modern Chinese trade, for other planes to exchange wares, and is expanding its cultural and economic ties with events like the Girapur Grand Prix, the race which forms the lion's share of this set.
The decision to make the Girapur Grand Prix,
it's about racing.
Like, Avishkari projection, soft power projection out in the multiverse, and to have them say, like, we think we can claim a place as the multiversal hegemon.
To be fair, they're also just talking about incredibly ephemeral, situationally dependent concepts and rapid pace. Yeah. It's over my head. I can't follow this, but that's okay.
As the multiversal hegemony.
Whatever it is that Gramsci said. I don't know.
However you pronounce it, yeah. Both as a, like, both to enrich ourselves and our people, but also to critically protect ourselves from a multiversal threat by making ourselves the economic engine of the world. All of that sprang from a desire as a world builder to justify why this race is happening and why people care about it and why it is where the camera of Magic story is turning when, in my mind, there are so many other places that are in dire need of attention, especially in the wake of like an apocalyptic event that, like, yes, in the real world.
Again, unrelated to the socialism, but I mean, obviously I'm not a writer for Magic the Gathering, nor am I a professional world builder or anything like that. But as someone who is like a game master for a tabletop RPG campaign, this is also a very interesting part of the conversation, right? Is like trying to come up with, like, you want cool thing to happen, right? You want a cool thing to happen, but to be cool, people in the setting have to care about it, including your players. There's an extra aspect to like your players have to care about it too. So you have to kind of come up with, okay, well, I think this is really cool, but why? How can I get like the greater society that it's occurring in to care about it, so it feels cool, so it gets aura? And then how do I get my players to actually give a shit about it too? Because if I think something is cool and I want them to go do it and they don't want to, then it just kind of doesn't happen.
Right. World was years ago, but in
All Jokes aside, I think a good read is State and Revolution by Lenin. Sure. Put that shit in required reading.
But it still dominates how we interact with the world. Mayor Adams in New York is considering passing a mask ban, ostensibly to, stop anti-Semitism or some bullshit like that. But there's all these knock-on effects. Anyways,
because it's happening during COVID.
To make the race make sense. I was going to continue.
Corporate says we need cowboy hats to make it happen. Yep.
Dark. And this is meant to be like an optimistic take on it, right? I'm thinking of like the World Cup, especially in like Qatar or something like that. Or
for sure,
2022. Dude, how masks are anti-Semitic? I don't.
By trying to push for the impossible within the confines of a persistent,
so.
unfair system, the Indigo Revolution broke into new space with greater potential for development, which may yet be surpassed by future revolutions.
I do feel the need to point
December 21st, 2025. He was recording it in like 2021 or something. I mean, it's a 4-hour video. I don't,
absolutely unnecessary and phenomenal depth that the world builders dug into this single product. Like, Miguel and the team did not need to concoct a whole revolutionary soft power narrative to justify the Mario Kart set.
It is like, we do got to figure out what we do afterwards, even, in the assumption that the shit actually works. As DM and feeling offer, I like going with the whole everyone is their own protagonist main faction. Yeah, for sure. But it's like, if okay, listen, for example, right? I am running a campaign where they are all going to like magical Hogwarts, but without the transphobia, right? I say Hogwarts because it's like easier, like Hogwarts if it was written by someone who wasn't like a piece of shit who should burn in hell forever, right? And like it's a school setting. I want a fucking tournament arc in my school setting because I am shonen brain rotted. I think that would be really cool. How do I make it so that the other NPC students care about this tournament arc, and how do I make it so my players care about this tournament arc? I need that because I want them to do it. Because I think it's really fucking cool.
Which rarely gets to see the light of day outside of dickheads like me prodding them once every 4 months. Again, sorry for the upload schedule. Moving
second out early 2025. Sets have years of dev time. Yeah. Stakes and rewards. Yeah, I just think it's an interesting discussion to think about how you set that up, like the details of it, because he was talking about that with the Aether Drift fucking Grand Prix or whatever. Economic shock doctrine. Many things because of him, like Pizza Hut. Economic shock doctrine in the wake of the USSR's dissolution allowed for companies like Pizza Hut to open in former socialist states. In Russia alone, this shock doctrine contributed to an estimated 3.4 million premature deaths between 1990 and 1998, some due to starvation. 3.4 million! In Russia alone. This advert wasn't shown in Russia. We have many things. Like
there's a
Pizza
word
Hut.
that Mark Fisher uses in one of his final lectures, compiled in Post-Capitalist Desire, which has fascinated me ever since I read it. The word is hyperstitional. Hyperstitional. Fuck. Oh no!
12 trillion people starved under malnutrition. Let's vote for the Liberals again.
1984 commercial. Directed by Ridley Scott of all people, a woman saturated in Technicolor throws a sledgehammer through Big Brother's monolithic TV screen, announcing Apple
now Russia
as
has
an adversary
McDonald's.
to the
We have
doldrum
many
of
things
status
because of
quo.
him,
As
like
Fisher uses
Pizza
it,
Hut
hyperstitional
and
means something
McDonald's
which helps
and
bring about the very
Burger
thing
King
it's describing.
and
Like
Jollibee
prefigurative protest
and
movements which seek to create the world they wish to build even
fresh
before
sliced
the old order
pizza.
has fallen, this iconic piece of media was a gargantuan needle mover in sweeping away the faux Soviet image of big business, specifically in the tech sector, and elevating what we nowadays call the disruptor to the heights of popular appeal. In placing older technology within the frame of a novel about the horrors of potential English social...
Some people defended that screenshot, man. Some people really were like, no, he's saying my heart goes out to you. It's like, brother, I don't think I've ever accidentally done that. I'm not like, I just wanted to wave at the crowd and I just see
not only in their workplace, but in the perceived or real experiences of the people in the Soviet Union, and offered a solution of young, hip, colorful capitalism. In many ways, we are still living in that reality, with the constant saccharine insistence on vibrancy from every product or service.
Dude, I fucking...
dreary modern
I'm
bureaucracy,
sorry.
constant
I know this is
saccharine
like
insistence on
literally the
vibrancy.
coldest take in the world. I actually don't know if you could find someone who likes these, but like whatever these things are, I cannot put into words properly how angry seeing these fucks, these fucking noodle-armed, spaghetti-ass, like soulless imitations of humanity. It's like such a nice fucking wrap up in a bow of just corporations being these fucking shape-shifting chameleons that try to eat and absorb everything you love and turn it into garbage.
Every product or service, where dreary modern bureaucracy is still conflated with a civilization over 30 years in the past.
I don't know
where
why it makes me
alienation
so,
persists,
like...
despite what that lady
I don't know if this is, like, tied to jobs that I hated or what, but...
There is a constant lacking in our lives, a feeling like something is missing or unfair or denied to us, and whilst media will play on that feeling, it, like this commercial, will redirect that emotion. As Fisher lays out, it suggests a problem of desire in terms of capital. The thing about the Cold War imagery, what it's suggesting is that there's no real desire for, or rather, there is only desire for capitalism. The communist world, like IBM and the then dominant corporate capitalist world, is boring and dreary, and that's an objection to it. The new capitalist world won't be like that. The new capitalist world will be about desire in a way that the communist world won't be. Of course, Apple wasn't going to release an advert explaining that much of the alienation you feel presently is due to the structure of your work. How Fordism's job security over employment exploration had bled into neoliberalism's atomization and eventual abolition of the unified shop floor, creating a collection of individual producers and consumers, designed both to stimulate spending as a nepenthe for isolation, but also to break the back of organized labor as
it's like a remedy, right?
Capital's greatest adversary. I mean, I don't think they would have sold many Macintoshes if that's what they did. The same can be true in terms of revolutionary imagery as it is attached to
capitalism is the only system I love. Capitalism is the only system I love. Microplastics in my cum and brain.
As we can see, when
I store all the microplastics in my brain in one big macroplastic, so they can't hurt the rest of my body.
Isn't a how-to guide by any stretch, more so a call to action to prevent or lessen climate catastrophe through kinds of
Arabic on his
we've been systemically conditioned against. It stresses the importance of the climate movement breaking the spell around the topic of violence against property and fighting despair by ensuring action is rooted in mass movements and not nihilistic cells. The film, on the other hand, follows a group of young adults literally going to blow up fuel infrastructure, detached from any kind of organization or movement, handling explosives in very dangerous,
plastic is stored in the balls. Yeah, you gotta move it up.
Received consultation from someone high-ranking in U.S. counterintelligence.
Oh, fun.
The other thing I'll say is, like, we did have expert consultation on the movie. There's a technical advisor credited as anonymous, who's somebody who's very high up in counterterrorism in the United States military, and so he was somebody who
this is someone who's probably a great source on like revolution.
I really recommend watching Marxism Today's video on this piece for some greater and more specific critiques of this film in contrast to the book.
Today.
This isn't me saying that media which depicts revolutionary activity are all psyops or exist to honeypot potential activists, more so that the process of a revolution can only ever be presented in popular media in a reductive, sensationalized, and either chauvinistic or cautionary frame.
Sure.
Just as Wizards weren't going to greenlight a magic set where there's a whole sub-cycle of cards unpacking the democratic process of a Vishkar because it would be boring to everyone except for little freaks like me, critiques which could well be refocused onto capital writ large, if not the company itself, were highly unlikely to get to print, either by decree.
You can't have like an honest like an honest, good faith representation of revolutionary ideals and why they happen and why people want them.
Is complicated, fragmented,
shooting yourself in the face,
and frequently slow. Lenin didn't pop out of a train car and end a multi-century czarist rule in a way that could accurately fit into a tight 90-minute flick. Judas and the Black Messiah, energizing film that it may be, necessarily focuses on the tense thread of ever-growing personal betrayal more so than how the Black Panthers developed the free breakfast programs and later community hospitals that solidified support for them in their communities.
This is the shit, right? It's the doing the dishes of the revolution. It's the thing we always talk about. Like the scary, but also quote-unquote glamorous part is like, you know, the part at the end where everybody is organized, everybody unites, everybody rises up and overturns the government, and, you know, we all live happily ever after, whatever the fuck. Or we get into very academic debates about the difference between socialism and communism and whether or not we've achieved the state of socialism, and whether I don't know. But it's community and it's mutual aid and it's like, you know, it's fucking friendship and human connection that gets you there in the first place, right?
This isn't because the filmmakers wanted to subvert the audience's revolutionary education, almost certainly far from it, but more so because as vital and beautiful as the programs were, had equal screen time been dedicated to Daniel Kaluuya serving oatmeal as it was to shootouts with the cops, the film would have been radically dull.
Isn't Daniel Kaluuya in a cult now?
Is, first and foremost,
the Black Panthers did have so many community programs. Yeah, you gotta.
It's interesting to compare depictions of revolutionary activity.
I still need to play Disco Elysium. A friend of mine bought me this for my birthday 2 years ago, and I never got around to it. I think I'm finally in the correct headspace for this shit, maybe.
With the depictions created by revolutionary practitioners within the context of a revolution. Sergei Eisenstein's October was created in 1927 on the 10-year anniversary of the October Revolution. Where a modern dramatic retelling of Fred Hampton's political life attempts to do so pseudo-biographically, Eisenstein's intentions with October was to represent the historical meaning of the revolution over an adherence to fact, rather than it being the story of Lenin or Trotsky or the other guy.
I think with the new direction of this channel, Disco Elysium would be perfect for you. Maybe we play it on stream.
I do forget his name. He employed thousands of extras in unique roles and focused on their actions to depict a revolution more accurately.
We can still play games if the games are political.
Mass event. It also takes liberties.
Well, all the games are some political and stuff. Like if the games are like directly like making political commentary.
Yes, the finale of the film is one of violent smoking insurrection. In reality, the taking of the Winter Palace, the entire revolution itself, in fact, was an almost entirely bloodless event. The storming of the Bastille during the French Revolution has held strong as a symbol of popular victory over
honest depictions of revolution just get shot by publishers and producers. Yeah.
And
if they get far enough by the CIA.
It can never be overappreciated just how impactful an evocative image can be.
This argument liberal, unfortunately, iPhone.
Whilst the revolutionary tendencies and innovations in the USSR could commingle with such artistic representations, the lack of real revolutionary experiences in the global north, at least in living memory for my generation, leads to one of two results. The mummifying of past revolutions, safely entombed in biopics as Lenin's corpses in Red Square, or the extolling of simulated revolutionary activity. One can look at an argument from the Star Wars show Andor between...
Is this really just a fucking... This is just a conversation that happens in this game on the side. What the fuck is Disco Elysium about, man?
Rail and Saw Gerrera, as the latter chastises other rebellious elements for incorrect theories and projects their own meaning onto it.
Oh yeah, yes it is. What? This is so long.
My base, a New Republican. The Gorman Front, the Partisan Alliance, sectorists.
The separatists are allegorical with Trotskyist splitters in the Labour Party, or the Black Power movement in the US, or imperial core nationalist movements like Scottish independence, whatever bugbear your politics admonished. Or maybe you see this tirade as anti-unity folly. With
yeah, about how politics and heartbreak are the same
thing. Of an anarchist you got into a flame war with back in 2024. These representations had the respective
effect about the human experiments, the human experience, the emotional eternal self, and also the uncontrollable urge to kick a meth up
historic development. Or
game of the century?
Gender interpassivity. Simulating, for example, a debate about means and ends of revolutionary action for us so that we may continue to consume with impunity.
Right.
Feeling as if, because this sort of thing is in the mainstream, the hard job of agitation has been done for us already.
Right.
You can see this especially in people's
the progress has already been made.
Symbols from media over revolutionary iconography from reality, such as Disco Elysium's white star favored by some over any pre-existing symbol of communism.
Okay, wait. This conversation is not in the game. This guy is referencing Disco Elysium. This is what? I don't understand.
It is pure, unsullied by the grave missteps of existence, but also categorically cannot advocate for itself. In order to explain what it represents, one has to return to the actual movements that define it, and all the mess such a task brings. The phrase, if we burn, you burn with us, was taken from the Hunger Games series and transplanted onto banners held by Hong Kong protesters last decade. Whilst figures like Mark Fisher correctly celebrated Collins's work as introducing genuinely revolutionary imagery into the YA mainstream, which has only gotten less ambiguous as our book series has continued, it is also only the simulation of revolution.
Also
like, it's useful shorthand to point to blowing up the Death Star, for example, as a necessary act of unimaginable terrorism in the pursuit of a liberated future. You can even bring up the fact that George Lucas was inspired by the National Liberation Front of South Vietnam in his
role-playing game about being a total failure.
But this is all only so much trivia if such movements are as individualized and structureless as the spread of pop culture fandom within a crowd. As Vincent Bevins analyzes in a conversation with participants.
I cannot believe how long this conversation
One
is.
prominent localist had called out "Reclaim Hong Kong, Revolution in Our Time." This slogan would echo throughout the streets in the second half of 2019, but it was not clear how this revolution would work or who would carry it out. Ao Loong Yu, a participant and veteran Hong Kong activist, worried that it simply got people fired up. It got their blood going, but that in practice it was identical to "if we burn, you burn," cause maximum disruption and hope it will force a positive outcome.
Right.
Under the paving stones, the beach.
Wong Chiu Tat, the head of the
Hard success.
Hong Kong Confederation of Trade Unions, began to be alarmed.
Okay, I know it took me way too long to figure this. I believe this is okay. This is just adopting the Disco Elysium aesthetic because it's a really good way to discuss. Maybe the stuff they're talking about is very interesting. I'm still just very confused by the skin of Disco Elysium over it.
To do so. There was a real gap.
Server, when
between
you
the
titled
idea
one
of
of your videos,
spontaneity and
"Teenagers Are a
reality of
Mistake," what did I do, man?
he said.
Be born.
This returns us to how fictional
You should've
rebellions and
chosen not
revolutions
to,
tend
or
to be
something,
depicted in pop media. The nebulous notion of personal liberties or anti-authority arises spontaneously in a ragtag group of heroes, where positive success is not determined by seizing power, but rather acting as a conduit
Imagine
for others to
being
do
born.
so
Yeah,
after
yeah,
the
yeah.
credits, thus retaining
Huge
the
L.
ideological purity of the hero. Indeed, heroes that do attempt to seize power almost always immediately engage in atrocity, either at last revealing their true self-centered motivations, or in a
This shit
seemingly
was crazy,
unexplainable
man.
break of sanity, thus further disincentivizing action which seizes space.
Like, I know a lot
The
of the show
revolutionary
is
thinking
fucking ass, but
action
what
that
are we
doesn't
doing?
move past the simulation will forever run the risk of being crushed or burning out as narrative rams into reality. One thing I really appreciate about Aether Drift's story is how it represents PNLR. Very much the face of Aether Revolt's renegades, she retains prestige in this new revolutionary future for Avishkar because, rather than understanding revolution as some one-and-done change of affairs, she railed against the limits of the reformist consulate and contributed to
Right.
their overthrow, understanding
It's
as
a
we all
constant
should,
process, I guess, right? Like, it's not just, okay, we like overthrew the government, job's done, everyone go home. It's like, well, now we have to organize our new world, right?
and as Wallerstein summarizes, that revolution is not an event, but a process.
Yes.
Maybe a future return to Avishkar will
It's been
reveal
literally
the
20
flaws,
minutes since we
reform,
last saw an
and
MTG
action
card.
taken
I
in
guess
this
this video is about
revolutionary
Magic the
continuity.
Gathering?
Sitting down to write Oxford's portion of Aether Drift was very much a like, okay, I'm gonna do my best to satisfy what leadership wants, the interplanar death race, but as the set lead and world builder on this set, I'm gonna have my own fun with it, which is, let's assume there's a second revolution that's changed the name of the plane. What can I get in the world building of this set that answers the question of how we got here, and what can I get in this set that now that we're here, we can tee up for we can show what the plane is concerned about, what the people of the plane is concerned about, and what we could pick up, other world builders can pick up and run with the next time we return to Avishkar.
Media about revolution could be hyperstitional. It certainly can be influential and inspiring, but it will always be limited by virtue of the fact that it primarily...
You know what? He put that word on the screen 30 minutes ago, and I still... Hyperstitional. Or stitional? Hyperstition. An idea or fictional concept that makes itself real through the power of belief and cultural circulation. Is that what he was talking about? Biting my tongue so I don't derail the stream at all with how I feel about Chandra Nalar and how I feel about how she was handled.
Entertainment commodity within a non-revolutionary system.
I don't know if we'll derail it that. You can speak your mind. I just don't know if we'll derail it that much because I don't really know anything about. You know, I don't know. I just don't know. I couldn't have a conversation about it. I fear.
It's time for me to get as dry as virtue and talk about revolution in a video I purposefully did not seek sponsors for. You thought my shit was too political before? Welcome to the uncut experience, baby!
All right, I'm interested in this. What are we doing?
I am happy how well disposed the United States are to render every aid in their power to our good friends and allies to quell the alarming insurrection of the in Hispaniola.
Oh, okay. Yeah, 1791. Watched it writing in support of France in response to the Haitian slave revolution. Yeah, sure.
Webster's dictionary defines revolution as a political event where revolution is an old word. Previous to our modern use of it, it was borrowed from astronomy, used to designate a rotation, meaning the re-establishment of stable institutions during periods of trouble. This is how the so-called Glorious Revolution of 1688 got its name, a peaceful restoration of monarchy in England on a constitutional basis. The events which led to the brief establishment of a British Republic in the 1640s, in contrast, is considered a civil war. It is only with the French Revolution, which
something about history and the victors.
Radical new principles, more or less disconnected from historical continuity, that our present understanding of it develops. They even went so far as to announce a new era of time, with a new revolutionary calendar, one that replaced the 7-day week with a 10-day one, and thus was broadly despised by everyone who worked for a living.
Our modern understanding of revolution is best broken down into three forms: political revolution, social revolution, and counter-revolution. In a political revolution, the aim is concentrated on deposing political parties, presidents, policies, or structures of government. Think of movements like that of Tahrir Square in 2011 or the Chinese Cultural Revolution. These are radically different movements with totally different conditions.
The second time he's brought up the Egyptian one.
Different lasting effects on their respective nations and the world, but they share the common thread that both sought a changing of the guard within the halls of power, or the means by which that guard could be changed, but not the abolition or supplantation of those halls. Social revolutions instead take aim at the foundations of society, the relations and mode of production. Rather than saying that the system needs different people in charge of it or to increase democratic participation in said system, these revolutions call for an entirely new system.
So I guess I'm more of a social revolution guy.
The Paris Commune, the October Revolution, and Black Reconstruction in the American South all bear these marks, taking aim at the way that the nation itself and its means of production are organized and distributed, and forcefully transitioning them into a different stage.
Miss Bumbleflower is Satan. Who the fuck?
In open rebellion of the new Third French Republic. On top of liquidating the army and replacing it with the mainly working class National Guard, Guard that assembled during the Franco-Prussian War, the Commune was formed of the municipal councillors, chosen by universal suffrage in the various wards.
Chatter is correct, I'm afraid. I believe it.
At short terms. The Commune was to be a working, not a parliamentary body, executive and legislative at the same time. Instead of continuing to be the agent of the central government, the police was at once stripped of its political attributes and turned into the responsible and at all times revocable agent of the Commune. So were the officials of all other branches of the administration.
Sounds
From
nice.
the members of the Commune downwards, the public service had to be done at workmen's wages. The Commune did not just get rid of the bad actors of existing structures, but broke those structures
It's the
completely.
money that makes you
Different
share and
people
care
weren't
until
just
everyone
elected to a
dies.
parliament,
I see.
but the parliament itself was abolished and replaced with a simultaneously executive and legislative body, meaning that the people making policy decisions would also be the ones implementing them, breaking down the distinction between work and politics. Think, for example, of your Minister for Education having to also work as a teacher to roll out the changes they made whilst experiencing them firsthand.
Yeah. Linda McMahon, ladies and gentlemen.
This is
Was she the one? She was the fucking she was the one who was talking about how like he misread AI as like Owl or something. She's like, everyone's talking about Owl these days. Why is Owl in the news? Who's Owl?
Is a broad simplification of how such systems inspired by this event would formulate, but even this would produce far more humane policy by virtue of the fact that legislators wouldn't be separated from the hardships they created. This revolution generated that stark assessment in Marx's writing, which would go on to define post-capitalist revolutionary politics, that the working class cannot simply lay hold of ready-made state machinery and wield it for its own purposes. His argument,
or I believe, possibly, maybe I'm misinterpreting this phrase, but something that I hear black folks talk about a lot. This is basically, I think, a rephrasing of saying that you cannot dismantle the master's house with his own tools.
was that liberation for any exploited class could never be found even in a supermajority of support in existing state apparatus. What needed to occur was an unmaking and reconstruction. This brings us on to counter-revolution. At its simplest, this is a movement which seeks to either unmake or prevent revolution. These are most often organised from the top down, members of the ruling class, conservative generals, deposed monarchs, foreign powers, or, as was the case in many post-socialist counter-revolutions, disillusioned party members with their own designs on governance. It would be incorrect to say this is the universal case, as could be seen in the former German Democratic Republic, where mass mobilizations against the socialist-led government contributed greatly to the country's eventual dissolution. These mass movements, however, were hardly unified on the topic of what was to come after. Signs held at the Alexanderplatz demonstration, the largest ever non-government gathering in the country's history, ranged from those demanding a market economy to those advocating for socialism but rejecting the current leadership. Speakers at this event ranged from anti-government activists to members of the government themselves who were mercilessly booed to writers like Stefan Heym. A committed anti-fascist, he was introduced as a revered leader for the movement and spoke on the importance of democracy and the desire for socialism.
And today, you're all here, gathered of your own free will, for freedom and democracy, for socialism that is worthy.
He sounds, I know they edited the sound, but it sounds really...
I don't know about you, but hearing 500,000 anti-government protesters applaud a guy advocating for socialism in Berlin 5 days before the wall fell was quite a brain-destroying thing to behold. Of course, when the wall did eventually fall, there was to be no reformed socialism in its place. The people who put tigers on their placards won. Let that be some kind of lesson to you all. Whilst worker or student uprisings,
I don't know if I got what I'm supposed to get out of that, but it's interesting, I guess.
By those governments, true counter-revolution seeks to undo social or economic innovations and return to or mimic comparatively regressive modes of production, something often far from the majority demand of those rebels. This is not to say that the fall of the Berlin Wall wasn't celebrated and seized upon by those with an avidly capitalistic
Nothing
bent.
ever happens,
The fire
real.
sale of the GDR's industry, which closed off or sold,
And therefore you
80%
should
of it,
never try to
leading
do anything and
this
vote
day
for the
entrenched
center party
economic
again.
disparity, which has given rise to the Nazi apologist AfD party, is a certain sign of that.
Yes.
Nor is this to say that individual anti-communists weren't a significant
Second
factor
most
in these
popular party in,
protests, or even
in
that
Germany
those
last time
protesters
I
who
checked,
wanted
by
a
the way.
renewed revolution didn't unwittingly contribute to counter-revolution. Rather, it's to demonstrate that where there are popular mass movements, even when they're against ossified socialist governments, those advocating for a political revolution to make good on the gains and promises of the previous social revolution are significant and
As a German,
routinely
it's
and
complicated? Oh, yeah.
purposefully forgotten. Colour revolutions exist in an interesting space between these realities and are particularly pertinent.
Rather they really try to make nothing
because
ever
the
happen,
unseen
end of
revolution
history and all
drift
that?
falls
Yeah,
into the naming convention of them, even if it doesn't reflect their
What is a
usual
color
character.
revolution? I don't know
A
what
colour
that means.
revolution is so called because of how its understanding reflects its content. Usually
What?
targeted by a colour or similarly easily disseminated image like a flower, the movement is usually unified around regime change, with mass action subordinated to a viral media
So usually a political
They adopt
revolution.
aesthetics designed to transmit easily via television and the internet. A colour and a simple slogan name, often just one word, are chosen to represent the movement. In Ukraine in 2004, for example, the colour was orange and the slogan, yes. Colour revolutions are, by and large, against the current
I
politics.
feel like I heard about color revolutions on the stream. I must be crossing my streams. I think you're crossing your streams. I mean, maybe we've heard the word mentioned before, but I don't think I ever had like a good understanding of it.
Critique goes no deeper than that. Or rather, if members in the movement do have deeper societal criticisms, rarely do they end up manifesting in the process of regime change. Colour revolutions, where successful, always conclude similarly, regardless of the means they employ, as Peter Gelderloos summarises in The Failure of Non-Violence. Compare a violent tulip and non-violent orange colour revolution, and you will find there is no difference in the results. In both cases, the movement accomplished a regime change, and within a couple of years, everyone was disillusioned because the new government proved to be the same as the old government.
So this is the problem with political revolutions, basically? It's like one of these is a political revolution, one of them is a... Well, they're both political revolutions, right? Therefore, all they did was change the guy in power. It's the idea, again, of like, oh, if we just get rid of the bad president, then everything will be okay. It's like, well, no, man, your system's fucked from the ground up.
The main thing that distinguishes colour revolutions and other political revolutions is both their playbook of sloganizing...
Also, I did speed it up a little bit more, just but in the interest, because I've been pausing more than I wanted to. But he talks slow enough, I think you should be fine. If it's way too fast, let me know, I'll slow it down a bit.
Nebulous demands surrounding change, but also...
Something the state holding monopoly of power advocating for non-violence. Yeah.
As Bevan's If We Burn does, we can see how the latter was initially a leaderless and ideologically diverse movement which torched police stations and seized space in the titular Tahrir Square to prefigure structureless organizations representing potentials for the nascent Egyptian revolution. The target of the movement's ire, the
Tahrir, by the way, Tahrir Square. This is 2011. This is actually this is the revolution in the wake of which my family immigrated to Canada. So this is actually very personally familiar to me. But yeah, Tahrir means like literally like liberation. So it's
notoriously
maybe ironic, maybe at the very least somewhat interesting that it happened in Liberation Square, but...
corrupt and repressive government of Hosni Mubarak was initially defended in the West, with Tony Blair calling the man an immensely courageous force for good, mostly, as Bevins characterizes, because of his friendship with Israel. In comparison, the Orange Revolution, which began after Yulia Tymoshenko raised a call to rally against Viktor Yanukovych, who had just narrowly beaten her running mate Viktor Yushchenko in the 2004 presidential election, drew immediate Western support. It wasn't a movement just backed by political elites, but was incited by them. The demands of the movement and immediate rerun of the election was deeply beneficial to Western organs, for the same reason the original results were beneficial to Russian interests. The two candidates favoured one respective direction for the country. A factor to consider in this comparison and in our discussion is the utility of the term.
The whole Middle East perception is the biggest brainwash in the West? Maybe. It's certainly up there. I think the perception of the system of government in the West is the biggest brainwash in the West. You know what I mean? I think the idea that number two, then, yeah. The idea that, like, the West and Western governments are and have kind of always been the axis of evil for the past 100 years, like several hundred years. And they have been, like, the bad guys in the entire world forever. And, like, we have basically just been evil for the entirety of the... I mean, for all these settler colonial nations, for example, like America, Canada, shit like that. Like, we have just been... like truly some of the greatest evils in the world for our entire history from the day we were born as countries.
Revolutions are considered to be breaks in a
I feel like most people the idea that isn't true might be the biggest brainwash. But
the Cuban Revolution of the 1950s liberated the nation from the gangster state of the Batista.
I know that one.
Began socialist transformation, but a mass movement, even one which causes the ousting of a president or government, is not necessarily a revolution. A rebellion certainly, but a rebellion is far more easy to manipulate or recuperate. Looking at the Tamarod Rebellion of 2013, which presented itself as the legacy of Tahrir Square and grew in response to dissatisfaction with the Muslim Brotherhood, the party which won power in the elections after the fall of Mubarak, millions of signatures were gathered for the then president Mohamed Morsi to call new elections. On June 30th, millions of people took to the streets. However, as an activist who joined the throng and who'd been active during the original...
Imagine beating up the US government, becoming the new government, then oops, we become the US government.
Gahad,
well,
who hated Morsi, went. But she thought this protest was very strange. This was very different from 2011. Back then, she had risen to action after seeing a protester face down police violence. This time, the police were supporting the demonstration, and protesters were taking selfies with cops. The June 30 movement...
This is what they call a parade.
Also had the...
If your protest has the sanctioning of the police and the government, then, or some aspects of the government, then you are what, as they say, hosting a parade.
Backing of major media, which had been building up to this date for weeks. This felt wrong. On July 3rd, Defense Minister General Abdel Fattah el-Sisi seized power.
Abdel Fattah el-Sisi, oh boy,
for himself,
and he is in power until today, probably through fair and free elections or whatever.
Coup. We were played, Gahad said. Simple as that.
Bevan's book is a trove of accounts like this. Spontaneous movements and horizontalist organizations seizing space both physically and socially to push for some kind of targeted change, only to refuse to take power, either for strategic or ideological reasons. This then allowed reactionary forces to co-opt their energy and push through their own kind of change. The Abolish the Police movement in the States in 2020 is a perfect example of this. Revolutionary action was taken, space was seized, and some highly local oppressive structures were demolished. Hell, everyone bought Our Prison's Obsolete by Angela Davis and read it over the weekend, but the mass movement was quickly recuperated by liberals seeking election and mutated into a far more reformist call: defund the police.
Right. It's the, I guess, the subsumption, is that the correct words? Getting subsumed, the subsumption of all revolutionary ideals by the system into the system to something tamer that isn't necessarily a problem.
The question of
being politically savvy has been the worst thing for mental health possible. Yeah.
From the carceral state,
Ignorance is bliss.
Pledge to re-examine city budgets.
What are we doing? We're watching a video about revolution, fascism, and Magic the Gathering.
A protest, and the system it was protesting inside of eventually swallowed it. Gelderloos produces a useful checklist for assessing the revolutionary character of an uprising, which can be used to question the legitimacy of a growing movement. The 4 basic criteria check, firstly, whether a movement seizes space for new social relations, literally occupying a physical area and allowing for the proliferation of distinctly uncapitalist ways of being with each other.
Also, the word is controlled opposition. Sure.
Ideas. Third, whether it had elite support. And fourth, whether it achieved or aims to achieve any concrete gains in improving.
Wait, this seems interesting. I want to hear this again.
Legitimacy of a growing movement. The 4 basic criteria check, firstly, whether a movement seizes space for new social relations, literally occupying a physical area and allowing for the proliferation of distinctly uncapitalist ways of being with each other and the world.
Sure.
Second, whether it spread an awareness of new ideas. Third, whether it had elite support. And fourth, whether it achieved
I assume that third one should be no.
In improving people's lives. The last one is the most difficult to assess. Whilst Gelderloos insists that bourgeois democracy is merely another way to organize exploitation, oppression, and social control, he doesn't disagree that the toppling of a repressive dictatorial regime like Mubarak's was an empowering act, which opened up new possibilities for struggle and began to change the position of women, workers, and Muslims within Egyptian society.
You know, progress is not all or nothing, right? It was still progress to get rid of Mubarak, but obviously, you know, it doesn't necessarily mean that, oh, everything is fucking fixed, everything's awesome, everything's perfect. Keeping your moral integrity while having the power to do whatever the fuck you want is really hard,
bourgeois
you know?
Democracy was the structure which briefly replaced him. A structure
Freedom.
that many people gave their lives in pursuit of. I don't know, it's almost like the question of how to change the world is one which necessitates a degree of nuance employed in its answer. Or some fucking annoying bullshit like that.
That's true, it is really, why couldn't it just be easy?
Is this a triumph to be consecrated at altars, to be commemorated with grateful thanksgiving, to be offered to the divine humanity with fervent prayer and enthusiastic ejaculation? These
Excuse me?
human and Thracian orgies acted in France and applauded only in the old Jewry, I assure you, kindle prophetic enthusiasms in the minds but of very few people in this kingdom.
Why do white people talk like this? The father of modern conservatism, denouncing the Women's March on Versailles in 1789, which violently stormed the palace, demanding bread and constitutional reform, resulting in the flight of King Louis, some guy from, you know, okay, sure. It's a, yeah. He didn't, the conservative does not like revolution. Interesting.
Good and which ones are bad.
Haha, I pinned you into arguments. You don't have the answer to complex political issues within 30 seconds, therefore socialism fails. Yes, yes. What if we just did nothing instead? That would be so much easier.
Holds the Haitian Revolution or Sankara's victory in Burkina Faso, or even Traoré's contemporary seizure of power in that same country as icons of praise. Or maybe you're a communist who thinks that only one revolution on Earth was the right one, and that everyone who disagrees with you is a secret fascist collaborator. We here at the Spice 8 Rack welcome all viewpoints. Unless you're an apologist for the government of Laos.
Excuse me?
The power of cultural hegemony comes in being able, actively or
Big
passively,
Tent
to
or
define
something, except
narrative
Laos?
around how similar historical events are discussed or represented in fiction. The French Revolution is celebrated for its institution of a republic, just as America did. But Robespierre is condemned as a nexus for the political violence of the terror which followed, whereas the political violence of the American Revolution is brushed over, either in categorizing opponents as traitors who deserved some comeuppance, or like the uncomfortable similarity of how both states extended liberty, fraternity, and equality to only specific kinds of people are simply unremarked upon.
I really like how white people used to talk during the 1900s. You're thinking of the transatlantic accent. I do miss when white people had the transatlantic accent. Give them something.
Limiting their colonial expansion as a motivating factor for the rebellion, or the massacres of native tribes who sided with or were accused of siding with the crown, are either ignored or considered a separate issue, which are a massive.
They talked in italics, yeah. They did kind of go off the transatlantic accent. Since then, they haven't really done much.
It's not that this analysis
that is like, you know, good.
Exist, more so that when an event as complex as the
is that kind of like how the Mask talked? Yeah. It's like how Marilyn Monroe talked, you know.
remaking of a society through warfare becomes naturally entangled with myth-making and replicated in popular media, the most reductive reading transforms into a form of common knowledge. Losordo's Liberalism, a Counter-History is a startling antidote for this. He unpicks the historical contradictions and deadly hypocrisies of liberal ideology and states, from which
The Mask does not really have a transatlantic accent, if I recall.
a Hegel quote, which I think captures the need for such an unpicking of romanticism and myth surrounding
Also, yeah, hello,
critical
Quacksack.
appraisals of revolution.
Is the answer
What is
resource
well known
medicine?
Precisely because it is well
Maybe.
known is not known. In the knowledge process, the commonest way to mislead oneself and others is to assume that something is well known and to accept it as such.
What the fuck? These people are all so flowery in their language, man. What is happening? What is well known, precisely because it is well known, is not. Oh, I see. You ever watch Moneyball? You ever watch Moneyball? The start of Moneyball is this quote that's like, "It's not what you don't know that gets you; it's what you know to be true that just ain't so." That's what he's saying. Things that you are certain are correct are the things that are actually going to fuck you over the most.
There is a definite inequality in how these events are remembered and depicted, which obfuscates the injustices enacted as a result and makes learning lessons from them, such as interrogating whether
It's called
such
the
things
thought
resulted
terminating
from a
cliche,
poisoned
like it is what it
ideological
is.
route
Yeah,
or
yeah.
were simple administrative
Curtains are
missteps,
blue.
an unnecessary struggle. As the historian Gerald Horne puts
Anti-intellectualists.
it, though the creating of revolutionary regimes in France, China, and Russia, among others, has been subjected to withering analysis of their respective real and imagined debilities, the United States of America largely has escaped similar scrutiny of its origins, though it has been apparent for some time that the blessings of liberty escaped the grasp of the Africans and the indigenous most terribly, and this was hardly a matter of happenstance.
I don't control the railways or the
America's
flow of
second
commerce. I
social
do not control the speed at which
American Civil
lobsters
War,
die.
which deposed the slave economy of the South.
That's
in favor of the
Barbie,
industrial
right? So you
capitalism
call
of
me a fascist? I don't control the railways or the flow of commerce. Never ask Canadians about their indigenous. Never ask Canadians what residential schools are and when the last residential school was closed. Definitely don't ask them those questions back to back, and definitely don't then follow up with, what year were you born?
North. The violent struggle to end slavery is rightfully
Spice
celebrated.
Rack is based.
but the legacy of
I will
black
say, so
reconstruction
far,
is
this is
held
it's a
in
good video. It's a good video. I think it's a little over my head. I think I'm not. Yeah, I think I'm still too baby woke to figure this shit out. I think it's a little over my head, but I'll still keep listening to it.
The self-governing black communities that established themselves, expropriating slaveholder property and crushing counter-revolutionary currents with the backing of the Union Army, was as much a part of that revolutionary
Wasn't the
process.
last residential school closed in like 2010? Fuck, maybe. I thought the date that I have in my head is 1992, which is still unbelievably recent. You know what I mean? Considering I heard mid-90s, yeah, the date that I hold in my head is 1992. If you are ever talking to a Canadian that is 30 years old, and they're trying to tell you some shit about like, oh, who cares? Like, this shit was so long ago.
As the Civil War itself. It was also a process cut short when the disputed...
I have like 2015 on my head, some news story on the radio. All right, hold up. When was the last Canadian residential school shut down? 1996. Oh my god. Yeah, let's not call him that. That's the year my brother was born. That is the year my brother was born. That is the year my brother is born. That is the year my brother is born. Might be what they found on site way later. Oh, you're talking about the mass graves of indigenous people under the residential schools. Yeah. A lot of that was literally and figuratively dug up in 2015. The mass graves of indigenous children under the residential schools. Yeah. That was a little bit more recent, yeah. But yeah, the last one of these residential schools was in operation until 1996. My brother turned 30 this year, and he is the same age as the closing of the residential schools. So if anyone ever tells you, oh, you know, that can't... First off, if everyone ever tries to say some shit about, like, oh, you know, Canada is not like the U.S., Canada is like this, everyone's nice in Canada, and everyone just says thank you and A and all of this, and sorry, that's propaganda in and of itself. And two, if anyone ever tries to say, oh, that shit was so long ago, who even cares? My brother is a young man, and he was born the year they closed the last residential school.
Presidential election of 1876.
It's not like after residential schools, it's like, oh, indigenous mistreatment ended either. But like, we're talking about actual genocidal practices towards the indigenous people. You know what I mean? Like straight up Nazi shit. 1996.
Up real concerns of a second civil war.
Not like oppression, not systemic, like discrimination. No. Like actual straight up genocidal settler colonial shit, 1996.
And led to the...
Canadians might be polite, it doesn't mean nice. Oh yeah. Oh, fuck yeah, man. I spent more than enough time with enough hosers in fucking St. Catherine's. Tell you that one for free.
Hayes Tilden Compromise, which saw federal troops removed from the South. And
So nice when Obama solved racism. So true, man. We're going to learn about what him and Cuba tomorrow, and I'm sure it'll be just fine.
The victory of industrial capital had been secured, and the following disenfranchisement of the emancipated black population was a worthy price for the northern elite to pay in exchange for peace over continued revolution. It's not for nothing that this event is understood as one of the three great corrupt bargains of American history. As the activist and organizer Frank Chapman summarizes, one of the great lessons to be learned is that the principal cause of the failure of Reconstruction is that the North decisively defeated the South militarily, but capitulated to the South economically and politically.
Right.
The shortcomings of the Civil
What's your
War's
favorite
aftermath
Magic the
aren't
Gathering
viewed as
card
the
so
triumph of
far? I think I saw a Magic the Gathering card once that made it so that when you played the card, you and your opponent had to go play a second game. And then based on the outcome of that, something else happened. I think I've seen this. 3 great corrupt deals in American history. Got to be a heated list. There's just no way it's only 3, too. I think it was something like that, right? It's like a card. You had to go play a second game of Magic the Gathering, and then based on that, something happened. Charizard? Yeah. Charizard. Yeah.
Revolutionary impetus.
That one, I don't think I like it in the sense that I don't think it sounds like a fun card, but it's just really funny as an idea.
Of the latter can more easily be folded into the canon narrative of enlightened whiteness.
I don't think it's good for the game or anything. But
slavery, whereas the former cannot help but acknowledge Washington's betrayal of burgeoning black self-governance. We could see this trend too reflected during the War of Independence. Former Bristol MP, now full-time statue, Edmund Burke, wrote with abject horror at the destruction of the ancient regime of monarchy in France, which contrasts curiously with his conciliatory approach to American independence years earlier. Even as an abolitionist, although Burke was an abolitionist in the same way that Sir Keir Starmer is a human rights lawyer, he rejected the idea that Britain should declare a general enfranchisement of enslaved people in America to undermine the rebellion, tying the ownership of enslaved people to a love of liberty. In Virginia and the Carolinas, they have a vast multitude of slaves. Where this is the case in any part of the world, those who are free are by far the most proud and jealous of their freedom. Freedom to them is not only an enjoyment, but a kind of rank and privilege. In such a people, the haughtiness of domination combines with the spirit of freedom, fortifies it, and renders it invincible.
You can justify anything to yourself if you are fucking ignorant and evil enough. Owning slaves means you love freedom is when you own slaves. And the more slaves you own, the more you love freedom, actually. Because it gives you an appreciation for freedom to see these enslaved people be stripped of their own. The slave owners actually are the greatest lovers of freedom in the entire world. Okay, yeah, no, sure, man. How do we end up with white people, bro? How did this shit happen?
That revolution is evil unless led by slave owners.
Putting a war and then not disagreeing and even taking some of the other guys as your own. Wonder where I've heard that recently.
Says in that same speech given in Parliament,
the Civil War is about states' rights? Yeah.
Do we not perceive that the American
Well, someone think of the slave owners.
An armed servile hand in defense of freedom?
Indigenous people basically don't exist anymore because of America and Canada. Yes. Again, very important. If you ever have, like, you know, it's relatively popular to be anti-Israeli these days. If you have ever, like, said that, oh, you know, this is spiritually Israeli, or, like, also, you know, fucking, you're an IDF soldier or some shit as, like, an insult. Remember that Canada and the US and other settler colonial nations like them are just successful Israels. It's like, imagine, it's just Israel, but, like, they successfully killed everyone who lived there, took the land, and pretended nothing happened.
Success.
We are no different. In fact, we are worse because we are completed.
It is a warning, in line with his criticism of so-called mob rule, that should England offer enslaved people freedom, America would be forced into a desperate situation and do the same, thus letting this servile hand play a part in the battle for and construction of a new state of affairs.
What are we
Additionally, whilst America was rebelling against the British Crown, they didn't threaten the Crown's continued existence, as the French revolutionaries did for their erstwhile monarch. They also weren't advocating for a great upheaval in the economic mechanisms or hierarchy of their colonies, instead arguing that they would simply manage their economic paradigm of slavery and colonization better than Britain. Burke wanted liberty, but one passed down by enlightened rulers rather than seized by societies repressed, even at the cost of freedom for the enslaved, and where a preferred and acceptable tradition would be retained even after political upheavals. This, to me, represents the foundation of modern liberal perspectives on revolution, where only those led by great men with lofty ideals, rather than the popular masses demanding a new paradigm, is to be celebrated, even if it entails the necessary continuation of accepted
fucking great man theory of history, yes.
What a Burke. That's your joke for this hour. Savor it.
Other revolutions in which the
God, it's still
themselves could
so
not be denied mastery
common
of their
great
own
man
destiny
L.
are,
Yeah.
in that regard,
We're not even like, we're like a third of the way through the video, maybe.
Both national liberation and the abolition of slavery by the formerly enslaved.
It's such a long
years
video.
before any other nation on earth. But not only is this revolution overlooked, the country itself has been actively punished for its ancestors' insurrections. Enslaved Haitians overthrew and slew their masters and established a free nation, which would be invaded by France, the island's previous owner, with the US supplying aid to these invading forces. The US itself attempted to annex the island in the 1870s, later occupying it from 1915 to 1935. 1935 and routinely interfering in the state's politics to this day, exacerbating
My
terrors
God,
which
man.
are creating refugees that the US then demonizes.
They're eating the dogs, the people that came in. They're eating the cats. They're eating...
Morbid fact, in 1825, France
Me when I
and the Haitian
blow up
government would
someone's
pay
country so they
150
can't live
million
in it
francs
anymore
in
and then
lost
fucking
property,
demonize
which
them
of
when they
course
try to
included
move
the
to
newly
mine.
emancipated slaves in exchange for diplomatic recognition and not invading it again. A debt which, due to interest and the nation's poverty, the Haitian state wouldn't be able to settle for over a century, and which it would only be able to pay back by taking huge loans from foreign banks.
Fun.
French banks specifically.
History started in
Convenient that
2001.
These
So true.
modern-day billions of dollars are easily the largest form of reparations related to slavery paid by any state, by the way. If that makes you angry, congratulations on your actually existing sense of justice.
Yep.
Whilst the Haitian Revolution was and is largely ignored in education and media, when it is discussed, there is a pervasive trend of white paternalism, echoed in the all-encompassing celebration of Lincoln rather than the actual instigators of revolution, the enslaved themselves who fought physically and economically long before the first shots from Fort Sumner were fired, and long after the Articles of Surrender were written. It can be found
Hard to say, Apollo. Mostly money,
who
probably.
historians credit as the agents of inspiration for movements like Haiti's revolution, to the detriment of historic fact. Many historians are more willing to accept the idea that slaves could have been influenced by whites or free mulattoes with whom we know they had limited contacts than they are willing to accept the idea that slaves could have convinced other slaves that they had the right to revolt. In one of their earliest negotiations with representatives of the French government, the leader of the rebellion did not ask for an abstractly couched freedom. Rather, the most sweeping demands included 3 days a week to work on their own gardens and the elimination of the whip. These were not Jacobinistic
My God.
demands adapted to the tropics, nor royalist
elimination
claims
of the
twice
whip.
realised. These were slave demands with a strong peasant touch that would characterize independent Haiti.
The weather up there
But
fucking
such
blows,
evidence
they have to
of an
menace
internal
everyone
drive,
else.
although known to most historians, is not debated, not even to be rejected or interpreted otherwise. It is simply ignored, and this ignorance produces a silence of trivialization. Thus, the noble demands of the oppressed are reframed as enlightened white wisdom and cast in the canon of positive revolution, whereas the unsightly elements, enslaved people hanging their former masters and embarrassing the historiographic narrative by ending
God, so
slavery
based.
ahead of Europe, are depicted as barbaric mutations or simply skipped over. This is not to say that such revolts occurred spontaneously and without inspiration. The American War of Independence has been a legitimate source of inspiration for movements and nations around the globe. Putting aside its settler character, 1776, with its determined assault on the divine right of monarch, was inspirational globally, even to those who sparred
What would the
compatibility
world
with
look like
Republic,
if we
such as Ho Chi
never
Minh and
invented
V.I. Lenin.
money?
On that,
Me
the
when I
modern
barter
anti-colonial
for
movement
shit?
can link much of its momentum to the communist revolutions of the 20th century. The Soviet-led Congress of the Peoples of the East in
I'll give you NVIDIA GeForce 4090 for 7 million horses.
1920 hosted 2,000
Me when a violent
delegates
system is
from
overthrown by
29
violence?
Asian
I clap,
nationalities
I clap,
and wrote
I
the
clap.
then established socialist tradition of understanding colonization as a reformable, civilizing mission. Amongst the open declarations of international solidarity, opened with the Soviet host's astounding call for a jihad against imperialism, demands like those made by Turkish feminist Naji Hanım gained great prominence. She called for women's emancipation, complete civil and political equality to be coupled with national liberation, a concept that had yet to be achieved in even the heart of civilized empire, and her plea was facilitated and amplified by the Communist Organized Congress. Lenin had penned
Intersectionality
Imperialism,
or some
the highest
shit?
stage of capitalism some years earlier, which scholars like Pankaj Mishra credit as the text of many anti-colonial activists and thinkers. He also exposed and destroyed a secret deal between Tsarist Russia and Britain to parcel out the Near East after World War I, and those under his leadership began to establish communist
Near
parties throughout
East.
the occupied world. This represented a huge stride forward in comparison with the Bernstein school of imperial socialism, the great divide between the communists and the socialists of Europe erupting as a result of the latter's support for their national ruling classes during the First World War. But there were still shortfalls. Whilst in line with emancipatory ideology, those previously mentioned acts were not purely ones of humanist benevolence, even if they convinced many anti-colonial activists like Ho Chi Minh to join and develop the communist cause. Rather, for the Soviets, this was also a strategic realigning with the East in response to isolation and invasion from the West, both to seek new political and economic allies, but also to act as a bargaining chip in negotiations with their present adversaries.
Right.
Britain, for example, demanded as part of an inaugural trade deal with the US.
So I hate to focus so fucking hard on this video.
Agitation in the Crown's sphere of influence. The Pan-African Marxist Walter Rodney also points out the
I've heard of
inconsistent
this
history
fella.
of the USSR's approach to its own decolonization. In the regime's revolutionary beginnings, Soviet historians describe Tsarist Russia as a prison of nations, and thus the uprising of the toilers striking back at the system of colonial oppression were therefore portrayed sympathetically as national liberation movements.
Sure.
However, in the 30s and 40s, these historians underwent a change, when national unity and patriotism was stressed, and whilst the party agreed that more attention should be paid to the history of non-Russian people in the USSR, the critiques of Tsarist plunder and exploitation of non-Russians was to be mollified. Tsarism was portrayed as a lesser evil than the straightforward continuation of native rule. This is not to dismiss the definite contributions even the most heavily criticized communist states have made to this global struggle, or that of a range of global injustices. Rather, as the professor Enzo Traverso insists, contradictory, flawed, and imperfect as communism's relationship with anti-colonialism is, it does not change the historical role played by the USSR as a rear base for many anti-colonial revolutions.
Basically, even if a communist state was imperfect and did a lot of bad shit, there was still progress being made, I suppose. But if they get to required reading about barter by androism, I don't get embeds. You can do it if you get another role. single people, people with one role cannot single people. Single people can't make embeds. You have to have a girlfriend or a boyfriend or a partner otherwise. But yeah, people with one role can't make embeds as a bot fighting mechanism.
The entire process of decolonization took place in the context of the Cold War within the relations of force established by the USSR. This example is instructive as to why a large part of this video has and is orbiting the experiences of the October Revolution. Not because it was a flawless icon of the idea, far from it, but more so to try and demonstrate the complicated reality of revolution, the massive gains and quashed potentials, the way
Very cool. That was my message. If YouTube chatter wants to see that or just look at Andrewism, he's cool. Oh, I've heard of this fellow too. I've watched a couple of his videos.
Still stay the same for generations unless changed through constant struggle. Hell, I can imagine a reality where Miguel Lopez continued to work on the story of magic, seeing dispossessed or occupied factions in the multiverse raising flags linked materially, socially, and
oh right, dude, this video is about Magic the Gathering.
Theoretically with the Indigo Revolution as its soft power spreads, only to then struggle within their new bloc as ideas as to what ought to be done now, how a system that's never been built before ought to develop, clash with one another. I think that would be really fucking sick, and there's also not a snowball's chance in hell that that's the direction Magic Story is going to go in.
Yeah.
People can only liberate themselves, shown in the fraught conditions and popular resistance to top-down revolutionary impositions.
Yep.
From Portuguese and Spanish revolt to Napoleonic occupation in the 19th century, to popular mobilizations after the Soviet invasion.
Always got to be bottom up,
Czechoslovakia,
I
to the near
understand.
constant crises of every nation the US has exported democracy to. But despite this, generations of liberatory thinkers cannot help but point to examples of emancipatory movements, even those they're in direct conflict with, as linkages in the new history they hope to wrought. Socialists wave the red
Once again,
flag in
communism
protest
also
against
grows from
socialist
change, meanwhile
governments, which
capitalism is
claim it as part of
unchanging
their
and
tradition,
stale.
and the aforementioned Tradore dons the
Mayhaps.
outfit of Sankara. Whether this is a signal of revolutionary continuity or a simulation of it has yet to fully unfold.
What a nice
Quoting
smile.
from Marx's Brumaire, men make their own history, but they do not make it as they please. They do not make it under self-selected circumstances, but under circumstances existing already, given and transmitted from the past. The tradition of all dead generations weighs like a nightmare on the brains of the living, and just as they seem to be occupied with revolutionizing themselves and things, creating something that did not exist before, precisely in such epochs of revolutionary crisis, they anxiously conjure up the spirits of the past to their service, borrowing from them names, battle slogans, and costumes in order to present this new scene in world history in time-honored disguise.
Okay,
and
okay.
borrowed
I
language.
wasn't understanding it. I understood it by the
Elements
end.
of
Okay,
revolutionary
gotcha.
Communism can be found in this socio-political seance. Since the fall of communism and the end of history, there have been no great narratives attached to the development of our
The end of history,
Things
my
are
God,
how they
man.
are. There are no alternatives.
I think a big
that
issue is many
capitalist
young
realism
commies are
of
clinging to historical figures like
So
their
those
gods
looking
without
to
admitting
improve the
flaws
world,
and adapting to the
democratize
change of
life,
time. I
end
think that's what that
exploitation,
marks.
save
What that
humanity from
marks.
an irrational
I
and consuming
forgot.
economic system,
Well,
struggles
that
to find
quote we just read,
conclusions not
I think
bound
is
up
somewhat
with
about
past
that.
communist theory and experiments. There is a tendency, however, in remembering revolution by those who genuinely believe in a post-capitalist world, whichever form that may take, to romanticize the revolutionary process, either
Yes.
in uncritically valorizing historical instances or in
Yep.
simplified fiction. The latter is the easiest to describe, as we can see in Aether Drift. Oh, sweet, it's a Magic the Gathering video again. Woohoo! Once vestiges of the old order seek to
Let's
retake power
go!
and
I
undo
love
the
stocking
deeds
up.
of the revolution. The world that they wish to unmake is so benign that their demands for a return to order and tradition can only be read as ideological desperation. The revolution was bloodless and has implemented fair policies with no strife or fundamental remaking of social relations. Labour doesn't seem to be all that differently organised. The family unit manifests itself in a standard to our norms way. The aristocracy has not been expropriated of their mansions, etc.
Right.
In practice, counter-revolutionary tendencies within revolutions have agitated around both continuing and fresh hardships within the new agenda to undermine it. For example, during Reconstruction, the mismanagement and failure of the Freedmen's Savings Bank, established by abolitionists in the wake of black emancipation, led to massive economic shocks to the economies of the South during the Panic of 1873. This was then seized upon by Democrats who linked the Depression to the policies of the Reconstructionist Grant administration, using the crisis to win power and officially ending Reconstruction in 1877. That people's lives were ruined by an institution associated with the pursuit of liberation is true, as is the fact that those who most precociously decried that event were doing so in order to besmirch the liberatory goal in its entirety, not just problematic elements.
And taking basically opportunism, right? Taking advantage of the, you know, the liberation movement doing something wrong to discredit the whole thing.
Writers, as discussed previously, but this is still a revolution whose transition to regime has miraculously left it without any real points of critique. It's still refreshing, both in how it's a revolutionary story that isn't a cautionary tale and one with clear grounding in revolutionary theory, but there is still space to present revolution as a hopeful, joyful endeavor, whilst also positioning it as a struggle. One which, as we shall see, and
Don't overly romanticize
rarely
it,
could
because it's
enact
not going to
and
be that
maintain
pretty in
necessary
reality.
upheavals without engaging in potentially condemnable acts. On the
Cuba's
historical
poor
side of
and
things,
undeveloped. I
contemporary
wonder why. It
revolutions
must be because of all those
often
evil
short-lived
communists
or
in there.
limited revolutionary experiments,
Or
such as those
socialists,
enacted
or
during
whatever.
the Spanish Civil War, Burkina Faso, or locally constructed by the Black Panther Party. These become icons to celebrate going forward, but often transform into simulacrums, a CNT poster representing autonomy and rebellion without critical engagement with the original organization itself. Advocacy barely removed from a Shea shirt. A strangled revolution is a martyr. It's easy to garner sympathy from potential converts or appropriate their aesthetics to make a barely coherent artistic statement by presenting
Shout
movements
out
whose
the
limited
FD signifier,
existence
so
means
true.
that they lacked the ability ability to engage in expanded systemic injustice. A crushed potential is more poetic and enthusing than the complicated reality of realizing that potential, but that territory still comes even with limited and fraught power. The anarchists in the CNT, for example, absolutely did execute priests and create forced labor camps to house flangist and royalist rebels, a policy that other anarchists like Emma Goldman railed against.
Right.
However, as fellow anarchist Augustin Souchy rebutted, these concentration camps, a term he himself used, existed because the struggle against fascism has not ended. The anarchists have to protect themselves against the fascists. This was an emergency measure taken during wartime, in a period where the church actively collaborated with Franco's fascist forces, who were butchering Republicans and civilians using weapons supplied by Hitler.
Right.
Had the Republican front won out in the end, suddenly the martyred anarchists, socialists, and communist forces would have had to contend with administering a nation, much as the Bolsheviks did in the USSR, and the subsequent guarantee of unjust, oppressive, or mismanaged activity as a result. This is not to say, however, that experiments which didn't survive to conquer power, or which were destroyed shortly after doing so, have nothing to teach us. If anything, their brief existence can stand as a testament to their accomplishments, such as the dramatic decrease in infant mortality, increase in literacy, and surge of environmental programs overseen by Sankara in only 4 years as president of Burkina Faso.
I gotta learn about Burkina Faso, by the way. I feel like I keep hearing, it keeps coming back. Like I'm very curious about Burkina Faso.
Remaining in the global south, Project Cybersyn was developed by the Allende government of Chile as a revolutionary cybernetic tool.
Allende. We learned about him.
Designed to aid in national economic planning on socialist lines.
Well,
it was a
vaguely.
deeply effective and efficient project which not only helped the elected government efficiently nationalize industry, but also maintain the distribution of goods during the 1972 truckers or bosses strike in the country, which was financed in no small part by the CIA. It also lives on as an example of the emancipatory potential cyber infrastructure has.
Guy with the
If
banger
a brand
final
new,
speech,
clean
yes.
digital project from the 1970s can successfully ensure that people are fed during economic warfare, what in God's name are we doing letting billionaires use the internet for doxing campaigns and AI slop? It's not for nothing that Pinochet's coup, also financed by the CIA,
compare,
which
man.
the following year,
See again, seeing what these smaller, poorer, more struggling countries have accomplished through the different system, and then looking over and being like, so we're the richest countries in the history of the world? Doesn't feel like it, does it? Doesn't really feel like it.
In the world's first neoliberal regime, dedicated themselves to violently dismantling Project Cybersyn, both in terms of destroying its technology, like stabbing information slides designed for the operations room, and in disappearing many of the project's contributors, amongst the 40,000 odd Chileans murdered by the regime. This is also not to suggest, as some anti-revolutionary commentators do, that the violence of post-capitalist regimes justifies the suppression of revolutionary movements and ideation. Liberalism is perfectly capable of administering.
There are estimates that say global hunger could be eradicated for less than what Elon paid for Twitter. I mean, it could have at least gone a long way.
Gaza. There's also the social murder of our state of affairs, starvation, police brutality, climate collapse, for-profit healthcare and housing leading to easily preventable deaths. These passive injustices, not often carried out with specific direction from a government or private company, don't figure into the common understanding of state violence, but they absolutely should.
Are, yeah.
Over 1 million Americans died during the first years of the COVID pandemic, clearly topping the charts of worldwide deaths by nations, and that's not only considered a business-as-usual thing that happened, but it hasn't led to any top-down refiguration of how healthcare should operate. This is an act of violence by administrative neglect, fueled by ideology. Liberalism will denounce any attempt to put common goods into public democratic control as a prelude to state violence, whilst engaging in unending state and social violence to maintain private ownership. There is an inherent hard limit to what can be accomplished under a capitalist mode of production, both economically and socially, which can only be broken through with the implementation of a new system. Or, to quote from Rosa Luxemburg 5 short years before the founding of the Nazi Party,
you can't dismantle the master's house with their own tools. Type shit. It's a lot of that.
Bourgeois society stands at a crossroads, either transition to socialism or regression into barbarism. The collapse of those new systems is also a spectacle of unremembering. Even as he was on the run from Chilean authorities for all the crimes he committed as the country's dictator, including murdering its democratically elected previous president, Margaret Thatcher met with Pinochet and
we heard about
bringing
this.
democracy to Chile.
Yeah.
But putting aside the sheer volume of communist, socialist, and even proto-socialist revolutions,
ding
that have
dong,
been
the
broken
witch is
through
dead.
invasion, assassination, or Western-backed coup, when socialist
As
states
they
have
say.
collapsed on their own, at least as on your own as you can get in a global system hostile to yours, more often it's been due to
Wow, what an interesting quote about socialism and barbarism. Surely that will never be relevant again. Do not study history. There is no point. Nothing will ever happen ever again. History is over.
restructuring than a grassroots demand for liberal democracy. Examining, for example, the collapse
Any
of
further
Yugoslavia,
questions will be met with the grill.
Anti-socialist policy and market competition between republics in the build-up to its collapse as a greater indicator of discontent in comparison with socialist policy. The intensification of decentralization and market competition combined with external factors to bring Yugoslavia to the brink of bankruptcy. The country turned to the International Monetary Fund for assistance and received the fund's largest ever loan hitherto at the start of 1981.
Sure.
At the behest of foreign creditors, successive governments implemented 2 waves of austerity. These had predictable consequences on the social fabric and political
austerity.
creation of the multinational state. Once again, government policy ruptured relations with the working class.
Yep.
Indeed, rather than the collapse of Yugoslavia proving the infeasibility of socialism, the reverse is displayed, showing that any system hoping to provide an alternative to capitalism needs to begin from the premise of the progressive elimination of the market. Self-management in Yugoslavia was linked to the market from its inception. As such, it was devoid of emancipatory potential from the beginning. Rather than worker participation increasing across its successive phases of implementation, the opposite was the case.
Right.
This observation being supported both by worker testimony of increasing alienation and also in the increasing frequency of strike action leading to the state's collapse. This isn't to say that actually the reason socialism failed in X country was all because of its capitalist elements. Instead, it's to demonstrate a more detailed breakdown of a collapse that runs counter to the usual...
Is the grill bottom 3 inventions of all time? Absolutely. Honestly, bro, I don't even know.
It broke because it could never work argument.
I'll never understand how they managed to demonize unions. Lots and lots of hard work.
Or in battled forms, what is undeniable and also unremembered is why people continue to insist that we must move past this present system.
Democracy has inflicted a crushing defeat on the Highware and its promoters. The
Highware?
Highware movement, which until recently believed itself to be on the eve of the final victory, is in a state of...
Oh.
A rapid decline.
He's fine.
The
He's
purely
fine.
Political problems have ended with the complete victory of the working class.
Work harder, not smarter. The Weimar merged with the other Austrian fascist parties to form the Fatherland Front. Its leader, Engelbert Dollfuss. Bro, again, I'm sorry. It's just... Can you believe these motherfuckers make fun of, like, South Asian names? Would seize power in 1933 and ban all their political parties, including the Austrian Social Democratic Party. Oh, fun! His name is literally Dollfuss.
Poverty is a phenomenal example of capitalism's inherent limitations. You can have laws which allow for unemployment wages or even a universal basic income. You can provide housing for poor families and food for hungry children, but capitalism, the mode of production, requires an underclass of precarious or destitute workers. An industrial reserve army, as Marx called it. We can all understand that if people are utterly poverty-stricken by depressed wages, they can't afford to buy the very products which they make. This leads to overproduction, the loss of profit for the capitalists, and the system goes into crisis. But if wages aren't depressed, or God forbid, everyone is happily employed, then not only are profits strangled, profit being value created by labor which isn't paid to the laborer, but that profit can't be reinvested into expanding profitable industry as there's no demand for further jobs. As a result, the system goes into crisis as capital is no longer able to replicate itself. Marx not only explained the inherent push and pull between overwork and underemployment back in 1867, but also anticipated the working class attacking itself when faced with the inherent cyclical crises of the system.
The overwork of the employed part of the working class swells the ranks of the reserve, whilst conversely the greater pressure that the latter by its competition exerts on the former forces these to submit to overwork and to subjugation under the dictates of capital. The condemnation of one part of the working class to enforced idleness by the overwork of the other part and the converse becomes a means of enriching the individual capitalists.
See?
Right,
Some of
okay.
us have read Capital. We got
Much like
280
fascism, capitalism will
pages on
inevitably
the
just
price
eat
of
itself.
coke,
That's
the other
kind
side
of the
rich
point of it.
and depressed.
For as long as
Perhaps.
the profit motive exists at the heart of the mode of production,
Unrestrained
poverty
growth forever.
cannot
It can
be wholly
only go
eliminated.
for so long.
Even
right?
in the economic periods where things were pretty good for the American working class, where poverty was decreasing and wages increasing, much of that destitution was being offset either to the population of the global south, a trend which continues to this day, or by exploiting temporary markets such as in the rebuilding of Europe after World War II, or in the exploitation of former socialist states during the shock doctrine.
This is a big one, right? I feel like this is one that gets forgotten a lot. A lot of, I don't know what you call them. Like they're liberals for sure, but like slightly more progressive liberals will just point to like fucking, I don't know, like they'll point to like fucking Franklin Delano Roosevelt, fucking the Green New Deal, 80% income tax, whatever. They'll be like, oh, we just go back to that and everything fixes itself. Even if things were like better for people in America, right there, like this is a really important aspect of that, right?
Or it's just built on smoke from some financial head who thought that payday loans for burritos was a smart business model. If your mode of production only works if a significant portion of the world has just experienced catastrophe, or you're forcing an entire people to farm sugarcane for you for free, or you're doing a scam or war, you might just have the economic system of the devil. It's not just how the system affects us in immediate.
If we do capitalism just right, everything will be fine, bro. Please, bro. Please, bro. Just one more imperialist war, bro.
As Silvia Federici says, forcing people to accept the discipline of dependent labor cannot be accomplished only by expropriating the producers from their means of subsistence. From the earliest phase of its development to the present, to force people to work at the service of others, whether that work was paid or unpaid, capitalism has had to restructure the entire process of social reproduction, remolding our relation not only to work, but also to our sense of identity, to space and time, and to our social and sexual life. The reason why, for example, conservatives and reactionaries are so hell-bent on demonizing and criminalizing ways of being and relating to one another that fall outside the norms of the heterosexual nuclear family, for example, is because such a norm is part of the same mechanism of subjugation. For society to be organized on the basis of atomized blocks of individual consumers and not—
Whoa. Conservatism is intersectional too. Holy shit. If you stop oppressing, the oppression is also intersectional. you can't allow people to stop being oppressed in one way because that might lead to them. Like it's all like a chain of dominoes. If society doesn't function exactly, like if you allow the oppression to slip in some part, it might slip somewhere else. It's all resting on each other.
Able to maintain themselves without
Holy
governmental
shit.
intervention or paid subscription services. For all the demand for traditional family values, the actual traditional family structures of Europe, the ones that existed before the advent of capitalism, would make the average tradwife TikToker's head explode. Revolutionaries like Alexandra Kollontai advocated for comradely free love during the early years of the USSR, where debates on the abolition of the oppressive family was coupled with a new constitution that promoted the unlimited freedom of women to study and work and enshrined their right to choose a way of life and profession in a completely independent way, where homosexuality, still understood as a pathology, was decriminalized alongside abortion and viewed neither as a perversion nor an offense to public morality.
Also
the potential created by the USSR's decade of red love was not to remain enshrined in law, as it has arisen in places like Cuba, whose 2022 Family Code is an astonishingly progressive piece of legislation, not only legalizing same-sex marriage and adoption rights, as well as expanding the understanding of what constitutes a family, but was also enacted through a national democratic process. In one case,
at the same time, the U.S. is redefining the definition of family for Cubans who live in the U.S. but have family in Cuba to exclude their uncles and aunts and cousins and nieces and nephews. So, you know, moving in very different directions, the two of them.
Revolution in the social sphere became tangled up in a regime and slowly eroded. In the latter, a once repressive social order was successfully struggled against for generations and has only seen greater and greater leaps made through popular support. Quite the contrast to 9 forever judges yanking away abortion access like a yo-yo. Much like the rest of this video, we're skating over a huge amount of context and additional information, and I would not forgive myself if your takeaway from that previous section was that queer revolutionaries didn't fight as hard in the USSR as they have done in Cuba. Revolutionary Thoughts has a fantastic video on her channel delving into the detailed and nuanced development and restriction of queer rights.
Revolutionary Thoughts?
Experiment.
Like,
I would highly recommend
like
her
THOT.
Also nice to know somebody else with a totally justified hatred for Anastasia.
This moves us on to our next topic. There are two key components to the question of why revolt, a positive and a negative one. We've already unpacked some of the negative, but even people who don't engage in political or economic theory get it.
Yes, capitalism does require suffering
Something is wrong
to function.
But this instinct alone often drives people unconsciously into the arms of snake oil salesmen like the 45th President of the United States, Donald Trump, who is currently serving as president again. That can't be right.
Nancy Fraser's The Old is Dying and the New Cannot Be Born aptly uses Gramsci's theory of hegemony to explain the big swings of
2 more years
away from politics as normal since 2016. On the one hand, you have the economics of neoliberalism.
3 more years?
By marketized mechanisms of distribution, low regulation, weak
2 more
power,
years.
and governments at the whim of, or even stacked by, business leaders. And on the other, you had the politics of recognition. Progressivism characterized by diversity, inclusion, equality, and accessibility. An integrationist policy for othered and marginalized people, and liberal tolerance. Of course, the cutthroat mechanisms of neoliberalism of inherent competition and mass exploitation directly contradicted the soft facade of inclusivity.
Right.
An icon of this being BAE Systems attending a pride parade, whose engineers have produced weapons infrastructure that are then sold to dozens of highly repressive, queer-hating governments.
It is, yeah. The fucking military contractor attending a pride parade while literally bombing people in the Middle East is great.
It also wasn't working, with economic crises piling into housing crises, into cost of living crises, on top of homelessness.
You can make way for Biden
crises.
too, I'm sure.
It's difficult to feel emancipated when it's constantly getting harder to live. As a result, 2 dominant counter-hegemonies rose to replace the old way. Progressive soft socialism and social democracy in the form of Corbyn's Labour or Sanders' presidential bid, and reactionary neoliberalism in the form of Farage's Reform UK and Donald Trump's presidential victories.
Sorry, are you sure it's the same Donald Trump, the Epstein guy?
Yep. Twice. Might be a third. He is almost certainly going to try for a third. You would hope. No, right? But might be 3. Yeah, no, yeah.
Both of these tendencies took aim at one component of the existing hegemony, the former at the economic method of distribution, and the latter at the social politics of recognition, and blamed them for people's present woes. The latter does criticise the present economic paradigm, but only to reinforce it. Nigel Farage, for example, committed to ending the Labour government's 2-child cap on benefit payments to families, which would be a blow to austerity.
Liz
but
Cheney
he does
will
so
say
both as a
this.
means of reinforcing the importance of the traditional family, and while suggesting that money could be taken from asylum
Dick
seeker
Cheney to
accommodation
save
to
us
make
by accidentally shooting the president in the head again. Well, not the president, but
the shortfall.
Shooting someone in the head again.
Seeker accommodation, £4 billion every year. DEI estimated to cost government £7 billion every year.
What does that
Lessening
mean?
austerity
What does
for
that
some,
mean?
Worsening it for others, maintaining it overall. This all despite the fact that the two-faced Boyle failed to vote against the cap at the time he had the chance. These movements take the economic anxieties created by neoliberalism and funnel frustration
Calling
into
someone a two-faced Boyle is really funny.
reactionary non-solutions that only serve to squeeze a few more terms out of this doomed system through increased repression. Of course, the owners of large news and social media organizations inherently benefit from the system continuing as it is. After all, they exist in their place of power because of it, and thus ensure that popular sentiment remains in their camp.
Right.
This comes to the detriment of actual reformist actors who...
It's
still
insane
not
that
gone far
Nigel
enough as
Farage
to
can
call
still
for or
can
begin to
speak
build
into
an
a mic,
actually new
man.
economic
Yeah,
and
I mean,
democratic system,
again,
are
Trump is
slandered as
president
radical
for the
bigots
second
and
time.
rat-fucked by their own supposed allies.
DEI in
We'll get
modern
more
day
into
has
the
just
meat
come
of
to
what
mean
this leads to
minorities
and
having
what there is to
jobs
do
or like
about it
being
later.
alive.
But revolt can become revolution when those negative motivators are married to positive ones. Standing for something is scary. It's a lot easier just to stand against the latest bad thing without actually lending support to an alternative. Andrewism's ever-vital piece, Anti-Capitalism is Capitalist, is a great short explanation as to the passive and pacifying effect that only vague anti-capitalism produces in oneself and in mass movements.
It's a great channel. 11 minutes, huh?
It is your job to reimagine present conditions and to articulate an alternative. Free universal healthcare, education, guaranteed housing, a workplace's ability to alter or even recall management, time off, holidays, parental leave, public infrastructure projects, subsidized food, minimum wages, a form of democracy that doesn't ask you to disengage on all but 5 days every decade. All this and more
so
has been
real.
Or could be won, but only if there exists a movement which either demands it in such a way that it cannot be ignored or who themselves create it. Grace Blakely's Vulture Capitalism is not only a great read for unpicking myths surrounding the free market, but also in providing living examples of participatory democracy which favours the working and or peasant classes. The 33 million people in Kerala, India enjoy the highest life expectancy, educational results, quality of health, and the lowest poverty rate in the country, due in large part to the majority communist government's People's Plan campaign, which sought to break down barriers between...
Again? It is crazy how it just keeps happening, huh? So why every time it's like, oh yeah, these people have like drastically improved their quality of life compared to the people around them and the other things that happen at their time. And it's like, well, why is it every time someone's quality of life is going up, it's you guys? It's the communists again. It's not meant to mean anything. It's a signal you're a closet racist that you can hide behind for people who don't know any better. We call those a dog whistle.
Between government and government.
It's a dog
encouraging
whistle.
Direct democratic participation, constant meetings, and seminars. But while sometimes negotiating within a system is the only thing presently necessary, even the threat of a threat to the ruling order can bring massive concessions. This can be applied both within revolutions and outside of them. The Marshall Plan, the post-war economic policy which both cemented the US as the new hegemon of the so-called First World, as well as rebuilding Western Europe, was implemented not out of a sense of Yankee benevolence, but instead to stabilize Europe out of fear of communist revolutions breaking out in the shattered economies of France, Italy, Greece, etc.
Right.
But Washington's desperately needed checks, or more accurately, vouchers, will be issued only on conditions that those nations' economies be opened up more than many of the incoming governments wished them to be, to the direct benefit of the US. The period of Keynesian economics, high regulation, job security, high union participation, rising wages, mass public works like housing, transport, hell, the NHS, were built in large part because not doing so would have risked Bolshevism, and also with one or more latchkeys in place to ensure future marketization could take place, as we're currently seeing with the piecemeal flogging off of NHS services to US corporations.
That's a Palantir for healthcare? What? Okay.
Like Palantir, the surveillance company named after the evil orb Saruman uses to spy on Middle-earth.
Wait, really? Is that fucking real? Is that what the fucking name is? Easiest way to make elites scared is to shoot them secretly? I mean, that's what Mangione did, right? He shot a CEO, and then this other CEO gave people a bunch of bonuses because they want to get shot. Yeah, the evil eye. They named their military surveillance contractor after the evil eye that Sauron used to spy on them. I guess they're so. It's mustache twirling. It's mustache twirling. It's actual honest to God mustache twirling.
Big Torment Nexus vibes. It's notable that it didn't take long at all after the collapse of socialism in Europe and Africa for capitalism to find its savage face again. Euro-communist movements degraded into entirely oppositional social democrat parties, and social democracy became neoliberalism's new human face, such as with New Labour. On the other side of the curtain, there was the Kronstadt Rebellion, the armed insurrection of anarchist sailors in the USSR during the Civil War. Trotsky, who denounced the repressed rebellion late into his life, still had to admit the clear link between the rebellion and a change in Soviet policy, writing in his hue and cry over Kronstadt polemic, the introduction of the NEP 1 year earlier could have averted the Kronstadt uprising.
Sure.
The NEP, or New Economic Policy, described by Lenin as a strategic retreat, diverged from the strict nationalized and centralized industrial policy of war communism and allowed for limited private ownership of the means of production, petitioned for by the majority peasant population of the USSR, and attracted foreign capital to bolster the Soviet economy. As Rodney analyzes it, war communism was asking the peasantry to bear all the burdens of the nation, and Lenin decided that their burdens should be lightened, even if it meant allowing certain capitalist tendencies. Of course, that such a decision would have come this soon or at all if it had not been from petitions and sometimes violent revolts in pursuit of it, feels less than likely. In modern times, after the death of Spanish dictator Franco, residents of the Andalusian village of Marina Lida formed the Union of Farm Workers, led by one-time communist MP Juan Manuel Sanchez Gordillo, and occupied land held by absentee landlords, demanding that that land be given to those who work it. Not only did they succeed,
Judge Holden is as unrealistic as we thought he was. He's just everywhere, man.
But during the struggle, the union had formed a party, the Workers' Unity Collective, which went on to fight and win local elections and remade the democratic norms so that decisions are made by general.
That's right, YouTube chatter. I'm just learning all this stuff so I know what to avoid. These scary, life-improving communists are wily. Yeah, you got to make sure. You got to look out. They could be anywhere. They could be around your very corner. They could be your dog.
Assemblies of those workers, not just their representatives. And this participatory self-governance has led to far more equitable results, reinvesting the profits of cooperatively owned businesses back into public goods like housing, accessible childcare, and free school meals. This experiment still exists, spreading to neighboring towns, and the WUC has even gone as far as saving money by abolishing their police force.
Try to avoid Fed posting where possible. What's Fed posting? I think I'm unfamiliar with the terminology.
Constantly challenging your government to do right by the people, rather than looking for minor ways to mitigate its worst crimes, is vital, even if it will always run the risk of you being labelled a communist. Babe, they're calling Sir Keir Starmer a communist in my country right now. If we're not reclaiming the proper use of the word, what are we even doing? Without a negative state of being, no one will willingly join a revolution. No revolution on Earth has arisen from a reasonably peaceful state of affairs. Without a positive goal, however, individualized radicalism can splinter off into some niche Reddit ideology that you'll only hear about when it's name-dropped in a smouldering manifesto. Or it'll
if Fed was a comment or post, it could sound incriminating out of a full definition, but also I found it or something along those lines. Oh, I see.
As contradictions mount, as people become further disillusioned, and as violence becomes more and more
people see commies everywhere. I really wish we lived in that time. Yeah.
And more so advocating that this energy be directed towards liberation and not random harm. In the wake of the Sharpeville massacre in South Africa, where apartheid police officers opened fire on protesters,
of course, yeah.
People,
Why wouldn't
Nelson Mandela attended a meeting with the ANC. This is how he reports it went.
I argued that the state had given us no alternative.
Like when people say when it happens for you know who, yeah, someone should do something.
People to armed attacks by the state without offering them some kind of alternative. I mentioned again that people on their own had taken up arms. Violence would begin whether we initiated it or not. Would it not be better to guide this violence ourselves according to principles where we saved lives by attacking symbols of oppression and not people? If we did not take the lead now, I said, we would soon be latecomers and followers to a movement we did not control.
The state had given us no alternative to violence. That's right. Violence would begin whether we initiate it or not. Would not be better to guide this violence ourselves according to principles where we save lives by attacking symbols of oppression and not people.
Rebellion and revolution can never be permanently stopped, as both revolutionaries and historians have understood. Regimes are a conscious project, but revolutions are a hurricane, transforming a quantitative build-up in pressure into a qualitative deluge of action.
It was like an undercover federal agent baiting other users to incriminate themselves. Oh, I see. It's not about incriminating yourself. It's saying some shit where it's like, wouldn't it be nice if we did X like really incriminating thing? Guys, who else agrees that we should kill the president of the United States? Right, everybody? Am I right, fellas? Anybody wanna raise their hands and let me know that that's something they'd be down for? Just curious. I see what you mean.
Impenetrable dams will break if poorly managed.
Scariest part of fighting back for what's right is getting eradicated and erased from history by the false hydra they keep in the fucking Pentagon, yeah.
Which brings us to that permanent question of means, of legal and illegal work, of peace and violence.
Those who make peaceful revolution impossible will make violent revolutions inevitable.
John F. Kennedy? Man, fuck this guy. The U.S. military, yeah. I was just gonna say. Less than a year earlier, the U.S. military had invaded Cuba to topple the revolutionary government of the Bay of Pigs. After failing, the U.S. instituted an embargo to starve the Cuban people, ongoing to this day, and the CIA would go on to attempt to assassinate the Cuban president Fidel Castro an estimated 638 times. Bro, I've been playing Three Houses. Castro's got crazy avoid. What the hell? Bro is standing in the thicket with his training sword on. He's got, like, A, authority, but he's still fucking rocking Gerald's mercenaries because he gives him plus 15 extra avoid. What do we do? How? You'd think on random chance it would have worked on one of these. Like, you know. They also fuck. Yeah, Kennedy, go fuck yourself. I'm glad your head just did that.
Violence as a taboo is strained in media. We're told never to do it ourselves in reality, but action flicks glorify it just as horror texts explore it through condemnation and fear. But still, we go for the thrill of
more times a day than the
it's
Emperor's consort.
Evil and fun, a threat and spectacle. Stories about revolutions are fascinating to examine in this superstructure. It's one of the few arenas in which the usual background radiation of entertainment violence is questioned. A war film may present a soldier shooting a child as a personal failing, or wax philosophical about how killing civilians is bad and gives you mental health. But in revolutionary stories, violent moments always raise the question as to the validity of the tactic, or even
Castro got that reeling, perfect dodge, and greater ages, for real.
If on screen, a character may object to that specific instance of violence, but if revolutionary violence is on screen, a character will always unfailingly call into question the right of the revolutionaries to enact it as well. Now, Aether Drift doesn't tackle the question of revolutionary violence.
Oh yeah, Magic the Gathering.
There's a scene at the end of the final story, The Bloodless Revolution, where Jace's mind-controlled counter-revolution is enacted, wherein Sita's arsehole dad tries to stage a coup to bring back the old ways, although, much like Aether Revolt, said coup is just a cover for a blue mage to get a doohickey for some grand multiversal scheme.
Oh yes,
but the
commence the endgame.
Is it right to fight for your rights is avoided, as the violent resistance to this counter-revolutionary putsch is kept deeply abstract. Chandra and Sita knock out who they can of the guards and mind-controlled racers. Does that mean that they're aiming to knock out as many people as possible to break Jace's mind control? Or does that mean that they are killing, but only when
You had that shit about
necessary?
MTG storytelling, but again, derailing? I just couldn't talk about it.
It isn't answered and doesn't matter. Loot's back. Everybody look at loot.
Oh my god. The Pathfinder? Does he fuck with strength of thousands? Wait, what are his thoughts on Takulo Ott?
Gaze upon my loot,
He's so
ye
cute.
mighty.
He's such a
and
little
weep.
guy.
The story swiftly moves back into the finale of the race, and the
I feel like
entire
Blizzard and WoW, they
counter-revolution falls
physically
apart
cannot
the
write a
second
story where
Jace
revolution
ducks out
matters.
with his blink
I mean,
target.
to be fair
Whilst I'd love
to
to
the
know
writers,
how Avishkar's
which was
decided-
just discussed earlier, right? The writers kind of literally can't write a story where revolution matters, because if they did, their bosses would like kill them.
He has changed with this failed coup attempt. If, like the Soviet state's reaction to the assassination of Sergei
Don't look for your political revolution and awakening to happen in a capitalist product, right?
Of in 1934, the Avishkar government would take a far harsher stance against potential internal threats. We will be seeing Magic the Gathering present Mighty Morphin Power Rangers before we ever get back to this plane, so I'm not going to hold out a whole lot of
Jason
hope.
Red
I
Ranger.
love the profit motive. It is a good thing that we should never challenge in any material or social way.
Yes,
Conversely, once
yes,
Aether Revolt
man,
never failed to
yes!
present a coherent ideology and counter-ideology in its revolution, the violence of that preceding set is far more upfront and center with its artwork and narrative. The writers don't shy away from displaying the human cost of violence, with Yeheni's whole arc about coming to terms with the fact that they extend their life through stealing it from others, mainly by vampirizing counter-revolutionary police officers. Remember, Aetherborn
Once again,
can
good
absorb
faith revolution is met
but
with
the story
big
also
con.
doesn't
Yeah,
outright
Aetherborn
condemn
can
such
absorb
acts
beings.
as going
ACAB.
too far.
That's fun.
Hell, without a properly articulated cause to be going too far in the name of, it'd be impossible to even have that conversation. Is all this worth the bloodshed? Is what worth the bloodshed? No one's fucking told me what we're doing here yet. In the stories, for example, Gideon scolds Liliana for killing consulate guards rather than subduing them, which he rightfully counters by pointing out that a knocked-out cop will wake up and will pass on information which will then endanger lives.
Yeah.
Whereas a dead one won't.
That's
There
real.
are still moments where the non-violent arguments win out, but they fit into broad character development more than acting as rejections of the tactic. Yeheni also confesses their misdeeds to Nissa, and isn't forgiven. It's not something that Nissa can absolve, but they are understood, and they insist that more good than harm must come from these actions. The question of violence in the story is treated refreshingly as a tactic, not an ideological or moral choice in of itself.
Right.
On the cards of Aether Revolt, the story is a touch different. It calls for us to celebrate, for example, daring demolition with an exciting action set piece and extolling name. Yet there are still moments which frame revolutionary violence as sinister. Fatal Push, for example, shows that same Aetherborn from Daring Demolition, its triptych complete with Defiant Salvager, kicking an unarmed guard to their death, his face alight with surprise and terror. Yeheni is framed in shadow, approaching the viewer whilst draining life from a group of guards. Vengeful Rebel 2
Fatal
wipes
Push
fresh
mentioned?
blood from their blade, its flavor text suggesting this act was exclusively one of score settling and not simultaneously liberatory. There is variety beyond this set's black cards, of course. Deadly Harpooner stands heroic over a forcibly deactivated automaton, and there's an element of comedy to destructive tampering, despite showcasing an explosion that would have certainly killed everyone even nearby that targeted ship. Abstracted violence, violence against property and non-sentient automata are displayed heroically.
Collateral
whilst the
damage
intimate
type
violence
shit.
of one character leaving another dead is
Never chose
ugly,
violence as nothing
messy,
more than a necessity.
unbecoming of celebration.
I would love
Importantly,
non-violence.
However, it's not outright condemned like in most media on this topic. No one is decrying street combat for putting civilians in needless peril in favor of waiting for the consulates to bring an election to the city. Instead, violence is presented here, as it always is in actual revolutionary epochs, an unequal mess. Some enact it with concerning glee and ulterior motives, but most use it in the cause of something better, or even out of self-preserving necessity, and must contend with having to relinquish their kindness in unkind times. Gideon tells Liliana to avoid killing where she can. Liliana says that those opportunities are less clear and prevalent as Gideon likes to think. We think nothing of a quip whilst our lens is far enough from a beastly attack to capture its full scale, but a lone guard stationed on some high perch is kicked into the air before he can even draw his weapon, and the scene is sad, hollow. He died with no spectacle, guarding something we don't even get to fully comprehend. A later printing of Fatal Push shows him plummeting, hands crossed over his face whilst the battle continues above him, a figure instantly forgotten by the time the explosion rocks the sky. How vital was this ship that so many needed to die to protect?
I mean, maybe he tanks those, to be fair. It's happened.
Was the slaughter necessary in the cause of the revolution? Again, without a clear goal or articulated power relations, it's impossible to condemn or celebrate this scene. We become observers in more ways than one, sensing intrinsic injustice and retaliatory oversteps as a bystander would during a revolutionary period whose size and scope we can't fully comprehend. As much interest exists in
non-fatal push? Yeah, maybe.
Paired artworks of Deadly Demolition and Fatal Push, we just come back to the same well, where abstracted violence is permissible, but intimate violence in revolutionary colours is to be admonished.
Right.
The muddy perspective hinted at by the story, of course, is far more often rendered in binary when it comes to popular conceptions of historical revolutionary violence.
This is, what, one death is a tragedy, 10,000 is a statistic, right? You blow up a ship with thousands, 100 people on it, who cares? But you intimately zoom in on killing one guy, and suddenly that's worse somehow?
Punish violent or so-called authoritarian means to collapse a repressive state. A heady mix of radically principled pacifists and morbid opportunists for whom any violation of the state's monopoly on violence is to be condemned and discounted.
Reminder that the world, Grand Blue was never a bad guy. I don't know enough about the lore to agree with that, but like, how far away the ideal world, I guess?
To hopefully execute billionaires with all the fiddly details of post-capitalist system building left to other people.
Statistically, I'm immortal because I haven't died yet.
In some way that they're inherently useless. One could compare Marx's notion that religion is the sigh of the oppressed creature, the heart of a heartless world, and the soul of soulless conditions. It is the opium of the people. The abolition of religion as the illusionary happiness for the people is the demand for their real happiness, clearly positioning religion as a painkiller for the oppressed, which would be undone by achieving a people's contentment here on earth, with some of the anti-religious violence that was carried out in the name of Marxism. The destruction of not just actually repressive religious institutions, but individualized murder of religious minorities in the post-Civil War era of the USSR or during China's Cultural Revolution. As many have noted, action to crush spirituality not only frustrated attempts to negate the need for its metaphysical peace, but it also failed, with religious institutions springing back as if they'd never left in the wake of socialism's collapse in Eastern and Central Europe.
Right.
It is simultaneously true that it is understandable when legitimate grievances with spiritual leadership complicit in oppression can develop into violence, and that the state sanctioning of that violence will not only
religion in the USSR was a tool of the state,
galvanizing of those exiled
as it sometimes is, as maybe often.
Historically never been one or the other, neither entirely.
Only one side can enact social murder, the nice kind. Yeah.
Legal means have always been the first port of call for every burgeoning revolution in modern memory. In the Communist Manifesto, Marx and Engels are clear that the first step in the revolution by the working class is to raise the proletariat to the position of the ruling class to win the battle for democracy. Importantly, it is the battle for, not of, democracy. Democracy was not the sole means by which Marx understood capitalism to be transcended. It was, however, vital both to win political victories to the direct benefit of the working people and to display the level of consciousness in the working class, but also to expand what democracy could even look like. Should a majority of people vote in favour of a workers' party in universal suffrage, a heady notion in Marx's time and limited even in ours, that would signal a qualitative shift in the class struggle between the proletariat and the bourgeoisie, but not the conclusion of it.
Yeah, it's a step.
The ballot, the streets, or both is a really fascinating and in-depth study. Not
that's an interesting name for a book.
In the lead up to the October Revolution, but also tactics used by the revolutionaries. Lenin, for example, took to utilising the parliamentary arena to mobilise the crowd to think beyond the bounds of that space, taking debates to the workers outside in real time and organising mass meetings that would subvert the sanctity of the Duma in favour of popular democracy organised by workers. Additionally, before power was seized by workers and whilst the Bolsheviks were still in the electoral minority, the stated role of the Party of the Proletariat was to catch every liberal just
this Lenin guy had a lot to say. Yeah.
And they can move forward a yard. If he is obdurate, we will go forward without him and over him. Again, importantly, Lenin was writing from the position of a minority but non-insignificant party of organised workers. He wasn't, as some donkeys have suggested, calling for people to push liberal politicians left in an unorganised fashion, and certainly not from inside a party headed by liberal leadership. Protests against unjust policy have also always been a feature of revolutionary movements.
Never been a donkey myself. Maybe? No, that's not true. I've been a donkey.
Kickstarting the French Revolution, to the women whose strike action in protest against Russia's involvement in World War I led to the abdication of Tsar Nicholas II. Women, they may be queens, but they certainly hate kings. I don't think that one's...
Yeah. Sure. No.
Gonna make it into the edit. These protests
Oh, well,
developed
I got
into
news.
caste making demands and turned into seizing power. And there's certainly criticism to be levied against those who solely use such legal and peaceful denunciations as a means to achieve their goals. Proponents of the 2003 global protests against the invasion of Iraq celebrated the record-breaking scale of the movement, whilst having to acknowledge that the singular goal of those protests wasn't achieved. However, the existence of non-violent civil disobedience in concurrence with violent resistance has been an instrumental dynamic in at least achieving reform within a system. Despite never winning majority popular support and only a plurality of support in the first years of his campaign, Martin Luther King Jr. and the civil rights movement was able to win policy victories due in part to the growing threat of less civil disobedience as represented by proponents of Malcolm X and Black Revolution. These figures, whilst positioned as polar opposites in the same struggle, it should always be remembered, were not actually that divergent. As James Baldwin, who knew both men personally, wrote, "As concerns Malcolm and Martin, I watched two men coming from unimaginably different backgrounds whose positions originally were poles apart, driven closer and closer together. By the time each died, their positions had become virtually the same position."
That's
Continuing
interesting.
on, as we've said, democracy also has
I
to
did
be
hear a
won.
lot about how MLK became like significantly more radical and communist over time, and that's, you know, why they shot him instead of televising his "I Have a Dream" speech. But obviously, I know very little about the
in
topic.
terms of defining what democracy even is. Upon the victory of social revolutions, traditional arenas of democracy tend to be abolished or radically altered and replaced with experimental forms of new democracy. The Paris Commune stood as the inspiration for many post-bourgeois revolutions. As we've previously touched on, rather than politicians elected on multi-year terms to make decisions on behalf of voters, those elected in the Commune were themselves the ones who would enact those decisions, have
Right.
themselves to test the results as achieved in reality. That democracy was also an insurrection against the legal Republican government, which organised the most violent means against the Commune whilst putting down the free expression of opinion all over France, where other cities were attempting to establish similar communes. In the end, tens of thousands of working class people in Paris and beyond were killed for putting an experimental form of governance into action, slaughtered both by the government they were rebelling against and the Prussian army. Conflict that led to war between France and Prussia not 2 months previously, set aside to ensure that the potential of emancipation from capital.
There's a clip of him post the "I Have a Dream" speech where he's like, "The white liberal is our biggest roadblock," and that should explode in my mind. Yeah.
And crown could be crushed. It was, however, by no means a wholly new society.
MLK,
free
the
from
only
flaws and
politician I
fetters
knew
from
who had a
preceding
soul.
conditions Either. Women, for example, despite playing a major role in the establishment and governance of the
Be
Commune,
wary
were
of like
excluded from participating in
overly
elections, either as candidates or
glorifying, or just in
Still,
general,
this
just like
represents a
that
linkage
sort of
in a continual
exaggerated
process.
language.
The French Revolution improved democracy in comparison to the absolutism of what came before, and was in turn challenged to improve. Even when it did, that system either quashed more radical innovations or expanded its worst elements, such as in the colonial boom.
Pedestalization is never productive
imposing
one
its
way or
rule
the
on
other.
Many people and nations across Earth. Nations like Vietnam, who, since shaking off that yoke, have made great leaps in democracy themselves, but these new systems too have limitations. The ever-expanding horizon for democratic control and organization will
Bernie
forever
Sanders
be
is a great
experimented
example
with
of the
and
empty
fought for.
gesture.
This debate has been ongoing within revolutionary circles for centuries. Rosa Luxemburg denounced
Bernie,
the dissolution of
Israel has a
Russian
right to
constituent
defend
assembly
itself,
in favor of
Sanders?
the worker, soldier, and peasant Soviets during the October Revolution as the elimination of democracy as such, whilst also
Oh.
denouncing Lenin's proclamation of the right to self-determination of nationalities within the Russian Empire as nothing but hollow, petit bourgeois phraseology and humbug. A position
Humbug?
itself critiqued by Walter Rodney as being in favor of democracy for the bourgeoisie and against democracy for the peasants and against independence and autonomy for the nationalities. Phraseology and humbug. Man, 20th century discourse was so much more twee than today. Oh, bring
What
me
is-
back.
what the fuck is
No, I
twee?
don't want to go back. I don't want to go back. These discourses even generated entire democratic systems. Yugoslavia's aforementioned experiment with worker self-management, where factories would essentially belong to their workers, was envisioned as an
I've
alternative
never
form
seen
of
any
socialist
other
democracy,
politician with the
but-
same vision and compassion. I mean, it depends what you mean by politician. I mean, people were talking about, you know, people were talking about Nelson Mandela, Thomas Sankara, right? Like there's people who like people. A lot of revolutionaries end up becoming politicians because you need to like you have to once the revolution ends, you need to govern something, right?
into being after the Tito-Stalin split of 1948. Quoting Edvard
Castro
Fidel,
seems
the
pretty
Minister of Foreign
popular.
Affairs in
That's a
Yugoslavia,
politician
the
for
strengthening
sure.
of
He
the
started as a
democratic
lawyer,
relations
ended
in
up as a
production,
politician.
The formation of workers' councils is exactly that which we shall be able to present to the world as the difference between us and them. The idea was that in the ruling party dismantling command structures and allowing for decentralized self-management, a new commune state of bottom-up mass participation would be established.
Okay.
There was a hope to strengthen
Sounds
national
good.
unity by giving the constituent republics of Yugoslavia a greater say in governance in comparison to the various states in the US.
And also, like, I mean, it's also just again like don't avoid pedestalizing the you know the quote unquote like the heroes of the past because you know there's also a lot to learn from their mistakes, right? Again, I'm not going to claim to be an expert on anything to do with MLK or the civil rights movement, but I have heard like black women mention like one of the big problems with that is like MLK kind of was like a little bit of a misogynist. You know what I mean? Like, and again, oppression of one is oppression of all. We can't be like, okay, we're going to end racism. We're going to keep misogyny. I'm not even saying that's necessarily like what the policy was, but I've heard from people who know more about it. They again, like, you know,
which was not incorrectly viewed as hampered by Russian exceptionalism. In practice,
There's always work to
still
be done.
feel it's
There's
a
nothing
banner
wrong
which
with
is
being
still
like,
alive.
obviously, like, MLG seems pretty cool to a guy like me. But again, it's pedestalizing people limits your ability to learn from them and their what they did right and what they did wrong, because it limits your ability to tell the difference.
Councils, up until a certain point, which we've already discussed, where the tightrope walked between worker-oriented socialism and the appeasement of Western benefactors through market mechanisms eventually snapped. On the topic of snapping, however, it's important to understand the reality of revolutionary violence. Violence rarely breaks out in struggles unless other options have first been exhausted or are struggling to make gains. Examining the Bolivian gas and water...
Nobody is ever excited for violence, right? It's just not how it works. It's been fun. Good night. I'll see you, Pancake.
From 2003 to 2005, hundreds of thousands of Bolivians throughout the country rose up, blocking highways and physically confronting the military to prevent the privatization of natural gas reserves. This violence was predicated by far more traditional demonstrations years previously, which had applied pressure but ultimately didn't achieve their goals. This new form of struggle, however, did, with even escalating violence seen in indigenous villages where residents would lynch their elected representatives as direct action aimed to preserve indigenous autonomy and resist neo-colonial influence.
Goddamn.
Shortly after
Okay.
these escalations, the government issued a referendum which brought about the renationalization of natural resources, and this popular mobilization was seized upon and led to the election of Bolivia's first indigenous president, the socialist Evo Morales. A combination of things that the US would never forgive them for.
I think it's an amazing example of the type of progress we could make as people. I understand your point, though. Yeah, I'm not saying, I am not saying to not extol the virtues of Martin Luther King. Far be it for me to say anything like that. I'm just saying that it's important to recognize that even these, revolutionary and important figures who we, did so much good, it is still important to view them as people and not, deify them, because it's non-productive.
Or more
The
specifically,
Failure of Nonviolence seems like a book I gotta look at. Yep.
Any challenge to the state's monopoly on violence is so tied up with societal norms that even describing the cause and effect of how some revolutionary violence successfully secured victories left unclaimed in non-violent struggle will be slandered as incitement rather than an unpacking of historical reality.
Yep.
Violence is a bad thing that ought not to happen, and has historically been often the only appropriate or remaining response to injustice or motivator for change.
Yep.
Thank you. It also depends
Both are
highly
true.
on context. Franz Fanon argued that in anti-colonial revolutions, the violence of the dehumanizing state of being would necessarily be reflected back upon the occupiers by the occupied.
Of course.
This same violence will be vindicated and appropriated when, taking history into their own hands, the colonized swarm into the forbidden cities. And that the occupation is colored by violence from its first confrontation with an indigenous people to its cohabitation, continued at the point of bayonet and under cannon fire. Fanon, being both a political writer and a psychiatrist, says that the character of settler and decolonial violence is different, likening the latter to a cleansing force. It rids the colonized of their inferiority complex, of their passive and despairing attitude. It emboldens them and restores their self-confidence. Far from being some bloodthirsty whim, according to Fanon...
In simpler terms, basically the way to understand this is it is significantly more understanding... violence is significantly more understandable in self-defense, essentially, right? Like, it's not right to punch people, but if someone is beating you to death and you punch them, then we can kind of get it.
Violence in the face of abject dehumanization is a necessary component of the occupied's reattainment of humanity.
Right.
It's not just the theories of violence, but the actual gains attained through it that are swept under the rug of history and education, implanting the false notion that great societal change has more often come through non-violence. The suffragettes are a fantastic example. Women in the UK who, at first peacefully, campaigned for civil rights, the right to participate in elections, were presented to me in school as protesters first and foremost. We didn't spend a whole lot of time on them, but most Brits of my generation would have probably been taught about Emily Davison, an activist who stormed the racecourse at the 1913 Epsom Derby wearing a Votes for Women sash, and was killed when, grabbing the harness of King George V's horse, she was struck by the animal. I actually managed to find pictures that I remembered from my lesson at school on Davison. This headline which cast her protest in a negative light, calling her mad and lamenting the consequences of her actions. This one even went as far as to name the horse before it named the suffragette herself.
That's
Glad to
crazy,
see the British
man.
press has always been a shitter. We're taught about Davison's martyrdom and how that action helped spur on the eventual victory of some women's suffrage. But that's, of course, not the only thing the suffragettes did. We weren't taught about the other stuff in school.
I break, I'm high as fuck. Hello
Did you
there.
know the suffragettes invented the mail bomb?
Yo!
And I mean invented it. It hadn't been done in recorded history before. They filled packages with explosives.
You are going to be high forever? It's never going to end.
And incendiary components and mailed them to members of parliament, including the Chancellor of the Exchequer, the future Prime Minister David Lloyd George, and the then current Prime Minister Henry Asquith, a man who they also attacked in the street.
Hatred and violence are infinitely more plausible than kindness and peace. Well, it's not even plausibility, it's a matter of reality. The violence is here.
Labeling themselves terrorists as they did so.
It will?
And here our press is shitting and pissing all over themselves that climate collapse is being protested by soup thrown at protective perspex. All of this was, as you can see from the headlines, condemned by politicians and newspapers. But when the end of World War I threatened the resurgence of the suffragette militancy, which had been put on hold 4 years earlier, Parliament expanded suffrage to some 8.4 women.
8.4
That's really
women.
not a great win, is it? 8.
Let's go. 8 women and like the torso of one of them with neither the head, legs, or arms. Now that's fucking revolutionary progress.
4 million women in Britain, which would expand to universal equal voting rights in 1928 and allowed them to stand as MPs. A necessary and good thing that happened sooner than it would have because of a diversity of tactics employed by militants to secure that win.
Base.
It should not be left unsaid that the current UK government is attempting to dismantle the right of trial.
Hey, woman's in a court.
legal
Yep,
right
yep.
afforded to UK citizens by the fucking Magna Carta, citing a large criminal backlog that needs to be cleared. A backlog which has been recently exacerbated mainly by peaceful protesters who are alleged to have broken the law by holding placards proclaiming support for a recently prescribed organisation centred on non-violent disruption of UK-based arms companies supporting and supplying Israel's genocide.
How dare they?
It is the first non-violent organisation in UK history to be classified as such under the Terrorism Act of 2000. This may seem like a wild segue, but the vote which made support for that organisation illegal was held on the same day that the women of Westminster posed for—
Look at those violent and terrifying grandmothers. We should do the Operation Condor thing and sedate them, load them into cargo planes, and throw them out of them at 30,000 feet to give them a nice Christian death.
a photograph in suffragette colours to celebrate the anniversary of their violent, sometimes deadly action which won them the right to vote and to sit
8 women in a pair of arms.
The vast majority of those pictured here voted in favour of prescription.
I know you voted to prescribe Palestine action. Do you stand by that decision? Yes. And would you have voted to prescribe the suffragettes?
I mean, I wasn't there at the time, but I doubt it.
Why not? They did much worse than Palestine action, as you know. They put poison in people's letterboxes. They killed over 3 people.
Well, I mean, you know, hello.
To say that irony
for Christianity,
people
you understand.
would imply
Yeah,
that they care about any form of life other than their cretinous own. Regardless of what action is taken to undermine the
Also, that
status
was
quo, it
very
will be
fun.
slandered as violent.
Well, fun.
Almost always
On the one hand,
only
it's
that
fun
or
to see
massive violence
people's
against
hypocrisy
order
get
will
exposed. On the other hand, it's like they're just so fucking say shameless about it. Who cares?
Sharpened violence enacted in reaction to resistance that the state claims a monopoly on. Violence is condemned now in the false consciousness that our relative peace has arisen from exclusive non-violence, a narrated reality where Martin Luther King Jr. never gave his Other America speech, refusing to condemn rioting without the condemnation of the cause of rioting too. It is easier to pretend that everyone who did violence in the cause of justice is a wrecker, or a plant, or an opportunist, but so too is it easy to pretend that all violence in the pursuit of a just cause is just itself, and not frequently messy or needless. Bertolt Brecht's To Those Bored After sums up this grim conflict within conflict better than any material analysis ever could. Writing to a future generation, those born after the period of anti-fascist resistance Brecht was struggling in, even so we realised hatred of oppression still distorts the features, anger at injustice still makes voices raised and ugly. Oh, we who wish to lay the foundations for peace and friendliness could never be friendly ourselves. And in the future, when no longer do human beings still treat themselves as animals, look back on us with indulgence.
Yeah.
There always exists the claim that militant—
I mean, yeah, it's justified anger and justified violence, and like sure, but yeah, I mean, naturally, of course, it's gonna get messy.
Action actually impeded reform or social gain.
Christian death. I don't think he just wanted us to throw drug people off of planes. Tell that to Henry Kissinger,
during such movements, but the ability to quantify
who is currently
such
burning in
arguments
hell.
often
So maybe he won't be able to pick
we
up your
don't live
call.
in a
But
world in which the armed militancy of the ANC in opposition to South African apartheid didn't coexist with their non-violent struggle, or where Gandhi's strict pacifism wasn't contrasted against both violent action taken in the name of Indian independence and violent action being taken by different colonized people against Britain, namely in Ireland and Palestine at the same time. We do, however, have a whole heap of staunch non-violent movements which have fled memory due to their lack of impact, or those like the aforementioned Iraq War demonstrations which remain recalled for precisely that fact.
Yeah.
Oftentimes as well, the pursuit of disciplined non-violence leads to
that's
reactionary
tough.
spectacles within movements. Organisers will assist the police in arresting allegedly violent elements, or even encouraging people to turn themselves in after taking part in civil disobedience as some psychosocial ritual to display how
What?
safe their movement is to participate in. Of course, this creates the absolute reverse effect, with protesters rightfully fleeing from organisations who prove themselves willing to volunteer activists up to state violence if they go against their doctrine.
in fact, Jesus would hate if we did that. Tell that to Henry Kissinger.
A diversity of peaceful and
if Jesus Christ came back today and I don't know, say he's not fucking a wizard or whatever, the son of God or whatever it is the Christians believe exactly. But say Jesus came back today and he was like a regular guy, but he just had all the same personality, he would be dead within 24 hours. Jesus would literally be a brown-skinned Palestinian socialist.
combative tactics.
If he tried to say any kind of
That
shit,
kind of
they would
crowd,
kill him
the
before the
many-headed
sunset.
hydra would be infinitely stronger than a disciplined non-violent march or a group of rioters isolated from one another, especially if the participants cultivate a sense of mutual respect and collectivity. I really do think this text is deeply instructive, taking apart a wide
The failure of
variety protest movements,
nonviolence.
uprisings,
I am actually really interested in
and
this.
revolutions, and assessing their strengths and weaknesses through this framework. Comparing, for example, two distinct stages of a general strike that occurred in Barcelona between early 2011 and late 2012. In the first stage, where unions didn't dissuade or impose limits on combative activities, in addition to work stoppages and major marches, there were also blockades of burning tyres, acts of sabotage, and attacks on banks.
Sure.
When, in October of the following year, the unions attempted to pacify the strike, the more combative anti-capitalists generally did not participate, and the day was entirely peaceful. It was a total flop, even from the perspective of the unions and peaceful protesters. It had less participation, went almost unnoticed, and had a demoralizing effect for upcoming days of action. It's only during periods of strife and the reaction to that democratic innovations have been won. It's absolutely legitimate to criticize how the participatory democracy of the Soviets found their ideal hampered, both internally, such as in the patriarchal hangovers of peasant society, which conflicted with demands for women representation,
Sure.
or externally, such as in the often fraught, even openly hostile relationship between the communist government's wishes and the revolutionary desires of some Soviet organs. But as Jeff Ely points out in his essay, What Produces Democracy, this fraught system was still a vast leap forward when taken in historical context. Full-scale democratization entails the following: popular sovereignty and accountable rules based on free, universal, secret, adult, and equal
Secret?
suffrage, complemented by legal freedoms of speech, conscience, assembly, association, and the press, backed by rights under the law and freedom from arrest without trial. By this standard, only the mildest degrees of democracy were attained in political systems anywhere before 1914. Full democracy was established only in 4 peripheral societies of the world: New Zealand, 1893, Australia, 1903, Finland, 1906, and Norway, 1913.
Interesting.
The fact that 2 settler colonial projects are included on this list is not a dismissal of the repression those states enacted on the indigenous populations, but
Secret
more so a
suffrage, then you are not
demonstration
under
of how
duress
total
when you
acquiescence
vote?
to the
Oh,
procedural
sure. Yeah, yeah,
ideals of
yeah.
democracy does not negate the capacity those states have to do harm
That makes
within
sense.
that framework. Additionally, though true democracy, let alone liberation, has never been achieved in any state, nor indeed can it, a criticism that both Marxists and anarchists agree on, the existence of radical potentials can influence positive innovation even where those potentials are not being enacted. Ellie continues. To appreciate the indebtedness of democratization to the revolutionary dimension of this conjecture, we need to hold the overall configuration of political forces and possibilities in view, rather than concentrating on the conscious agency of the revolutionaries alone. Thus, in shaping the democratic contents of the political settlements after 1918, the insurrectory maximalism of the Bolsheviks and the extreme lefts of that time mattered far less in itself than in the variety of reformist initiatives its challenge helped to precipitate.
Okay, okay. Again, because to try and put this into more like regular wording, the existence of these extreme revolutionary movements pushes the Overton window further left, is my understanding of this. The Overton window being the set of things that are like normal and agreeable to talk about, right? Like there's the set of things that are normal and totally fine and accepted. There are the things that are considered like controversial, and then, you know, far left and far right of those are considered like unthinkable. You know what I mean? So even regardless of what accomplishments the revolutionaries make themselves, their very existence and legitimization of their movements pushes the Overton window further to the left, which still leads to progress.
That is to say, even where the revolutionary left was at its weakest and socialist parties made only small or modest gains in post-war elections, major reforms still ensued.
Yeah.
Again, thinking back to how the existence of the USSR warped the economic resettlement of Europe after World War II in greater favor to the working class than in comparison to today, the threat of a threat can itself produce concessions, although only pushing further into that maximalism will cement them for lifetimes.
So there we have it. How does Eighth Address Revolution hold up in comparison with other pieces of media, and what is the actual character of historical and modern revolutionary tradition, theory, and practice? You've just sat through around 18,000 words, so I hope it's been educational and thought-provoking.
Yeah, sure.
Hey, why did I feel compelled to write about revolution around about now anyway? Oh yeah!
Oh, this is, yes, the cool zone.
Socialists, it is essential to remember, call themselves socialists as well as national. Their socialism is not the socialism of the Labour Party or that of any recognised socialist party in other countries, but in many ways it is a creed that is anathema to the big landlords, the big industrialists and the big financiers, and the Nazi leaders are bound to go forward with the socialist side of their programme.
Daily Herald is a newspaper owned by the Trade Union Congress of the UK in support of the Labour Party. It ceased print in 1964 and was relaunched as The Sun. Ah, I see. Socialism is when you are a Nazi. And the Nazier you are, the socialismer it gets.
In modern revolutionary times, fascism has always risen to meet grassroots progress, be it explicitly, such as in Pinochet's mass-murdering coup over Allende's democratically elected socialist government in Chile, or Hitler's ascension in the aftermath of the strangled German workers' revolution, or more subtly. Last decade, Brazil's Free Fare movement, MPL, had built momentum for progressive policy reform surrounding public travel infrastructure, and later against police brutality when they were violently repressed. This culminated in mass protests in the country in 2013, and the government backing down over the fare hike which had instigated the movement. However, discontent remained in the wake of this victory, and the MPL didn't know what to do. As one key actor stated to Bevins, we had planned every single detail, down to the moment we would succeed, but we had absolutely no plan of what came after that.
Yep.
In steps the US-funded Free Brazil movement, NBL, named intentionally similar to the MPL. This organization's founder, Fabio Osterman, wanted to create a liberal vanguard, to use the protests not in pursuit of free public transport, but for the removal of tax breaks and subsidies, the opening of markets and more competition. This vanguard seized the space left after the MPL took no further leadership of the movement they began, and reinvigorated protests against the government in 2015, successfully ousting Brazil's first woman president and opening the door for dictatorship apologist, post-fascist and hospital stamp card collector Jair Bolsonaro. Counter-revolution does not exist without revolution. The main ideological currents of the movement, reaction and conservatism, manifest first as a radical refusal of modernity and the rights and values introduced by the Enlightenment in favor of an idealized, often fictional past, and second as a defense of tradition and an attempt to remold it onto present conditions. Fascism is simply the counter-revolutionary form capitalism takes when presented with its own decay. We can even see the necessity of fascism to exist in opposition to the threat of socialism, communism, or anarchism in the fact that despite there currently being no mass movements similar to those that existed in the 1910s to 1930s, fascist ideologues maintain the threat of Marxist insurgency as the main justification for any or all of their policies. Be it floating all-out war with China or clamping down on the radical Marxism of higher education. But what is
all these Marxists with their bachelor's degrees?
Fascism, actually.
Marxism is when you get a bachelor's degree, and the more bachelor's degrees you have, the Marxister it is.
Indeed, the father of fascism, Benito Mussolini, was 2 years into his fight against the Italian Socialist Party, and only 1 year from being granted power after the so-called March on Rome, whilst he was still demanding that other people come up with what his new movement actually stood for.
Italian fascism now requires, under pain of death or worse, of suicide, to provide itself with a body of doctrines. The expression is a rather strong one, but I would desire that within 2 months between now and the National Congress, the philosophy of fascism must be created.
Socialism when you are smart. Wait, fuck!
To a bunch of rich people and then started panicking when he realized he
didn't
have an ideology to back their money up with.
That's really
Essentially,
funny.
fascism is the ideological equivalent of Fire Island. Whilst we all know what fascism looks
Benito Mussolini created fascism cramming for a midnight deadline at 11:30 p.m.? It all makes so much sense now.
like, at least historically, it's also boiled down by modern conservatives and liberals alike to essentially be one side of the coin of government power. Horseshoe theorists abound to point out how totalitarianism may wear a fasces or a star, but both are what follows big government spending. You want Uncle Sam to fix your potholes? Why, so I can have a smoother drive to the gulag, you Nazi fuck? We'll get onto that nonsense shortly, but first and most importantly, fascism is certainly a distinct political form of governance, one defined by submission to hierarchy, mass violence, and rabidly anti-democratic regression, yet it never produced a different economic system compared to the liberalism that came before. Presented both historically and contemporarily as a third-way solution between decaying liberal capitalism and socialist revolution, fascism has always existed to offer capital, forgive the macabre pun, a final solution to its present crisis. There's a trend of anti-politics, as noted by Bevins, in the growth of fascistic movements. What is being proposed by classic fascists like Mussolini?
That fucking course you have anarchism and Islamism on each end. Yeah, listen, man, I'm starting to think horseshoe theory is also a dog whistle the more I think about it.
Fascists like Bolsonaro isn't a political platform per se, but a kind of patriotic common sense. A force steered by a strong leader that will drag a failing nation out of partisan bickering that is, in reality, clearly ideological. Easily the funniest example of this being the Wikipedia entry for the short-lived Dutch Centre Party of the 1980s. The editorializing on this is fucking
I recommend you watch something about Ethiopian history and people to recognize the politics and struggles of my country. I will, but there's a lot to do. There's a lot to do with
National Socialist Party had socialism in
There's just a lot. We're learning about a lot of different shit.
Socialisty things, much of it praised by Western socialists of the anti-communist persuasion at the time. But this was pure opportunism, perfectly encapsulated by Frederick Mullally in Fascism Inside England, as he details the policy platform of Oswald Mosley's British Union of Fascists. Backed from the start by large subsidies from some British industrialists and taking his cue from the Nazi leader, the British leader published a simple programme, 10 Points of Fascism, which promised everything to everybody. The workers were promised work, the middle classes were promised protection from the Bolshevik workers, the capitalists were promised better and more stable profits, the landlords were promised economic security, the small farmers were promised more land and guaranteed prices, the aristocratic families, many of which were closely associated with the BUF, were promised a proper respect for their traditional status.
Whoa, wait, this sounds great. Wait, everybody gets exactly what they want? This fascism thing might be overhated.
Above all, everyone was promised action. Britain first was the watchword. Fascists of the past correctly understood the appetite for socialist policy, such as
Britain first, huh? Something about history, something about being doomed to repeat it. It's hard to say. I don't know.
Of industry, but made no attempt in power to make good on such rhetoric. Indeed, sticking with industry, every fascist movement has, upon seizing power, privatized state institutions en masse. Not only that, but fascism sees economic liberalism, the ideology organized around private property, as entirely incompatible with social liberalism, aka liberal democracy. It is absurd to construct life economically on the tenet of achievement, the value of personality, and so practically on the authority of personality, but to deny the authority of the personality politically and to put in place the law of the great number, of democracy. Therewith must slowly originate a split between the economic and the political conceptions, which one will attempt to bridge by bringing the former into line with the latter. The theory of equality of merit is now not only political, but has already developed into an economic system. Analogous to political democracy on the economic terrain is communism.
This is an argument against democracy?
That was an excerpt from a speech Hitler delivered before the Industry Club of Dusseldorf,
Right.
almost exactly a year before he was appointed Chancellor of Germany. I'm lifting it from Lander's The Apprentice's Sorcerer, which I wouldn't have known about if it hadn't been for Fredder's excellent video, Capitalism and the Third Reich. Go engage with both of those sources for further analysis, detail.
That's an interesting name for a video, too.
The capitalism of Nazi Germany was different to the capitalism of, say, contemporary England. During the Great Depression, for example, whilst most Western states responded to the crisis by seizing private industry that wasn't compliant with new regulations, the Nazis sold government shares in industry to the benefit of the wealthy industrialists who'd backed Hitler's government. Indeed, in the discourse on the origin of the term privatization, many
So it was just super capitalism.
scholars point to
So, like, unironically, fascism is when you are a capitalist, and the capitalister you are, the more fascist it gets. I don't, maybe?
to its first use being in the
They were just more capitalist than even the other capitalist countries around them.
analysis of the Nazis' approach to economy. It went against the dominant trend of capitalism at the time, but it was fundamentally, and as we've seen, purposefully capitalism. As Karl Polanyi, a Hungarian economist writing on fascism during World War II, put it, the origins of the cataclysm lay in the utopian endeavor of economic liberalism to set up a self-regulating market system. Quoting further, Hitler's fascism did not only despise democracy because its abolition allowed him to hold tyrannical power, as some understandings focus on, but rather he viewed the anti-democratic operation of private industry as favorable to the democratic means of regulating that industry and distributing its products. In the fields of thinking, of artistic creation, even of economy, this process of selection still takes place. Here, in all cases, the idea of the personality is dominant. Political life alone has today completely turned away from this most natural principle. Marxism, indeed, presents itself as the perfection of the Jew's attempt at excluding the overwhelming importance of the personality in all domains of human life and replacing it by the number of the masses.
So there's a lot of focus on the personality and on individual, like, this is a hyper individualistic sort of philosophy, isn't it? Also, I can't. It is crazy to see a citation and it's like Hitler, comma A. It's like, listen, I understand it's the format, I know, but it is just wild. Hitler, comma A. Yeah, that's who we're quoting here. Quoting A. Hitler. Yeah, I wonder who that could be. There's just so many people that could be. But yeah, this is it is really weird to just listen to Hitler describe like this philosophy and just hear how hyper individualistic and for lack of better words, like American culture-y it sounds. I don't know. I don't know if I like this Hitler A guy. Yeah, nothing he said so far has really. I don't know if I agree with a lot of his stuff. I don't know who this is, but.
Blush, it's wild that the aversion to public ownership displayed by the Nazis is near identical to the small government advocates in this late stage of capitalism.
Yep.
But it makes a lot more sense when you understand that the limitation of government regulation in the affairs of capital does not A, mean the limit of government intervention in the affairs of private life,
Yep.
and B, does not mean the shrinking of the state. More
Yep.
so, it simultaneously concentrates state power into
Fascism and
fewer
capitalism have
hands
Ash and
more
Pikachu
more
level
into the
synergy.
palms of the
Seems
owning
that way.
class. These people don't want a non-existent administration. They want an administration ultimately ruled by people not chosen by the voter, but by the market, by economic social Darwinism. The economist Sidney Merlin summarizes this process. The party, moreover, facilitates the accumulation of private fortunes and industrial empires by its foremost members and collaborators through privatizations and other measures, thereby intensifying centralization of economic affairs and government in an increasingly narrow group that may for all practical purposes be termed the National Socialist elite.
Yeah.
The primacy of personality, the genius captain of industry over the drudgery of the people and their desire for democratic control was central
that
to
dog
Hitler's
is fucking
political and
scary
economic
looking.
vision. To be certain of this, Hitler was an anti-Marxist. Rather than envisioning a new economic order to reflect developing class consciousness, he took the base of the capitalist economy which he favored and grafted a political superstructure which would best accord with prolonging the existence of it.
No, but you don't understand. They called themselves the National Socialist Workers' Party. They were the National Socialist They're socialists. They're communists. You don't understand. Nazis based their plans off what America was allowed. Based plans off what America was allowed to get away with. So it's not really a coincidence they sound American. Yep. They literally called themselves the National Socialist Party.
National Socialism. Marxists continue to recognize that the relations of production, who labors and who owns, are holding back the mode of production, how things are produced and distributed. Fascism, neo-fascism, and post-fascism, in contrast, seek to cement the relations of production into the most naked form of submissive hierarchy. Additionally, so much of the contemporary pop retelling of the nightmare
Isn't that from Wolfenstein videos? True, America had Nazis before the Nazi Party had Nazis? No, it's more like the Nazis just copied America's homework, especially what the Americans did to the slaves, I think. Like the Nazis, I've heard about this vaguely. The Nazis copied what the Americans did to the slaves. They just copied their homework, and they're like, we could do this to the Jewish people and all of our minorities that we hate.
As the very socialist he only ever pretended to be, but his own writings and speeches lays it quite bare. As the historian Henry Turner summarizes, again quoted in Lander's book, observers have repeatedly alleged that Hitler abandoned the socialistic tenets of the NSDAP during his pursuit of power in order to placate big business patrons. Yet an examination of his writings and utterances revealed that Hitler had nothing to abandon. He had never been a socialist in the sense of favoring.
He took a lot of inspiration from segregation as well, with how organized and industrialized the discrimination was in America at the time. They did a real good job of it, yeah.
Social Darwinist beliefs which were more or less shared throughout the West. Liberal capitalism capitulated with fascism in opposition to nascent socialism and anarchism in the early 20th century, as can be seen both in economic cooperation between US companies and Nazi Germany, for example, and in leaders of the Western world like Winston Churchill, who said in an address to the Roman fascists in 1927, "If I had been Italian, I am sure I should have been entirely with you from the beginning to the end of your victorious struggle against the bestial appetites and passions of Leninism."
Yep.
Obviously, some examples of fascist glazing from before the Second World War.
Again, it's the same shit, right? America actually didn't mind the Nazis at all. They minded that the Nazis eventually were like, we need to take over, and including, we need to blow up this America guy. If at no point did they butt heads on their goals, ideologically, they're fucking aligned.
Can be chalked up to ignorance.
It's just like, it's like your buddy decides that you can't be friends anymore and he wants to fight you now, and it's like, man, come on, really? Fuck, okay, and you have to go and you have to get in a fight with your friend, but it's not a guy you hated. It's a guy you fucked with who decided he wanted to kill you, but you agreed with him on a lot of stuff before this. You just don't agree on the whole you killing me thing.
Which would follow, but fascists have also consistently been rescued after the collapse of their regimes and repotted in the political and economic soil of either their own nations or that of supposedly anti-fascist allies. Italian fascism was kept alive thanks in no small part to NATO and US-led Western intervention. Fascist war criminals, ministers and collaborators were granted amnesty by the liberal democracy established after the war. Neo-fascist movements received funding directly from the CIA and NATO, and neo-fascist leaders like Giorgio Almirante, founder and leader of the Italian social movement, literally the successor to Mussolini's own parties, was even flown to the US to meet then Secretary of State Henry Kissinger to discuss the troubling rise in popular democracy.
Oh my god, he's everywhere. Dude. Oh my god, holy fucking shit. He's fucking. How does he keep showing up, man? Burn in hell forever, you fucking devil. So basically, the Austrian painter was slightly less worse than we thought. No, it's more that we are way worse than you thought. The Austrian painter is not nearly as different to just regular old American presidents as you might have expected.
Democratic support for Italy's Communist Party, as the New York Times reported during the trip.
Fucking Henry
Kissinger. The objective
Kissinger.
of American policy in Italy is to avoid a collapse of the centrist parties that would enable the surging Communist Party to share power. The Communists came within 2 percentage points of the Christian Democrats in local and regional elections in June. I'll continue this trend of recommending texts which go into further detail and encourage you to check out Bez D. Mark's video on Operation Gladio, as well as the rest of his compelling work.
Sure.
Now, why does that logo look familiar? Oh, Jesus Christ! In the post-war period, burgeoning communist movements were either sabotaged by meddling in democratic processes to prevent them from winning power.
Fascism's everywhere. It's coming back everywhere.
When they did, and where those movements collapsed or were destroyed, forms of fascism surely rose in their place. We can even see the ghost of this today with the two-talent approach to the potential primacy of Jeremy Corbyn. Despite being far from a communist revolutionary, not only
is this the motion white boys talk about? It might be.
His election chances by lying about him, along
with white boys mention motion, they just mean fascism. It's possible
to stop themselves winning the election to sabotage him. But you even had standing British Army generals announcing their intentions in the press to stage a mutiny against a Corbyn government. This was a man whose election manifesto committed to NATO funding and renewing Trident. That's the geopolitical moderate that soldiers filmed themselves shooting the picture of whilst he was leader of the Labour Party. And truly, the spectre of communism haunts Europe still. Fascism rose during periods of socialist, communist, or anarchist revolutions, unfailingly as the explicit defense of the inherently undemocratic nature of liberal economics, and is rising again to defend capitalism. Only this time, it doesn't have nearly as organized and revolutionary a working class to fight against, but still it is laying the charge of communism at the foot of, well, pretty much anyone, including centre-right ghouls who engage in such Stalinist dogma as believing in climate change, but not enough to do anything meaningful about it. It also
so real.
In part with the aid of the forces which you'd assume would have been united.
This is moving the Overton window right, yeah? If you call out someone as conservative as Kamala Harris to be a communist, then the goal again, it's you're just moving the overture window further to the right. If Kamala's a communist, what the fuck is like an actual communist? They become unthinkable.
If the powers succeeded in overthrowing Nazism in Germany, what would follow? Not a conservative, socialist, or liberal regime, but extreme communism.
That's probably fine. That's nothing. Don't worry about it. No, you're okay. Yeah, just keep writing. You're probably fine. It's probably nothing.
That is why every communist in the world, from Russia to America, was praying that the Western nation should bully Germany into a communist revolution. He would entreat the government to proceed cautiously.
Earlier that year, the Nazi regime had banned Jews and the politically unreliable from working for the civil service or from attending university. It would soon begin the forced sterilization of some 400,000 queer and disabled people. Man-made horror is entirely within my comprehension.
To some, the October Revolution failed with the liquidation of the Soviet Union. Some, like Traverso, argue it was betrayed
Yeah, I
by
don't
the
know.
violent repression of Kronstadt. But others
Oh, fuck, is the
point
video
to
I
inspiration
suggested?
and
Yeah.
impact on ongoing revolutionary experiments as proof
I
of
think-
its survivability.
I think genuinely it's been a little too hard on my brain. I might stop us at the end of chapter 3 here. I know it sucks because chapter 4 is like, I think like maybe where the hope comes in, or at least some, not hope, but like some of the prescription of like, you know, here's what you could do about this. But I think like trying to understand this video has been a lot on my brain. We might stop around here and then continue later.
Before power can be seized, and in these
Tomorrow,
cases,
that is.
Fascism rarely waits long
After
before
we
it
talk about
emerges.
Cuba.
The aforementioned workers' revolution in Germany existed in two
It's a very
forms.
loaded video.
First,
Yeah,
the
yeah.
United
A lot of
States
it's over my
rule,
head still, I think.
And then
But
as a crushing rout, as the Weimar Republic was declared under social democratic leadership, which then turned their guns, quite literally, on the communists, led by Rosa Luxemburg and Karl Liebknecht, as R. Palm Dutt summarizes. In Germany, the proletarian revolution actually overthrew the old regime in 1918, but the workers were robbed of the fruits of their victory by the social democratic leadership. The revolution, although carried out by the workers against the combined bourgeoisie and old feudal militarist regime, was restricted in its outcomes by the leadership to the tasks of the bourgeois democratic revolution, which had never been completed in Germany. The task of the bourgeoisie in the first stage became to limit the successful revolution. For this purpose, the direct governmental leadership of social democracy was essential to the bourgeoisie as the sole salvation. Only later, as the influence of social democracy weakened and the menace of the proletarian revolution grew in spite of and against social democracy, did the German bourgeoisie require to bring into play the additional weapon of fascism against the working class.
Fascism is the last resort for capitalism to defend itself from revolution. My brain hurts a little. My brain hurts quite a lot. This is a much more loaded video. It's not as one of the goals I had was just like, so you know, let's take one day off from just like learning about like all of the doom and gloom and horror. And while there's still a lot of doom and gloom and horror here, it's like couched enough in like academic fanciful language that it doesn't feel quite as immediately distressing.
Grew, and even as they were ejected from power by it, the Social Democratic Party still supported the government as the lesser evil.
But then I watched it about 3 times to really understand everything, and I'm still not there. Oh yeah.
Support for deeply unpopular austerity policies.
Lord knows I've understood probably about 30% of what I watched.
Leaving any gains that may have been made due to agitation against this distress to instead pass into the hands of fascist propagandists. Even after Hitler was appointed as chancellor, and whilst the
Quick
communists
spice pull out a magic card. I don't know if he will, man. I don't know if he will.
Social Democratic leadership declared that because he had come to power constitutionally and legally, that everyone should just hang tight until the elections in a few months' time.
Ah, yes.
Of course, shortly after his appointment, Hitler used the Reichstag fire to restrict civil liberties, suppress the entire communist and social democratic press, and intimidated voters at the ballot. When Hitler still failed to win a majority vote, he simply arrested all 81 elected communists to create a supermajority after the fact. I'm sure you're aware of the process by which Hitler rose to power. You're smart and very beautiful, if I may say so myself. But what's lacking from a lot of our education on the matter, certainly the education I received, is accounting just how fascism was intertwined with not only established economics, but established power. Social democracy is not the same as fascism. Anyone arguing that an AOC Democratic Party wouldn't be greatly different to Trump's GOP is silly, but also rarely is that the point I see people making.
Right.
It's not that social democracy is identical to fascism, it's that social democracy, in rejecting any pretense of developing society beyond capitalism, does not have an answer to fascism. That the conditions created by social democracy allow fascism to flourish, and social democrats often will align with fascism if it means suppressing an actual or potential revolution up until the point they themselves are suppressed.
Yes, it's the center left or whatever are often, you know, more concerned with the far left than the far right.
Similarly with how the SDP became disconnected from their working class base in order to perpetuate
My favorite picture of Spice is of him throwing a brick at a guy in riot gear. That is an awesome picture.
the capitalist mode of
I have
production
not seen
through
it, but that is
anti-war policy.
the idea of that is very
Liberalism
cool.
and social democracy today fall over themselves to appeal to reactionary framing on every topic, from immigration to climate initiatives to trans people. As I was writing this, Sir Keir Starmer, the gormless fuckshite presently running my wretched island, straight up paraphrased Enoch Powell, a famous neo-fascist, in a speech about immigration, warning that we were becoming an island of strangers and insisting that British citizenship must become even harder to obtain for
non-English speakers. Deeply fucking rich from a country whose 5th largest export is retired ball bags who live in Valencia and refuse to learn Spanish. Trump is doing awful things, escalating terrifying rhetoric and meeting it with action, but many of the policies and systems he's using were being used by the previous administration in largely the same way.
This is like the big explosion, brain explosion, I think, is realizing that Trump is not significantly worse or anything like that than like almost any other US president before him. You know what I mean? It's all the same playbook over and over again. Hearing, was it Kennedy or is it Kissinger? So whoever fucking told Pinochet that he was just a victim of the fake leftist news, like, you know, it's been the same shit forever. He is not particularly, like, you know, Obama won a Nobel Peace Prize while actively bombing children in the Middle East. It might have happened during his acceptance speech. That's Kissinger, I'm pretty sure. That sounds right. Yeah.
Pushing the envelope, but the letter had been written long before.
Correct.
There, of course, comes a time where liberal and social democratic movements diverge from fascism. Self-identifying social democrats fought against fascism in the Spanish Civil War, were instrumental partisans during the Italian resistance movement against Mussolini, and were themselves targeted and murderously suppressed by the Nazi regime shortly after the communists.
But that was Kissinger, but yeah, I mean, your presentation on Cuba pretty clearly shows they're all
social
bastards.
democracy and certainly liberalism will be late to the party, as it were, in terms of organized.
Yes, exactly. Yeah, Trump is just
there does come a point at which
Trump is just everything like multiplied by like 1.1 or 1.2 and significantly worse at hiding it, or just cares less about hiding it. You know.
Fast support for fascism,
but it's the same. It's the same.
Transitions into active resistance. Even today, socialists and social democrats in Starmer's
It's just like orange juice with pulp is Trump, and orange juice without pulp is like Biden and Obama or whatever.
Are pushing against the hyper-liberal direction leadership has taken, and have continued to turn up to actions against fascism despite their party's woeful response and
And hates more kinds of people? No, not really. Not really. Like, there's no. I don't think there's like a fundamental difference in like who the bigotry affects. It's just more so the extent to which it happens.
Support is limited. Much like in the Weimar Republic, a fetishization of constitutional procedure often wins out over the popular demand for struggle against the dereliction of democracy, legal as such attacks may be to begin with.
But fascism doesn't come from nowhere. It's not a grassroots or revolutionary movement. It never was, nor ever will be. Mussolini's march on Rome wasn't a popular revolution, but a parade that culminated in the king granting him a position of power. Hitler was given premiership by Hindenburg, ironically the lesser evil candidate.
Compared to everyone else, Trump's a terrible liar. Yeah, I think Trump just has a lower like deception stat. You know what I mean? Oh, you know, Obama was really able to make you believe that he was like, you know, he's the fucking candidate for change. He's like a good person. Trump is just like, I'm the member of the I'm gonna kill fucking all of you party, and if you vote for me, then you're all gonna die, but I'll kill the brown people first.
To stop Hitler,
you know, I guess that works now. I guess that's actually enough now.
By terrorizing voters. Regardless of what state of development it's in, fascism is far more about elite capture than popular will. Just as the Nazi Party's growth was massively accelerated by the zealous collaboration of Julius Streicher, publisher of the national tabloid Der Stürmer, which promoted Nazi ideology.
Also, just want to say, Spice did amazing on this video. It's very well made and some of his best work. Oh, it is just very dense. But it's a very good video. Assuming Biden inspired less hostility towards gay, trans, etc. people? Maybe with lip service. In policy, I'm not so sure, but maybe.
It's never about presenting a popular platform.
Less definitely, yes, but was he inspiring no hostility? Was he anti-homophobic? I don't know about all that. But yeah, certainly Trump, again, everything multiplied by, you know, about 1.2, 1.3, and significantly more publicized.
Fascism is something that our states engage in every day, only out of our zone of interest.
They seem so like us. That's what makes it so shocking. War is no longer something visited upon impoverished and remote populations.
Them's big objection was they didn't fill out the right paperwork. Yeah, it's like, well, if you want to remove trans people's ability to, like, participate in society, you gotta get that shit through Congress, man. Like, go through the proper channels. Biden do anything again versus the LGBT just didn't do anything for it either, even when things needed to be done.
There are three things I want to get at here, and they all branch from a text I referenced earlier. Martin Niemöller's poem First They Came is famous. Here it is in the Holocaust Encyclopedia as an emblematic summary of the Nazis' escalating repression. You're almost certainly taught this in school, maybe in a history class surrounding the topic of scapegoats. Of course, this is only most of the poem. There's a verse previous to this. First they came for the communists, and I didn't speak up because I wasn't a communist.
I know this one.
It's a subtle redaction, especially considering that for most people, socialism and communism are interchangeable, but this omission still goes some way to obfuscating both the difference between the groups at the time
they came for the communists
the initial brunt of repression. Except that this full quote isn't the full quote.
Oh.
Or rather, it's a self-editorialized condensation. Niemöller absolutely did pen this, but he also spoke at great length on this period in many places, and often covered ground not touched in his poem.
Yeah, citizens are tough. There's a mod apparently that lets you pick your RNG.
Philosophical Library in 1947, he includes a deeply important and fatally overlooked group persecuted by fascism.
Oh.
The sick ones were then put aside, the so-called incurables. I remember a conversation with a man who claimed to be a Christian. He decided, this might be right. The state spends a lot of money on those incurable people, and they are only a burden to all others. Is not doing away with them the best for everybody?
I did have a hour-long argument, actually hours-long argument with a white lady in university once that just thought that why wouldn't it wouldn't be that bad to just kill everyone over the age of 75 because they're just a burden on the system. And I was like, well, and this is like, I was a conservative back. I was like, you know, I was a conservative back then, and yet there's always a bigger fish, I guess.
Idealization of economic liberalism paired very well with the development of
They're just giving them a Christian death. Yo! So true, bro. Get them in the fucking airplane, sedate them, and throw them out. That's so real.
To queer people, gay and trans alike, to anyone who is decreed to be feeble-minded. Not to plug my own shit here, but I've got an old video on eugenics if you'd be interested in finding out more about it. I think it largely holds up. The development of the Nazis' exterminationist programs did not begin how they ended. With the
Let's point out in The
those
Giver
with
that they
life
do that,
unworthy
and
of
it's
life
shown
as
as
their
horror.
hellish designation read. But it was instead predicated on the
Wait, do
humane
what?
practice of forced sterilization of such people, which was rife in the world long before a swastika stained the skyline of Berlin. Winston Churchill, yeah, that guy again, was the vice president of the First International Eugenics Congress in 1912. The state of Indiana in the
Kill everyone over a certain age? Oh, yeah.
Voluntary sterilization law in 1907, informed by eugenicists who argued that
Also a
criminality,
banger
mental
video, though
problems, and
extremely
even
upsetting.
poverty
The other
were
Spice
hereditary,
video?
with
Interesting.
more than 30 states soon following. Hitler's notion of Aryan purity was pseudoscience enacted with terrible bloodshed, but it was also just a continuation of a reasonably standard policy of extermination throughout the West. Queer and disabled persecution, of course, weren't the only fascistic premonitions. There's something that, again, was much the norm for the rest of the Western world, which would directly inspire some of fascism's most heinous policies, and which is lacking from any version of Niemöller's writings. On screen right now is a Haarfar Bentafel. You've probably seen something similar if you've ever been to a hair salon or wig shop. It's a simple device which some people use today to match their hair type to a set number in order to pick out extensions that won't clash. This was also a tool whose inventor, Eugene Fischer, used to carry out the Namibian genocide. I'll let Angela Saine's words do justice to this horror as she recalls a conversation between her and the historian Subhadra Das. Fischer used this device in Namibia in 1908 to establish the relative whiteness of mixed race people, reveals Das. In what is now remembered as the first genocide of the 20th century, in the 4 years preceding 1908, Germany killed tens of thousands of Namibians as they rebelled against colonial rule. According to some estimates,
They literally did the fucking South Park or like thing or the Family Guy thing where they had the color palette up, they held it up to your face, and if you were white enough, you fucking got to go through, and if it was dark enough, they just killed you? You can't even satirize this shit. They are too cartoonishly evil to satirize. There is nothing that you can come up with that is too outlandish for them to do.
To be studied by race scientists. Namibia was the first place that the Germans built a concentration camp. Depending on where your hair fell on this scale was the difference between life and death. Similar methods would be used again, of course, a few decades later. Fischer's work would also go on to inform the Nuremberg laws of 1935, outlawing intermarriage between Jews, blacks, and other Germans.
Oh, fun.
He became a member of the Nazi Party in 1940.
What took him so long?
The imperial boomerang, a phrase coined by Aimé Césaire and expanded upon by his student Franz Fanon, explains how the repressive structures imposed upon an indigenous people by a colonizing force will come home to roost, both psychologically through desensitization and materially. Just as Fischer's race science in Namibia was turned on his compatriots at home, we can see how mass surveillance technology developed and experimented upon Palestinian residents in the West Bank has been exported far and wide, from the UAE to Mexico to Morocco, and even back into the imperial core, with Catalan's pro-independence movement being spied on using Israeli tech. Anthony Lowenstein's book, The Palestine Laboratory, is a shocking chronicle of how directly the repression and extermination of the Palestinian people feeds back.
You want a
into
fun
state
Spice video?
repression
Has one where he talks about
of course,
goblins?
it's not just Israel.
Or
During
it?
the
It has one where he talks
anti-ICE
where
protests in
he
LA,
talks about
MQ-9
goblins.
drones were
He really likes
flown over
goblins. I'm not sure
streets
what
to
said in this
monitor
video.
the
Spice
protests.
does use its, and they will only explain why in a place where. And they will only explain why in a place where they can never be recorded because it feels right. Gotcha. You did say he in one of the, which confused me. It has one where he talks about goblins.
Those are the same drones currently being used by the US government to bomb Yemen.
Sure, it did a great
It's
job
all
on this video.
one
I was
struggle.
mistaken. Gotcha.
Returning to the fascist regimes of the past, Hitler himself directly compared his policy of Lebensraum, the German colonization of Eastern Europe, to manifest destiny, saying 3 months after the invasion
Tried to correct
of the
myself?
USSR,
No, it's all good.
there's
It's all
only
good.
one
I'm not trying to like call you out. I'm just saying I don't know. I didn't understand. So when you said it and then he, I was like, wait, is this like a joke or is this actually how they like? Is this like some kind of joke where like I'm an it? It's like a joke, or if is this actually how it identifies?
To Germanize this country by immigration of Germans and to look upon the natives as slur for Native Americans.
Ah, yes.
Nazi officials claimed
Slur for Native
fighting
Americans.
A colonial war in countries like Ukraine.
Welcome to McDonald's. What can I get you? How can I have a slur for Native Americans? Spices in it, and they love being in it. Awesome.
Conquering the Slavic territories.
Does they a genuine like I don't know if this is like a genuine question. If someone identifies as it, is referring to them as they, like not correct?
Would have instituted a hunger plan,
Should you refer to them as it
starvation, which would have blockaded and starved a planned 30 million people in the Western
I think so,
USSR.
right?
Starvation, which had already been enacted in established occupations of Soviet territory, which had killed 7 million Soviet citizens, Jews and Gentiles alike. This policy of creating famine to clear a people from land fit for settling is, of course, a significant element of American, British, and other colonial histories. These crimes against humanity, internal and external, are not solely justified with racist bunk or conspiracy theories, but also with economic.
So anything's fine as long as it's
there
not
are
he
any
and
number
she,
of
her, but
atrocities
the
that have
further
been committed against indigenous people on the claim that a settler exclave would gain more value from the stolen land, or where people even today question why the state ought to provide the ability for disabled people who can't contribute to society to live. Language couched exclusively in terms of economic productivity.
Anyone that doesn't work, says they can't work, doesn't matter what the reason is, should not live comfortably. The real scandal here is
what? I mean, I guess I'm not surprised at this point.
The phenomenal, unfair transfer of wealth from those that work to those that don't work.
Fascism begins outside the borders of the developing fascistic
It's brain breaking, man. How are you so close?
metropole, both geographically and politically. Germany's first concentration camp was in Namibia, and all of the Nazis' death camps during the Holocaust, Auschwitz, Belzec, Klemko, were all established on occupied foreign soil.
Yeah.
Similarly, mass detention and concentration camps are being organized by modern Western nations, but all of them either symbolically floating and detached from the mainland, or filled in agreement with similarly minded foreign governments.
Good old alligator Alcatraz.
But as resistance to this momentum fails to stop it, those camps are coming closer and closer to home. For capitalism to survive dire crises, it welcomes
I think
fascist
the state in the
repression,
Dustmore
but for
video where it does spend time explaining the horror is extremely queer, much less downer of a video, and just as good as this one. True.
fascism to survive, it must redefine what acceptable repression looks like. Today, it would be unconscionable for the Trump regime to execute people with disabilities, and his joke to the El Salvadoran president that the next to be deported will be the homegrowns is rightfully railed against. But RFK's rhetoric about putting an end to autistic children and the
extremely queer is apparently auto-moddable. What
pushing
the
the
hell?
needle into the fun zone at a horrifying pace. And before 2016, much of what Trump has already gotten away with was also unthinkable. At least this openly. Disabled campaigners in the UK, for example, have been fighting our current government's cutting of personal independence payments, which will demonstrably lead to hardship and death for disabled people, and this is just the latest in a long list of eugenic-adjacent anti-disabled policies. From previous tough decision cuts to disability benefits, or even more horrific,
Tough
like do
decision
not resuscitate
cuts.
orders being issued by doctors for disabled and elderly people during the first waves of COVID without the patient's knowledge or consent.
Oh! I fucking love eugenics. I love being a Nazi.
Additionally, much of what people in the Imperial Core are reckoning with now was already happening to uncountable people throughout the world.
I think that counts as social murder. No, that's just murder. Yeah, that's just murder.
The acceptable or the complicated realm of geopolitical conflict, as Césaire writes. Before they were its victims.
I'm sorry to think about this video being this much of a downer. I mean, honestly, it is still, again, it is so academic about it in some ways that it is still like significantly less of a downer than what we've been doing for the past little bit. But
they were
you know,
that
the hordes never escape.
Before it was inflicted on them, that they absolved it.
Or you can never escape the hordes. They're around you all the time.
Until then, it had been applied only to non-European peoples. That they have cultivated that Nazism, that they are responsible for it, and that before engulfing the whole edifice of Western Christian civilization in its redded waters, it oozes, seeps, and trickles from every crack. It should be remembered that Niemöller, for all the work he did opposing Nazism after they came to power, had been a voter and vocal supporter of the party up until their policies directly began to restrict his religious practice. First They Came is not a confession of cowardice, but of complicity. This strikes at the core of the conflation between communism and fascism, between revolution and counter-revolution. Scholars like Traverso, by no means an apologist for the USSR, directly tackles the superficial banner of totalitarianism, pointing out the stark differences between the ideological and economic roots of the two systems. Fascism achieved a fusion of three different struggles: a colonial assault against the Slavic world, a political struggle against communism and the Soviet Union, and a racial fight against the Jews, into a unique war of conquest and extermination. This means that its model could not be Bolshevism. It would be more relevant and coherent to find its model in the colonial wars of the 19th century, which were actually conceived by European imperialist powers as the appropriation of living space, a colossal plundering of territories, a process of enslavement of the indigenous peoples, and, according to a social Darwinist model, the destruction of the indigenous peoples. The historical laboratory for Nazi crimes was not Bolshevik Russia, but the colonial past of Western civilization, in the classical era of industrial capitalism, imperialist colonialism, and political liberalism. Simplistic horseshoe framing is, at best, born from the ignorance of the ongoing crimes of the so-called rational
anarchism
center,
and
at
Islamism.
worst,
What
a
are
means
we?
to disguise
What
the
the
liberal
fuck?
free market roots of Nazism, because, as Walter Rodney says, they would like some of the bitterness against fascism to be transferred to those who would seek to construct socialism. I do recommend people read Rodney's The Russian Revolution, A View from the Third World for some sharp analysis of both the revolution and subsequent regime's conditions, flaws, and triumphs.
I do got to read more
This
shit by
brings us
Walter
to a
Rodney
final
too.
and
There's so much to
difficult
read.
Element of fascism. Yes, it is imposed from above rather than being revolutionary. Yes, it is an opportunistic movement historic in its valorization of fraudsters and profiteers, but that doesn't change the fact that millions of people who would reject the label of fascist have voted in favor of its primacy. The imperial boomerang does not only shape political architects, with characters like Farage insisting that Britain has nothing to apologize apologise for regarding its colonial past. Imperialism and national chauvinism also shapes the psychology of worker movements, as Lenin observed on America's position in the early decades of the 20th century. In the United States, immigrants from Eastern and Southern Europe are engaged in the most poorly paid occupations, whilst American workers provide the highest
Spike keeps a
percentage
list
of
of books it
overseers
suggests
or
in the
better paid
description, if I remember right.
Imperialism has the tendency to create privileged sections even among the workers
That's
and
very
to detach
helpful.
them from the main proletarian masses. He saw how the exploitation of foreign nations by any given empire and its monopolistic position on the world market, which Gramsci would later develop into his hegemonic theory, created a section of the proletariat whose nations would become socially bourgeois, and a further section of workers willing to be led by bourgeois leaders, or at least those amenable to bourgeois order. This is how we get the perplexing sight of working class builders attacking peace demonstrators, or union leadership refusing to cut funding for anti-worker imperialist political parties. In seeking relative short-term improvement for one's own personal standing, not only have reactionary elements of the working class, even elements organised in the workers' movement, broken the prospects, trust and bodies of other members of their class, but they also have kept themselves forever locked away from any truly liberatory potentials.
Reluctance to stand in solidarity with people directly impacted or under the heel of imperialism, the Palestinian people presently notable amongst them, is not only inhumane, but also sabotages one's own fight. Again, the same
Oppression of one is oppression of all type shit.
The West Bank is being sold to companies and governments who use it to spy on labor organizers, queer rights campaigners, and climate activists. It's all one struggle, and rejecting that reality puts everyone in peril. We have yet to understand, Baldwin said in 1987, that if I am starving, you are in danger. People think that my danger makes them safe. They're in trouble. Additionally, the idea that the majority of people who have voted for fascistic policy platforms were simply duped, winners of the Fell For It Again award, or aren't aware of basic injustices planned or currently being carried out, is unrealistic. Misinformation does play a role in gathering support for repression, as any number of vox pops of policy-ignorant Trump supporters demonstrates, but it's also easy to save face by feigning regretful ignorance when the platform you supported ends up hurting you or doing Nazi shit. Even when they chastise Trump for overstepping his promises, proponents of the administration often do so while still valorizing his original agenda. Destroying the well-being of minorities and considering the continuation of inhumane structures as acceptable sacrifices if it means getting what you think is a tax break.
Keep trying to think of a spice video that isn't so heavy and like I really can't. We cannot escape the horrors. Yeah, I mean, unless you are willfully turning a blind eye, it's there.
Fucking murdered. Fascism thrives in apathy, in you accepting the new status quo, in you occasionally saying, "God, isn't it awful?" and then going back to brunch. It thrives in the void left by a fragmented community, where social services are cut, where your workplace is designed to separate you from your colleagues, where the idea of getting 10 people together to do something about a problem in your neighborhood seems an impossible feat. In feeling disconnected and powerless, fascism promises not community and agency, but conformity and benign submission. You can have connections again, based not on the hard work of meeting your neighbors, getting to know your workplace, or involving yourself in local clubs. I mean, who even wants that, really? Didn't Sartre say that hell is other people? You feel it, right? All those idiots who just can't stop fucking it up for the rest of us? Amassed individuals, cutthroat, selfish, and uncaring? No, you can have connection.
Spice, the person who showed this to me is part of why I hold them in high regard. That's
and
very
sure,
fair.
I mean, a whole bunch of people are made to miss out in one way or
Hasanabi
another.
spotted.
I'm not talking about you. You don't even have to do anything yourself, unless you want to. Relax. It's just the undesirables we're dealing with. The terrorists, the corruptors of youth, the life unworthy of life. You don't seriously contend that those people deserve liberal kid gloves. They'll be taken from other places. They'll go somewhere far away. You won't even have to look outside if you don't want to. You don't even have to check to see if we're being honest. Isn't it easier to trust us? To know your lineage? To know your place? Isn't the world so beautiful if you just pretend it is? Hell is so.
Yep. That's the thing. That's the hey. So I'm sorry that we're gonna end there, because I feel like that is probably what was a very academic sort of conversation up until now got like a lot more real right there. I think. So yeah, you know, but it's true. It's true. This is exactly what we were talking about, right? You can't escape the horrors. Yeah, but it's tempting to just pretend they don't exist. But if you pretend they don't exist, they will make themselves unignorable to you in due time, as they are currently for many people less privileged than yourself. It's just kind of the way of the world, right? Well, I mean, at least currently, the way the world is, where the system is constantly seeking unrestrained growth and will oppress whoever it needs to, who is not more useful to them, unoppressed than oppressed, or relatively unoppressed than oppressed. And that bar keeps shrinking and shrinking and shrinking and shrinking over time, right? So, goddamn. Good video, though. I feel like we need a detox after this. This was the detox. This was the detox, Cassie. You should have seen the shit we were reading about Cuba yesterday. This literally was the detox. You should have seen. Were you there for the Operation Condor video, Cassie? Cassie, this was the detox. We need a detox from the detox. Maybe we'll play some Disco Elysium at some point. It feels like a very relevant video game. I'm literally building an Uma right now. That's my detox. My detox is going to be, I'm going to go outside, I'm going to eat some yummy food, and I'm going to play some Three Houses. But for now, sorry to stop 75% of the way through. We don't detox with crack. Sometimes you need it to take the edge off, man. Sorry to stop 75% of the way through. We will continue this video. We will finish this video on a different day. But this was not a sit back and relax and watch. This is, even outside of it being like serious, it's just very dense with information, and my brain's gone. And I think at this point, the next hour is just going to be me doing, you know, the fucking XQC where I just watch it and every now and then I go like, haha, and then go there. Like it's gonna be unethical reacts, as it were. So if it's okay, man, I suggest a silly goblin video. Maybe you can suggest it. You could do whatever you want. Whether or not I follow the suggestion is a whole other thing, but you certainly may. But yeah, fellas, for now, have a wonderful rest of your day. I'm gonna go eat. I feel my blood pressure dropping. My brain has been using too many calories, and I will see you tomorrow for probably Cuba Part 3, getting through Obama and then running up that presentation from Reagan to Obama. But for now, peace.